Ye Wutian gently moved Chen Kaixin onto the bed and began to massage her. Having finished with the lower back, the doctor moved on to the shoulder girdle. The girl didn't react. Wutian began to realize little by little that it was because of him. But he still didn't believe it as he thought that Kaixin hated him. He closed his eyes and pondered the strange and incomprehensible logic of women. Chen began to slowly come to her senses and lazily opened her left eye. He continued to massage her back and neck. Kexin turned around to Wuqian. She was driven into a blush by this procedure. The young man's eyes darted in different directions like a caught thief. He began to make excuses that the girl had misunderstood him. Kexin kept lying down, turning away unhappily. Suddenly the girl felt Yushin touch her chest. He quickly lifted Chen in his arms and she asked indignantly what that meant. Ye didn't say a word, just carried Kexin and she fell silent. The young man brought her into the kitchen. The table was already set for the girl. Gently sitting Kaixin down on a chair, Ye said that she needed to eat better, or she wouldn't be able to run the company. Uchan noticed that she wasn't eating and assumed she didn't like the food. Kaixin was confused. She kept remembering that past Wutian. He didn't look like Ye at all, and Chen asked if it was definitely him. Yuqian asked what exactly she meant. Kaixin clarified that she feels a very strong change in him. He asked to say exactly what it is that makes him different. The young man realized that Chen had noticed everything. She said she just felt it and couldn't describe it in words. He smiled and said he hadn't changed at all, and she was just imagining things. He asked her to hurry up with her food, then he would take her home. Chen asked him if he really disliked her that much. Yuqian said she was beautiful and he didn't mean that at all. Kexin exclaimed that he was always trying to stay away from her. Yuqian remained silent. He couldn't explain anything anyway. Kexin asked what made him sign the prenup dissolution agreement. Ye asked if she hated him. The girl absent-mindedly replied that she definitely used to hate it. But now she didn't know. Wuxian said she should hate him, because their engagement was a big mistake. Chen asked why then now, and not before all this. The young man replied that he probably just didn't realize it all before. Kexin put her foot down and asked him about his future plans. The young man interjected and hesitated. Just then he replied that he had simply grand plans for the future. Kexin said that right now Ye doesn't have a stable job. Besides, Ye's family doesn't want to see him. Summarizing, Chen asked if Wutian wanted to return to the company. The young man excitedly asked why she was worried about him. It seems the irreparable had happened and he really liked the girl. Chen sat back and pondered his words. Uchan asked her to hurry up and eat more. Then he would write the girl a recipe for a few dishes. He reflected that Chen didn't bother to refute his words. It turns out that he managed to charm the fiancée of the first owner of the body. Kaixin clarified whether the food prepared was his family's signature recipe. Yutian said that he had told her earlier about his family having many secret recipes for various dishes. Suddenly there was a quiet knock at the door. Kexin turned around in surprise. She wondered who it could be. She got up leisurely and went to open the door. On the other side of the door stood Hao, and the girl was very surprised. He was worried about Chen and asked if she was okay. Kexin replied that she was fine. Hao looked at the girl carefully. He was finally able to relax. Chen was fine. He walked past Kexin and went into the hotel room. Placing his hand on Wutian's shoulder, Hao praised him and told him that he had done everything right this time. Yuqian dismissed his hand with a careless gesture and said that was what anyone would do in his place. Kexin came back and asked what they were talking about. Hao assured the girl that she had nothing to worry about now. Wutian had beaten the fat man badly, and now he would never come near her again. Hao offered to drive Chen home. He also said that the girl should go home soon, and he was a little tired himself. Kexin said she needed to talk to Wuqian for a bit so he could go. Hao frowned. He tried to figure out what was in Kexin's mind. Covering his eyes for a moment, the young man assessed his chances and decided to leave after all. Leaving the room, he slammed the door with all his might. Wuxian said he's actually not a bad guy and would be a decent man for Chen. Kexin stared at him for a long time, eyes wide. Finally, she asked Uchan if he believed in fate. The young man asked what exactly she meant. The girl smiled and said that since he didn't understand, she was going home. Uchan was a little late in his thinking and asked what it meant. Kexin walked out of the room into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Then she moved to the door opposite and stood there for a moment, as if in doubt. Kexin rummaged in her pockets and found the right key. Turning the key in the keyhole, Chen opened the door. Once in the room across the hall, Kexin slammed the door. Private clinic. Yutian was doing a procedure in the corner of the room. Stepping out from behind the screen, he wiped his forehead with relief. He held up a towel and assured me he would be fine. Cici asked when her grandfather would make a full recovery. Her father said everyone in Ning's family hopes the man will recover soon. Yutian said it wouldn't be that fast and recalled a famous proverb. Cici and his father stood waiting impatiently for the doctor's verdict. Professor Wu came to the ward for a checkup and said that Ning Lao would be able to get back on his feet in a month at the latest. The man looked happily at his daughter and said it was much faster than they expected. He clarified that he could speed up several times and put him on his feet much faster. Cici lit up at the idea and rejoiced. Yuqian smiled and said his price per month is 10 million. If they need it faster, they know what to do. A frightened Wu clasped his hand over his mouth and said that neither had agreed with him not to mention money at all. The man squinted his eyes and asked what amount would suit him. Uthian said that if he gets 25 million, their relative will be out of bed in 5 days. He believes that this is insignificant money for their family. Sitsi was outraged and prepared to kill him immediately, but her father held her back and said he would pay Uchian. Dr. E smiled. Things were working out pretty well. When Sitsi approached him, Uchan said she needed to learn to contain her anger. Siki rebuked her father that he shouldn't have promised 25 million to Uchian. She was sure that even 100 million wouldn't be able to get her grandfather out of bed. Uchan was riding his bicycle, whistling a song merrily. Suddenly he smelled danger and turned around. A large truck was coming straight at him. Uchan tried to figure out what was going on. The dump truck was driving right behind him, trying to pull him under, and E had to swerve in different directions. The truck driver did not give up and tried to run over the cyclist. Soon the truck, gaining speed, was right behind E's back. Uchan finally realized that this was no accident, and the driver was trying to run him down and jumped off his bike into the bushes. The dump truck had slowed down and was now driving straight at the doctor. Utian lay in the bushes and realized that he had nowhere to run. The bike would not hold up the dump truck. The truck driver was smiling. He was about to fulfill an expensive order. He didn't see the laser sight on his forehead. At the moment when he was supposed to run over the bike and then its owner, everything happened. A bullet fired from a sniper rifle ended his existence. The truck lost control and crashed at full speed into a pole nearby. The concrete pillar snapped and tilted slightly to the side. Uchin looked around the truck thoughtfully. The pillar meanwhile bowed even lower. Uchin wondered who could have wished him dead. Xiaomei jumped out of the police car and asked Ye if he needed to go to the hospital. Uchin says he's fine, but the truck is dead and he's asking for help finding out who's behind it all. Zhang said she would take it from there and let her know when she knew something. She added that the bald bank robber was able to escape. Wutian was very annoyed because the robber could come and take revenge on him. He asked Zhang why she was so useless. Xiaomei tried to justify that she didn't mean it at all and the intruder had killed one of her co-workers. He said that it was her own fault for being poorly guarded. Only one person had died, and she should be glad that no others had been killed. The young man yelled that he wouldn't have helped if he had known this would happen. Mei squealed back, wondering what he wanted now. Yuchen said he needed round-the-clock protection and warned that her mother would get no treatment if anything happened to him. Xiaomei was indignant and could barely contain herself. She hummed and said she would report his request to her superior. Yuchen walked down the alley, habitually shoving his hands in his pockets. Before reaching the end of the corner, he stopped and motioned for the girl to come out of there. Sitsi did wait for him around the corner and asked how he knew. Uchan said he guessed and asked if she had sent snipers to protect him. Sitsi confirmed the information and said they would soon find out who was behind it. She suggested that the main suspect is the Liu family. However, it is unlikely that Liu Kongyu himself was involved. Wushin wondered who it could be, if not Liu, and asked if anyone else knew what had happened to her grandfather. Siki said that it was known to many people. Yes speculated that he might be being hunted to keep the patient on his feet and asked the girl to find the culprits. Siki wasn't entirely happy about it, but said she understood. The country villa of the E family. The E family patriarch asked about Yuchin's departure from the sanitarium. He interrogated his granddaughter if she was sure of that. The girl replied that he was seen coming out of there with Wu Kun Sheng. Waving his hands, the son told the patriarch that E had beaten the guy. He cried out that Ye beat up Liu Fu, and everyone is just talking about it. And some people slander their family and say that they are bullying others. The girl told her uncle that he was her brother after all, and besides, he was the son of his younger brother. The patriarch asked Fei Chao how many times she had seen Ye since his return. Fei remembered that once he was in a very bad mood and didn't want to see anyone from the Ye family. The girl added that Ye really changed and gave Chen Kaixin 29 million. The girl's uncle said he had received bad news. Someone intended to kill Uchian, but he was shot by someone else. The patriarch thought for a moment. Someone causes an accident to kill Ye and dies himself from a stray bullet. Very few people shoot each other in Dongcheng. Then he remembered the sanitarium and wondered what the big shot was there. He asked Fei to find out more about the sanitarium and the VIP patient. He figured that if Ye Wutian was connected to some big family, it would be in the patriarch's favor, and they could take the guy back to Ye's family. The next day in the city center, a local cafeteria offered Lanzhou-style beef noodles. There wasn't much of an audience in the room. Everyone was chatting amongst themselves in a low voice. He greedily devoured the noodles, sprinkling them all over the table. The journalist looked at him sullenly and listened to him slurp. Unable to stand it, the girl asked to cover her mouth. He splattered his entire face. Uchan said that she could have invited him to dinner herself instead of eating at his expense. After all, she was the one who had business with him. The journalist smirked and asked if he didn't want to spend the evening with a pretty girl. She asked him to say more about the assassination attempt. Yutian sighed that she knew everything, as expected from the daughter of the city's mayor. He added that he wasn't going to tell her anything, The girl rebuked him that she had done so much for him, and moreover, they were friends. Uchan thought that surely the mayor of the city must have too many enemies, and so his friendship with his daughter would sooner or later come out sideways. The cafeteria doors creaked open, announcing the arrival of new customers. An irritated Shu Hong and his companion broke through the door. The journalist and Yushin recognized him at once. The guy immediately flew up to Utina and started yelling for him to confess what he had done to him. The woman gently placed a hand on his shoulder and reminded him that she had to talk to Uchan herself first. He carelessly told the journalist that this was the scoop. The guy he had personally smashed up an expensive car. The girl smiled and pulled out a notepad and pen, saying that would do as well. The woman introduced herself as Liu Shenyu and asked if she could address Wu Tian. Wu Tian looked at her carefully and caught himself thinking that Chang Shu Hong had a very pretty mother. Shu Hong turned purple and shouted that he had to stop staring at his mother, and that it was time to tell him what Ye had done to him. Shen Yu handed Wu Tian a check for the trouble he had caused and asked for an apology on Shu Hong's behalf. After examining the check, the amount in which exceeded the value of the car by 7.5 million, Yi said he was willing to listen to them. Yuchen asked what the visitors needed from him. Liu said her son hasn't been himself lately, waking up in the middle of the night screaming and twitching. Yuchen said that with these symptoms, the guy needs to go to the hospital, not him. Shu Hong pounced on Ye and demanded to tell him what happened to him, since Wu Tian had already been paid. Ye smiled and said that Shu Hong was clearly overestimating him and he really had nothing to do with it. Wu Tian advised him to see a doctor. Shen Yu began to beg him and lament that she had not heard much about him. She tearfully asked him to take pity on the unfortunate child. Uchan assured her that he had nothing to do with it and would confess if he was guilty. He said it would be better to consult a specialist. He called out to the journalist, saying they had to go. The girl caught up with him at the door. Angry Shu Hong asked his mother if they could let the young man go so easily. Shen Yu said they should go home, and then it would be up to them to see what to do. Shu Hong grabbed his head and shouted that he wouldn't be able to sleep at night then. These nightmares were simply unbearable for him. Shen Yu convinces her son that she will try to negotiate with Yuchen some more. Yuchen was watching his neighbor's apartment from across the street with binoculars. Unfortunately, she wasn't home today. The young man reproached himself that there was no need to buy binoculars. There was no one to peep at anyway. There were some strange noises at his door. Yuchen turned and went to see what it was all about. He opened the front door lock and pushed the handle. He cautiously looked out into the hallway to see who had come in. He had to be very surprised. Zhang Xiaomei stood outside the door, leaning on her traveling suitcase. He asked the girl what she was doing here. She silently entered the apartment. Xiaomei revealed that she had made an agreement with her superiors and would be providing security for him around the clock from this day forward. Yuchen said it was just a joke. Zhang carelessly let go of the handle of the travel suitcase. The valise rolled onward by inertia. The girl immediately noticed Yi's bed under the window. She climbed onto it, got down on all fours, and began to admire the view from the window. Xiaomei noted that the bed was quite soft and this room would suit her quite well. Uchan wasted no time and enjoyed the sight of her buttocks, noting that the girl's figure suited him very well. Mei noticed that her landlord was giving her a hard look. She immediately sat on the bed and said that Yeo was letting himself get too much. Zhang explained that she would just be his bodyguard and nothing else. Yuchen asked if that meant they would be sleeping in the same bed. Xiaomei said he might as well not even think about it. Yes smiled and asked what would happen if they never found a customer, if the girl would stay at his place. Zhang said she wouldn't begrudge him even if he was the last man in the world. Yuchen frowned and thought he didn't really feel like it. The young man said she was on time and he wanted to discuss something with her. Yuchen is about to start his own company and he needs advice. Zhang shouted that he was crazy because he didn't even know how to run a business. Yuchen calmly replied to her that this was why he needed advice. Xiaomei resentfully said that his fiancé was better at these things, would have approached her better. He had an epiphany, and he agreed that Chen Kaixin was a pro and should have gone straight to her instead of pestering Xiaomei. Zhang said she did, and waved her hand at him. Since the girl herself was already lying under the blanket, she wished Yi a good night. Uchan walked over to her and said the bed was wide. There was enough room for two. Mei yawned and said she didn't mind. At the same second, she defiantly retrieved a gun from under the blanket. Xiaomei wondered if he had the guts for it. Yuchen waved it off and said it was too cool for him. The next day in Chen Kaixin's office, Chen remembered how Uchan had literally carried her in his arms. The thought alone made her smile happily. The secretary was surprised and asked the principal why she was so pleased. She said that Chen was acting very suspicious. Kexin immediately waved her hands and said that she was just imagining things. The secretary immediately chided her and said she had never allowed herself to giggle in the workplace before. The girl thought that perhaps it was because of Ouyang Hao's colors, but on the other hand, the headmaster doesn't really enjoy his visits. The lock on the handle clicked and the door to the study opened. Uchan stood on the threshold, leaning against the door jamb. He greeted Chen. Kexin stood up from her chair in a flash and relinquished it to Mr. Ye. Just then, Chen asked the secretary to arrange a cup of tea for the guest. Man was gone, and her mind was a mess. She knew that Chen hated Ye, so why was she serving him now? Xiao Mei was also standing in the doorway, and Chen Kaixin asked who she was. Ye carelessly said that Chen could ignore her. Yuchen sat down in the director's chair and put his hands on his knees. He said that he was going to start a small business, 30 million. But he didn't know anything about business, so he came for advice. Kexen asked in surprise where he got that kind of money from. Yutian indignantly replied as she thought to herself, he didn't steal them. Chen was embarrassed and started to apologize that no, of course she didn't think anything of the sort. She assured him that such an amount would be enough for a small or even medium-sized company. Chen asked what exactly he was going to do. Kaixin thought with envy that he had a lot of money. She had never seen a doctor with such an income before. Utian replied that it would be the production of cosmetics. Women pay well for it. And he also needs a manager. He is not going to manage the company's affairs himself. Chen said she'd prepare a list of everything he needed to know specifically for him, and added that she'd find a manager for him no problem too. Yuchen smiled and thanked her. It bothered him a bit that Kaixin kept helping him instead of hating him. You couldn't understand the reason for this attitude. Wutian said goodbye to Kaixin and gave her his hand. He didn't want to leave Chen's office, but he had to keep his distance. Kaixin gently took his hand by the wrist of her hand. She asked Yi if he was in a hurry to get somewhere. Uchen was just stunned. Chen had never done such a thing before. He wrenched his hand away and Kaixin remained standing with her arm pulled. Embarrassed, the girl wrapped one of her arms around the other as if Yi's wrist was still there. Kexen said she wanted to know when Yi was going to continue her treatment. Suddenly, the office door opened. A radiant Hao appeared on the doorstep and started telling Chen that his grandfather was having a party soon and he would like to invite her. Only now did he see that Uchen was present. He instantly turned purple and asked Yi what on earth he was doing here. Wutian said it was none of his business and got ready to leave, taking Xiaomei with him. Ouyang whispered in Wutian's ear to stay away from Chen, or better yet, leave town. Ye responded by warning Hao that he'd better watch himself. Hao warned Wutian that he would regret it yet. Ye smiled disdainfully and declared that he wasn't afraid of him at all. Together with Xiaomei, Wutian walked through the Tianxin district. He said this guy is clearly not doing well at home. Why would he even pick on him? Xiaomei objected that Ye was asking for it. After all, it was Ouyang Hao from the same Ouyang family, and there was no reason for Wutian to quarrel with such a famous person. He exploded and shouted that this still didn't make him a demigod. Zhang said instructively that there are 4 ancient families in the country that have accumulated enormous human and financial resources over the centuries, namely the Gongsun family with a huge 3-story villa in the mountains, the Situ family with a large mansion and outbuildings among the cliffs, Nangong family with a large estate near the lake, and the Ouyang family. You could say the Ouyang family controls a quarter of the state. Wuchen listened to the brief excursion and frowned. Hao clearly had a lot of money. He turned around and told Xiaomei that Hao was a mere mortal after all. Utian was so engrossed that he didn't immediately notice the fire truck and the crowd of gawkers. He added that Hao is not a deity by any means. And then Yi turned his attention to a fire in a high-rise building. He had a thought that began to grow into a vague suspicion. The gawkers were filming the fire on their cell phones, and Yi kept thinking. Suddenly the young man realized everything. It was his apartment on fire. Wuchen snapped out of his seat and ran swiftly towards the multi-story building. Xiaomei asked what he was up to. He had quickly covered the distance to the house and was now running up the driveway. A fire brigade was on the floor trying to extinguish the fire. Utian asked what happened and why his apartment was on fire, as his bank cards and checks were there. Fancy exclaimed why exactly her house had caught fire. The journalist took Yi by the scruff of his shirt and said that this was her first apartment and it was dear to her as a memory. Yutian grabbed her hand and asked if she happened to know if bank cards burned in fires. Wang irritably asked Ye what he himself thought about it. Yutian let go of her hand and waved the journalist away. Seeing Yi rushing into the burning apartment, Fancy yelled for him to stay out of there. Covering his eyes with his hands from the acrid smoke, Yutian rummaged through his nightstands for documents. The fire had already managed to engulf both the curtains and the bed by the window. He didn't spare the nightstand with the checks either. Wutian opened the drawer and realized that everything was gone. He thought angrily that those checks had been worth millions, and now they were a pile of ashes. He hadn't even begun to spend them. He felt bad that all his efforts had been wasted. Yutian flew out of the apartment, nearly knocking Fancy and the firefighter off their feet. On the way, Yi had time to think that bank cards could be restored, and he would not be left without livelihood at all. Fancy cried out where he was going, for they had not yet agreed. She yelled that the apartment burned down and Yi should make up for it. Yutian stated that it was a deliberate arson. Thick smoke was still billowing from the burning apartment. Wang Fengxi and Wu Qian came to Xiaomei, who was waiting outside. Zhang asked the young man if he had managed to salvage anything. He said that all of his belongings were burned to the ground, and so Xiaomei should mind her own business and find out who was behind it. With a wave of her hand, Xiaomei said she would do him a favor and investigate. Behind Yuchin's back, someone said it was a cool fire. The young man turned around. Behind him stood the smiling Hao. Wuxian said it would be much better for Ouyang if he wasn't involved. Hao scornfully asked him what he could do. Yutian looked at the young man with a studying look and warned him that he would see for himself. Ouyang continued to stare at him disdainfully and only hummed in return. Wang Fengxi asked if Wu Tianhao suspected that the apartment had been set on fire. He said regretfully that he thought a lot of things, but there was no proof. Fancy absent-mindedly repeated that there was no proof. Wu Tian said Hao burned down her apartment, and she doesn't even want to look at him badly. Apparently, even her father can't deal with the Ouyang family. The journalist hesitated, twirling her curls on her finger. Wu Tian said that if she didn't want her family involved, she didn't have to. It would be better for everyone. Immediately, he headed for the business center of the city. Soon, Uchian reached the place he needed. It was the central bank of Xiaozong City. He was disappointed at the bank, and he stood at the cashier's desk and shouted that it couldn't be. The bank employee smiled politely at him, portraying honesty on her face. Uchian was tearing up and throwing up, proving that there must be tens of millions on the map and it absolutely cannot be empty. The girl at the checkout apologized and said the balance on the card was 38 yuan. He fell on the counter near the cash register in frustration and started crying that 30 million had gone nowhere. The young man quickly pulled himself together and sighed. The business center of the city. The building with Chen Kexen's office. It was a normal day in the offices, and the employees were laboring in their seats. Kexen reproachfully asked Yi how he had gotten to this life. Yutian was wearing wrinkled clothes with traces of soot. He said resentfully that his apartment had burned down and his bank card had been cleaned out, leaving him penniless. Chen anxiously asked where Ye would live now. The young man said he would rent a hotel room as he had no other options, and asked to borrow a couple thousand. Chen Kaishin thought for a while. She closed her eyes, contemplating something. Then she offered to let Uchun stay with her for a while. Chen said she had a spare room. Yuchen was indignant and cried out that this was a bad idea. After all, Kexen hadn't thought about what would happen to her reputation if they were to live under the same roof. At this point, Yushin was the very morality, and was ready to sleep outside, just so that no one would think badly of the lady. Kexen suggested that in that case, she should just say that Ye was renting a room from her. Wuchen smiled and said that would do. He was satisfied that he had fooled Chen so easily. Kexen also felt like she was being played for a fool, but she didn't show it. She said to start by stopping by the store on the way and picking out some appropriate clothes. Having negotiated all the nuances, Chen and Wutian left the office building. There was only one car parked in the office parking lot. Kexen hugged Yi's arm and expressed her desire to ride the bike with him. Wutian was surprised, and thought that Chen was definitely not right in the head if she refused to ride in a car. Seeing his confusion, Kexen asked if he was okay with it himself. He said he didn't mind and asked to hold on tight so he wouldn't fall. The young man pulled up the bicycle and put his arm around Chen, saying that she was the first passenger. Kexen laughed and happily climbed onto the trunk, holding Ye by the shoulders. Wuchen made sure the girl was holding onto him securely and pressed down on the pedal. It was scary for Kexen to drive at such a speed with only his shoulders to hold onto. The girl instinctively pressed herself tighter against the driver and wrapped her arms around his waist. Wuchen felt how hard Chen's firm breasts pressed against him, and it pleased him. He realized that riding a bike with a girl is very enjoyable. They rode merrily through the city, and Yutian thought that if he had known, he would have done that a long time ago. Soon they pulled into the main streets. The traffic here was brisk. A large SUV appeared at one of the stoplights. He was going pretty fast and braked at a red light with a distinctive tire squeal. Wutian was crossing the zebra, and Hao Ouyang jumped out of the jeep. He asked Kexen where she was going like that, and what had happened to her car. He replied that the girl herself wanted to ride with him and asked what he didn't like. Hao grabbed the girl's arm and wanted to pull her off the bike. He told Chen to get into the car and assured her that he would take her wherever she needed to go. Hao explained that it was very life-threatening to ride a bicycle like that. Kexen threw up her hand and asked him not to worry, for she herself came from a poor family and often rode a bicycle as a child. Ye rejoiced and said that if Hao needed him, Ouyang could find him at Kexen's place from this day forward. He smirked and said they would be living together now. Hao frowned and asked what he was implying. Chen covered Wutian's mouth and said that Yi's apartment burned down and he was left without money, so she temporarily provided him with lodging. Hao was tearing up and throwing up. He was sorry that things had turned out this way. Ouyang had a life-saving thought and shouted that he could borrow money if he needed to. He tried to stop Wutian and asked him how much money would suit him. The gawkers were watching this spectacle. They were clearly enjoying it. He replied that he could give as much as he could spare and showed his little finger, hinting that he was going to his mistress. Kexen nudged him and told him it was time to move on. Wutian pushed off, and the couple on the bike slowly pulled away from the observers on the sidewalk. Hao looked at them unhappily. With anger, Hao struck his car with his fist. He hurt his fist and had to lean on the car door. Now Ouyang waited for the pain to subside a little. But it still didn't help, and he was shaking like he had a fever. Ouyang Hao glared at the offending person, thundering his fist and spewing curses. Two guys were discussing since when did pretty girls fall for bicyclists. While seeing off Uchin with an envious look, one guy in the crowd said he would get his grandfather's bicycle out of the garage. Maybe he'd get lucky. When they drove some distance away, Ye said he had to apologize to Chen. He recognized that it wasn't nice to use the girl to piss Hao off. Kexin was pleased that the young man understood that, and she said she owed him a debt of gratitude. Wushin said that he and Hao have their own squabbles, and Chen has absolutely nothing to do with it. The young man added that the girl and Hao seem to have a mutual liking. Kexin starts making excuses that nothing brings them together, and Hao is like a brother to her. Then, as if remembering, Chen asked what kind of showdown with Hao Wuchen was referring to. Young replied that he suspected Ouyang of setting the apartment on fire. Kexin looked back confusedly as if Hao was still there. Now she understood why he was acting so brazenly. A short time later they arrived at the hotel. Finally went up to the floor where Kexin lived. Chen stopped outside her room door in a friendly manner. The girl stood and smiled. Yudian was simply amazed at the fact that all this time the girl had been living across the street. Chen admitted that when she moved out of her parents' house, she couldn't imagine that she and Yuchen would end up as neighbors. The girl studied him and thought it was fate itself trying for them. Wutian said that it was now clear to him why Ouyang Hao had gotten this far. He smirked and said that Hao's devious plan backfired on himself as he and Kexin grew even closer. Chen laughed and said that now Yi didn't even have money for a rented apartment and invited him inside. The first thing Kexin did was to pull off her heavy and hot-heeled shoes. She hopped onto the couch, crossing her long legs. The young man's blood pressure rose and his nose bled at the sight of it. Yuchen got angry with himself and clamped his nostril with the palm of his hand. Kexin lowered her feet to the floor and began to scoff that the doctor didn't know how to treat a nosebleed. He got angry and replied that he was not interested in her opinion. He couldn't figure out what was wrong with this body, bleeding too often. Kexin asked what he thought of doing now, since he wanted to start his own business. Utian sat down on the couch and it squeaked resentfully. The young man said that it was not the time to talk about plans, and it would be good to earn money first. But in general, he was thinking of going back to that fishing village. This was news to Kexin, and she asked which village was meant. Utian recalled the fact that he had gone missing a year ago. The young man was being hunted, and after one incident, he ended up in a small fishing village. Ye added that that was where he met little Li Wan-er and her grandfather. Chen got excited and said she would keep him company. Yuchen objected that she is the director and the whole company hangs on her. Kexin smiled and said that the company was fine, and a couple days wouldn't affect anything. Utian tried to object some more, but didn't have time. Chen gently touched her index finger to his lips, urging him to shut up. Kexin said firmly that she doesn't accept any objections. She just wants to go there, and that's not even a stipulation. After a moment's pause, Chen moved away from the young man, looking at him intently. She jumped off the couch, inquired about the young man's cell phone, and pulled the phone out of her purse. Chen said she had bought it recently. Yuchen scrutinized a large smartphone with a bank card on it. Chen cheerfully said that the map was his too and said goodnight, adding that he could choose any available room. Wutian sat on the couch and thought about the fact that he was in Chen's good graces. Now, he couldn't decide what to do with Kexin. There was only one PO number on the contact list, ex-fiancé. Ye paid attention to this and felt guilty in front of the real Ye Wutian. Kexin didn't sleep at all that night. First, she covered herself with a blanket with her head. Chen didn't think that was enough, so she covered her head with a pillow, reproaching herself for everything that was going on. But nothing helped, and soon her crying head emerged from under the pillow. Kexin sadly realized that she had a crush, and she felt ashamed. The next morning, Uchan found breakfast on the table, his room key and pocket money waiting for him. He thought Chen was treating him like a small child. Immediately, he customized a message and sent it to Kexin. Seeing the text message from the young man, Chen instantly grabbed the phone in her hands. Ye Wutian thanked the girl for breakfast and pocket money. Kexin looked with boundless warmth at the phone. She was almost crying with happiness when Secretary Man entered the office and saw her extremely excited. Wutian walked with Dr. Wu to the grounds of the private clinic. He asked the patient to turn onto his stomach and began massaging his back. He pressed harder and harder on his shoulder blades, then moved to his spine. Sitsi asked how her grandfather was feeling. Yuchen said everything is going well, and barring anything unpredictable happening, should recover today. The man cheerfully interrogated him. He was pleased that soon everything would be over and he would take his father home. Sitsi screamed why Grandpa hadn't woken up yet. Ye called her a fool and explained that the treatment had not been completed yet. He held out the medicine, which had to be drunk in one gulp. The girl walked over to the bunk and began to feed her relative from a spoon. Yushin squealed that he needed everything at once, he'd said so. Sitsi hesitated and stiffened. She was clearly hesitant. The young man yelled that she was deaf in general and asked if she wanted her grandfather to wake up. The girl yelled that he could take his anger out on her, but she wouldn't let her grandfather get hurt. She can't let him get choked up. Utian angrily snatched the mixture from her and shouted that she was a useless woman, and it was useless to teach her. She would do everything wrong anyway. The man quietly asked the doctor if Yuchin was sure of what he was doing. The professor scratched his beard, hesitated, and admitted that he didn't know the answer. Uchan walked over to the bunk and lifted the old man with one hand, holding him by the neck. In his other hand he held the medicine tightly. Lifting his grandfather's head a little higher, E quickly poured the entire contents of the container into his mouth. Sitsi couldn't bear to watch this, and demanded to calm down. She was ready to kill him and clenched her fists in anger. Siki shrieked that she had made herself clear enough and grabbed Ye's hand. Dr. Wu held the man's shoulder and asked him not to interfere. He said that the boy would be able to figure it out on his own. Wutian told Siki that if the girl touched him again, she would be forced to find another doctor. She squealed and called for her father's help to calm E down. The man asked her to stop worrying herself. Yuchin poured into the old man in one fell swoop whatever was left over from last time. Then he tossed the empty plate aside and let go of his grandfather's head, and he slumped back onto the pillow. Shiki couldn't stand it and pointed a gun at him. She shouted that Ye had had enough of life. The man tried to stop her, but it was too late. The girl pulled the trigger and the bullet flew out of the barrel of the gun. Fortunately, Utian dodged and the bullet hit his arm. Streams of blood immediately ran down his arm, flowing down to his palm. Now the man was angry, and very seriously so. He grabbed the gun out of his daughter's hands and hit her. The man tossed the gun to one side and Sitsi to the other, and shouted that she was always making trouble from her. Dr. Wu came running in with a medical case, and said that he would patch E up in no time. Yuchin grudgingly said he could handle it himself, and asked for the tweezers. The professor quickly found and handed over the required item. He looked at the young man in disbelief, and wondered how he would be able to get the bullet out himself. Duck calmly reached into the wound with tweezers and began picking at it, extracting the bullet. The young man struggled to endure the pain. No one would help him. After a few minutes that seemed like an eternity, a bloody bullet showed on the tip of the tweezers. Only now did Uchan exhale calmly, and the man was very surprised that the young man didn't even raise an eyebrow as he picked at the gunshot wound. The young man reached into his pocket with his hand and searched for something for a long time. Finally found what I was looking for. It was one of his powders. Uhan began to powder the wound, and the man watched his actions from behind him with interest. Soon the bleeding stopped and the wound began to heal before my eyes. The man couldn't believe his eyes that it could happen so quickly. Dr. Wu was sure it was a miracle, the man exclaimed and asked what this healing powder was. Dr. Wu thought about the fact that this medicine could save many soldiers on the battlefield if its production was put into mass production. Uchin taped the wound, wrapped a bandage around his arm, and said he would not tell them anything. Angrily looking at Siki, Ye said that for old man W's sake, he would pretend that nothing happened, but she had better not get caught by the young man. He added that this was the first and last time he took on the task of helping their Ning family. Yutian walked over to the old man's bunk, clenched his fingers into a fist and swung from his head, standing for a while, calibrating the right direction of the blow. Then he punched the patient in the chest area with all his might. He immediately spat out the potion he had recently swallowed. Father and daughter looked at Yuchin's actions with suspicion. Suddenly Grandpa sat up in his bunk and coughed. Relatives ran up to him with tears in their eyes. Sitsi roared and was glad that Grandpa had finally woken up. Grandfather said stop crying and let her better tell me if she had behaved well. Turning to the doctor, the grandfather asked where the guy who hit him had gone. Quansheng said that the young man had already left. Suddenly he realized everything, and it was all about Uchan hitting his grandfather. The man asked what exactly Dr. Wu meant by that. Dr. Wu said he should have known right away, because he heard about this method just a couple of years ago. The medicine and subsequent mechanical action were needed to stimulate Ninglao's bodily functions, because otherwise his nervous system wouldn't have worked due to the long coma. The old man said he owed everything to him alone. He added that he heard absolutely everything they said, even though he couldn't open his eyes. He told Sitsi that she would need to apologize to the doctor. She countered that there was nothing to mess with him. You should just pay him, that's all. The man asked her what was more important in life, money or power, and told her that neither would give her good health and longevity. He added that this is why people with outstanding medical skills are so valuable. Not to mention that Yuqian is special even by medical standards. One of the city's neighborhoods, Day. Wutian rode his bike and regretted that the Ning family's money had disappeared along with the cards, so he had cured the old man for free, and even got shot. He couldn't take it anymore and started yelling into space that he was all out of luck. There was Xiao Mei standing near the sidewalk, and she was clearly waiting for the young man. The girl screamed that he was a scumbag, because a long time ago you could have gotten a cell phone. Her cries brought Wutian back to the real world, and he finally saw Xiao Mei. He hit the brakes and twisted the steering wheel, swerving toward the sidewalk. Yutian smoothly rolled up to the girl and said hello to her. Smirking, the young man asked if she had taken too long to find him and apologized. Xiao Mei demanded his current residence address. She pinched his nose lightly and reminded him that she had promised to protect him. There was little that could happen if he was attacked, Yuchin pulled his phone out of his pocket and asked to hold on. He was getting a call. The call came from Chen and he decided to reject it. He thought that he was almost home anyway, so he could have a normal conversation there. Xiaomei freaks out and says she's been looking all over town for him, and then it turns out Yi has a cell phone. She demanded that Yi immediately tell her PO number. The young man raised his hand up with the phone and wondered if Xiaomei was going to hit on him. Yudian said he's a very humble guy and is not ready for such big decisions yet. Xiaomei got angry, said stop braying, and snatched the phone from him. The girl said a lot of guys in his shoes wouldn't mind exchanging phone numbers with her. A car pulled up neatly beside the sidewalk. Mr. Liu came out of the car and said he wanted to talk about his son's injuries. Uchan objected that one should go to the hospital with such questions. Besides, they were feuding and had nothing to talk about. Liu says that he has talked to all the famous doctors in the area and no one can help, but Yi is the most extraordinary doctor, and Liu asks him to name a price. Uthian got on his bike and said his son had overflowed the cup of patience and asked him not to look for him anymore. He cannot save everyone in need. Liu shouted back that he was willing to give 100 million yuan. He stopped and thought. It was worth abandoning principles for such a sum of money. He turned around and shouted that he was willing to cooperate with Liu for 120 million. Wu Tian waved at the departing car and said that Mr. Liu was a pleasure to deal with. The guy smirked and told Liu to remember to prepare the money in advance. Xiaomei looked at him judgmentally and twisted his words about the cup of patience. Wu Tian told her that Liu Fu had already gotten what he deserved, so why would he kick someone lying down? The young man asked how long she would be following him around and clarified what was going on with the investigation. Xiaomei said that it was officially written off as a short circuit. Yu Tian was furious. He shouted that they had wasted so much time just to bullshit him and accused them of not doing anything about the police. The young man squealed that he didn't need such a bodyguard, and she'd better find out who was behind the arson of his apartment. Xiaomei was angry with Ye. She ran away and muttered to herself that she didn't really want to look after him. Yuchen watched the girl rush quickly down the road that was going upward, and he thought about it. After all, there was still nothing Xiaomei could do to Hao. The Ouyang family was beyond her. Soon he was already in the hotel and walking quickly down the hallway. The young man said he was at home and found several pairs of shoes near the door. Chen Kaishin and Hao's parents were sitting on the couch, the girl herself standing beside them. Chen cheerfully said that it was a pleasant surprise. Now he understood why the girl had called him. Chen saw his bandaged hand and asked fearfully what was wrong with his hand. The young man replied that it was just a minor scratch. The girl shrieked it couldn't be a scratch, the whole bandage was soaked with blood. The parents thought about the change in Chen. They saw that their daughter cared for Wu Tian. Only Hao sat frowning. He realized that it wouldn't be easy to win the girl's affection back. Father Chen asked Wu Tian if he had broken the engagement agreement with Kaishin. Smiling, Ye replied that he was. He said he wouldn't stay long anyway, since his house had burned down and Chen invited him to stay with her for now. Hao said that no one is stopping him from renting a hotel room. After all, his family is quite rich. Wu Tian replied that he didn't even have money for a hotel. But it was wrong of Hao to involve Chen's parents in the quarrel. Ouyang replied that it doesn't matter, because what matters to him is the result. Ye replied that everyone around him was doing nothing but praising the Ouyang family. But judging from Hao's behavior, they are all doing it in vain. Hao was getting angry. He had run out of arguments and was ready to move to a fight. The girl's father said that if she and Chen were not in a relationship, it was not appropriate for them to live under the same roof, and he would find another place for Yushin to live. Ye remained silent and looked sad. There was nothing he could do. Yushin closed his eyes and said he would. Okay. Kexin suddenly squealed and shrieked in surprise that nothing was all right. She told her father that it was her own business and it was none of her parents' business. The mother said that if her daughter is cohabiting with a man, then of course it's a matter of concern. Hao managed to agree and said that she was right. Chen angrily said that it was none of Hao's business and he didn't need to get involved. She grabbed Yushin's hand and showed him that she wouldn't let him go anywhere. Kexin firmly said that Wuqian is not going anywhere from here, period. The parents were shocked at such an act. Hao hesitated and yet cheered, celebrating the victory. Qi asked Chen to answer one question honestly. She asked if Kexin loves Wuqian. The girl faltered, blushed, and began to fumble nervously with her fingers. Chen wasn't quite sure but admitted that she liked Wuqian a little. Kexin said that she's not quite sure how she feels, but she definitely knows that she doesn't want to break up with Wuqian. Qi yelled at the girl and reminded her that Yi was walking around behind her back. She resented that Chen would just forgive him like that and asked what about Ouyang Hao. Hao realized that this was his chance. He pondered the best way to strike. He got up from the couch and gently told Kexin that he loved her very much. Chen was confused and didn't know what she should do. She apologized to Hao and said she was sorry, but he had always been like an older brother to her. Ouyang immediately changed his face and was now looking at Kexin with a sad look. To put a bold point on it, Chen left the room and told Yi that they would go and change the bandage right away. Utanan stumbled a bit and couldn't say a word. They came to the bedroom and Chen lit the nightlight. The girl slowly and carefully unwrapped his bandage. Wuqian said that Keishin shouldn't have quarreled with his parents over him. Chen replied that he was now starting to care about her. She said that she did what she did, and had no intention of changing her mind. Wuqian cheerfully said that he would obey Her Majesty. The next day, downtown. Chen Kexin Company, work is in full swing, and all employees are engaged in business. Chen herself was studying last month's chart. A secretary sat beside her. Kexin asked Secretary Xiaoman to open the office door. Just then, the door swung open, and an angry woman appeared on the threshold. She asked what was the meaning of this, since they had already made an agreement with Chen, if she had not forgotten. Kexin said that she didn't break any agreements. Miss Yi reminded that she should stop supporting Ye Wutian. And now it has come to her attention that Wuqian and Kexin are living under the same roof. Chen said that she doesn't understand why Miss Ye is meddling in her personal life. As for Ye Wutian, he is no longer the owner of this company and can be left alone. The woman replied that she was too brazen for the head of a small firm, and asked what she would do without the support of the Yi family and their millions. She demanded that Yushin be thrown out on the street immediately, or the contract would be null and void. Kexin shouted that no one could make decisions for her about who she should be with, and added in a firm voice that was definitely not Mrs. E. The woman couldn't stand it and slapped her palm on the table with anger. She shouted that Kexin might regret her decision. She wouldn't be able to manage alone. Kexin said he wouldn't fall for her threats. Even if he had to lose the company, there was nothing to regret. Mrs. E wails that her family can both support the business and ruin it, and Chen just doesn't understand the risks. Kexin slammed the laptop lid shut and looked at the woman carefully. Chen said Ye Wutian is her blood relative, and if Wuqian is a disgrace to the entire family, then Madame Ye herself is even worse. With that, she finally pissed off her guest, and she promised that she would make Kexin choke on her words. Chen Kaixin asked Xiaoman to escort her guest out in a calm voice. 4 hours had passed. The working day was nearing its end. Suddenly, one of the employees ran somewhere and spoke quickly on the phone. Soon another employee's phone rang. Mr. Wang demanded that the 3-year contract be terminated immediately. Now all the staff were already busy on the phone. Many clients refused the services provided. Xiaoman ran into the office and shouted from the doorstep that they were in trouble. She said investors found out about the termination of the contract with the E family, and it was as if they went crazy. Ye Dongshuan's revenge didn't take long to arrive. She smiled gloatingly. The same night, Chen Kaixin's office building. The lawyer said that YIP Group suspends all cooperation with Jianxing Trading Company on the basis of the latter's non-compliance with an earlier agreement. Although Chen Kaixin was prepared for such a turn, she was worried beyond belief. Her company would lose at least 20 million. When this news reached the staff, there was sheer panic. Now they could all forget about the annual bonus. All contracts were broken and a crisis seemed inevitable. The receptionist said the situation is worse than ever. They keep getting calls from disgruntled customers asking what's going on. Kexin asked Xiaoman to calm them down with all her might. The secretary thought that only a miracle could save their company. Chen told Man to just do as she commands, no need to think too much. The phone on the table rang. It was Ye Dongshuan. Chen looked at the ringing phone with exasperation. Standing up from the table, the girl pulled the phone closer to her. Kexin saw that Mrs. Yi was calling and pressed the call acceptance button. Dongshuan said hello to Miss Chen in a satisfied voice. After waiting for a pause, she wondered what Keishin would tell her now. Chen stood her ground, and replied that Dongshuan might as well not try. She wouldn't change her mind. Curses began spewing from the phone, and Chen pinned it to the table with her fist. Ye Dongshuan was tearing up. Out of anger, she clutched her phone hard. The country house of the Yi family. Ye Wutian's brother expressed doubt that Chen Kaixin would give up so easily. Dongshuan laughed and said that she had no choice. She would either accept it or lose her company. The patriarch of the Ye family sat across from Dongshuan. He had been listening intently and now began to state his opinion. The patriarch's eldest son said that they shouldn't go that far. After all, if they quarreled with the Ouyang family, Dongshuan's whole plan would backfire on them. Missy said everything is under control, and she knows what she's doing. They're just going to parrot her a little bit, that's all. Ye Wutian's father asked them if they themselves were disgusted. Dongshuan was surprised and questioned why he thought so. Hengdong explained that neither Wuqian nor Kaixin had any connection with the Ye family. Moreover, they might fall into their own trap. Dongshuan shrieked that he had misunderstood everything, and she was now trying for the sake of the family. He shouted back that she was only trying for her own sake. Hengdong added that he understood her desire to gain the favor of the Ouyang family, and suggested that Kexin could later strike them through Hao. Dongshuan took offense and said that Ouyang's favor meant little to her. He asked why she would even want Ouyang Hao in that case. His brother shrieked at him that if you listen to him, his family means nothing to him. Hengdong was about to leave, but he was stopped by the patriarch of the Yi family. He wondered if his words meant nothing to Hengdong. The latter assured the patriarch that he had always been a faithful son to him. After all, he told Hengdong not to help Yuchen. so the man doesn't help him, and what questions could there be for him? The patriarch turned purple and was ready to explode immediately. He shouted that Hendong should watch his tone. His granddaughter asked him not to yell at her father and told him that being nervous was bad for your health. One of the servants reported that a certain lady had come to them and introduced herself as Chen Kaixin. Dongchuan was glad that Kexin had finally made the right decision. Brother Wutian was also satisfied and said that everything was going just as Dongchuan had said. A man brought a girl into the house. It really was Miss Chen. Upon entering the house, she said hello to everyone present. Hendong inquired of the girl why she had come. Kexin said she came to discuss something with him. Dongchuan smiled greedily. Now Kexin wasn't going anywhere. Miss E stated that the company should be addressed to her, not her older brother. Chen smiled and said that she was only dealing with Mr. Ye. She handed Hendong some kind of package. He asked what was inside. The girl asked him to open it and see for himself. Dongchuan couldn't believe that there was any business with just Hendong. While the man opened the package, Chen turned away to avoid looking at Dongchuan. Hendong was very surprised by this package of documents. He anxiously asked Kexin what it all meant. Chen said that her company owes everything to the E. Hendong once gave her money to start the business, and now she is giving the firm back to him. All the paperwork is in place. Even the patriarch was taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. Chen said that all Hendong had to do was put his signature on it. The man asked why she was doing that. Kexin replied that no matter how hard you try, you still won't be rich as a stranger. Hendong said that Chen had put a lot of effort into her company. The girl countered that the company had never been her own. Lastly, she said that the Yi family might be influential, but that didn't mean the whole world was on her. Dongchuan and his brother were simply furious. Just like that, Chen Kaixin stomped on the pride of the Ye family without scaring anyone. Although in Ye Dongchuan's view, it should have been the exact opposite. Already near the exit, the girl remembered something, tossed a bunch of keys, and said that Ye Wutian had asked for them to be returned. They were car keys. Dongchuan grabbed them, clutched them in her hand, and shouted that Wutian had put her up to it. The girl replied that the young man only asked to take the keys, and she decided to get rid of the company herself. Hendong said that she created this company from scratch, and he can't take it away. Kexin replied that the company is related to the Ye family, and she doesn't want that kind of happiness. Wutian's brother asked why she was playing the insulted innocence card. Kexin replied that it might be her fault, but she's not making a big deal out of herself. She's just the way she is. Hendong said irritably, not everyone was ready to bow at their feet. His nephew asked him not to believe Kaixin. He was sure the girl was up to something. The second brother cut into the conversation and asked why Chen would take Wutian's side, since she used to hate him. The patriarch sat silently wondering what to do now. He couldn't believe there were young people who didn't care about money. Chen Kaixin Company's office building. The employees looked sadly at the walls of the company that had become home for many. Chen had packed almost all of her things and looked sadly at the collective photo. In the center were Kaixin and Wuqian. Xiaoman asked if it was true that Director Chen was leaving the company. Kexin replied that it was cramped for two heads on the same shoulders, so she decided to leave on her own. The secretary assured her that she wanted to continue working with Chen. The girl replied that she was now unemployed and didn't know what she would do. Kexin cheerfully said that if she needed an assistant in the future, she knew who to turn to. The secretary had a lively light in her eyes, and she said, catching Chen's eye. The whole company went out to see Director Chen Kaixin off. The cab was already parked under the building. Turning around to the collective, Chen smiled and waved cheerfully at them. The staff stood at the entrance and held one arm raised and bent at the elbow as a sign of honorable farewell. Kexin couldn't look at it calmly and turned aside. Unable to bear it, she burst into tears. It seemed like enough to fill a whole sea. Soon, a cab brought the girl to Tianjin district. Chen set the scotch-taped box on the table with a clatter. The girl leaned on her and said they were both unemployed now. Wuqian knew nothing, and Chen revealed that she had returned the company to the E family's hands and had nothing more to do with them. The young man put his palm to her forehead and asked if she was sick by any chance. Kexin took offense and cried out that he himself was sick. Wuqian finally realized that the girl wasn't joking and interrogated Chen. The young man said that he had purposely handed the company over to Kexin specifically, and she had taken it and abandoned it. Chen explained that the shadow of the Yi family would always hang over the company. Further questioning yielded nothing, and Kexin said she had already returned the documents to his relatives, so it was a done deal. Yutian asked Her Majesty how she was going to support him. Kexin seriously said that it was his turn to take care of her. The young man smirked and said that it was too troublesome for him. He'd rather keep chilling at her expense. Chen fell into a stupor. She couldn't say a word out of anger. A new day has dawned. Chen Kaixin came out of the house and Wutian rode up on his bicycle saying that the carriage was served. Chen was already uncomfortable, so she asked him to shut up. Crossing her legs, the girl sat on the bike rack. Making herself comfortable, she put her arm around the young man's waist. After making sure everything was okay, Chen said they could go. All over again, Kaixin pressed herself tighter against him. Wuqian felt the girl's firm charms and immediately became cheerful. He smiled and said he was ready to do her bidding. They drove merrily through the center of town, teasing each other. It was nice and pleasant for Kexen to ride with Wuchen just like that. Near one of the buildings, he turned around and asked how about payment for his labors. Chen smiled and replied that she was officially raising his salary 100 times from today. The young man laughed and thanked Her Majesty for her kindness. They drove past a police post and drew the attention of the officers of the law. The guard immediately ran out of the booth and asked his partner what these miracles were. He wondered what such a pretty girl would be doing on a rusty piece of iron, and the other cop told him that the young man was probably from a wealthy family. The policeman looked at the couple enviously. They all thought at the same time that they could at least have chosen a newer bicycle. They reached the Tianjin area. Kexen had to get off the bike. A girl blocked their way and told Wuchen that she had a conversation to have with Wuchen. The young man ordered her out of the way, and Chen asked who she was. Wuchen replied that she was just that, a bitch of one. Sitsi took great offense at him. She ran around them and blocked their path, urging them to stop. Sitsi said she had come to apologize to him. Wutian said he didn't need to do that. He didn't need anything more from the Ning family. The girl said she had already mentioned that she was sorry and asked what else E needed. She thought that she had never met such a greedy and unscrupulous hubbub in her life. Wuchen asked her to get off at last. She asked him what he wanted from her, but he couldn't help but insult her. He said that if she was done, he wanted her out of his sight. Sitsi tilted her head and asked what she had to do for Uchan to forgive her. The young man asked what she cared and why she was even picking on him. The girl asked simply to tell her how to get his forgiveness. Wutian said that he absolutely didn't care what she was up to, but he wouldn't go anywhere near their Ning family. To strengthen his argument, the young man showed his middle finger to Shiki. The girl lost her temper and screamed, "How can he call himself a man after that? She doesn't understand how one can be so vindictive." Wuchen smirked and asked if he must necessarily have memory problems if he was a guy. That made Shiki even angrier. She said she wasn't going anywhere until Yutian accepted her apology. He got fed up with it and told the girl that he forgives her and now she can leave. Sitsi grabbed his hand and stated that they were now going to his grandfather's house. He wanted to see E. Yuchen pulled his arm out and said she could get away. He said he wasn't going to have any more dealings with the girl or her family. She slapped him hard. She said that if he insulted her again, she would not be responsible for herself. Yuchen smirked and said he could tell her the same thing. Kexen was fed up with the conflict and asked why not discuss things peacefully. The young man said there was nothing to discuss. Sitsi turned purple with anger. Wuchen turned around and told Kexen that they were leaving. Sitsi blocked the young man's path again and declared that he must forgive her first. Yuchen said she was a fool for not understanding and asked when it would finally get to her. Immediately, Siki slapped him and wailed that she had warned him and he shouldn't have insulted her. Chen immediately flew up to her and shrieked. Who did she think she was that she was allowing herself to do such a thing? Wuchen imperiously put his hand on Kexen's shoulder and said that he was talking about the same thing, and that it applied to him too. The air around me has changed. Sitsi sensed it too late to react adequately. The girl's legs gave a jerk and she sank to her knees helplessly, asking E what he had done. Wuchen gently took her by the temples and said that it wasn't as if she didn't expect him to be scared of her family. Sitsi was frightened herself and asked what he was up to. Wuchen grabbed her by the waist with one hand and lifted her onto his shoulder. The girl struggled and demanded to be released immediately. The young man slapped her hard on the soft part of her body below her back. Sitsi squealed with both anger and pain at the same time. Kexen watched with satisfaction as Wutian headed for the trash containers. He chose a hazardous waste container for his revenge. He walked over there and threw the annoying girl there with a swing. After shaking his hands off the dust, the young man exhaled and walked over to Chen. The girl looked at him with undisguised surprise. Sitsi was sitting in the waste container. She was stuck in there and was yelling that Uchian had better get her out now. Kexen looked at him sadly. Her hands were behind her back. Ushan folded her fingers into the likeness of a heart. Even though they had moved quite far away, Sitsi's curses could still be heard. Ye asked Kexen why she was looking at him like that. Maybe he was going a little overboard. Chen replied that it's okay. That's what that leftist broad should do. Yuchen thought the words about the left baba sounded a little strange. Kexen asked if he was going to pull her out of the trash. Ye laughed and said that nothing would happen to her, except that she would stink of stink. Chen smiled and wondered if he didn't feel sorry for the girl at all. The young man replied that there was nothing to pity her for except her smarmy face, but Kexen was still prettier. Chen got excited. Yushin started complimenting her. Ning family's large and luxurious house. Siki wiped her head while wrapped in a towel and threatened that she would kill him with her own hands. The old man laughed that the lad appeared to have a temper. Siki asked her grandfather in surprise why he wasn't on her side. The latter replied that she herself was to blame for the situation. The grandfather added that she never understood anything, for the young man was very gentle with her. The girl said angrily that all she realized was that this pervert had finally gotten cocky. Her father asked her to remember her sudden weakness and asked if she didn't realize what it meant. Sitsi strained all her wits and finally began to understand something. The girl remembered that the wound on her arm no longer bothered the young man. Her father told her that she had no idea how valuable his knowledge was to military medicine. The old man said he would drop in on Yutina himself one of these days. For the next few days, Yewutian was very busy. It wasn't until the evening of the third day that he finally gathered all the necessary ingredients. Yuchin put the special container on the gas stove and turned it on. Chen Kexin had just as much to do, as she was the one who procured the ingredients ordered by Ye. Clean water was needed first and foremost, and Chen was just tired of carrying bags of it. Throughout these days, Chen Kaishin wondered more than once what he wanted to do, but Yewutian answered the girl each time that it was a secret. Chen was sitting in front of the TV in the evening watching a humor show. Uchin walked over to the back of the couch and watched with her for a while too. Then the young man walked around the couch, sat down next to Chen and offered her something to eat. She asked what he brought. Wutian said it was poison. He set his palm up, and Kexin obediently ate whatever the young man brought. Yuchin worriedly asked what would happen if there really was poison in there. Chen replied that he had no motive to poison her. Wushin said it was up to her. Chen clarified that it wasn't an attempt to hit on her. He confirmed that this was the case. After all, no one in his place could resist such a beauty. Keishin felt something wrong happening to her. Wushin smirked and said that she should start to smell soon. Chen shouldn't be frightened, it was perfectly normal. She got angry and said that it was Yutian himself who smelled it. And she, by the way, had recently bathed. And if he didn't believe it, he could smell it. The young man leaned over Kexin's head and breathed in the scent of her hair. She blushed and said she was joking. Yi replied that she had asked for a sniff. A large tub of clean water was already stocked in the bathroom. Uchan immediately splashed 2 more bottles of clear liquid into it. Kassen asked, wondering what the end result should be after all. Yi explained that as soon as Chen had a foul discharge on her skin, she should wash it off and then climb into the vat and soak in it for half an hour. Keishin asked what it was all for. The young man replied that she would figure it out for herself later, and added that it was his thanks for letting Chen stay with her. After a while, the girl's hands began to be covered in purple spots. She screamed at what had happened to her hands. Uchin thought it had finally begun. The drug worked as it should, but the effect was slower and weaker than expected. He decided that it was all about poor quality ingredients, and it was worth growing it yourself in the future. The young man asked Chen to prepare water for himself and strictly forbade the use of soap and shampoo. He added that mineral water would come in handy. Kaishin would obviously be thirsty. The girl undressed in a flash and dumped all her clothes into the laundry basket. Wutian said from behind the door for the girl to take her time. He wasn't going to peek. She yelled for Yi to stop distracting her and asked how she got so much dirt on her. Uchin said it's okay, it's just Her Majesty's toxins coming out of Her Majesty that way. Chen asked indignantly if he was sure that was the way it was supposed to be. The young man replied that he didn't know that for sure, since he couldn't see, and asked for permission to enter. Kaishin shouted for him not to even think about it. Yutian made his way to the living room and sat down on the couch, muttering that women were very difficult. The young man made himself comfortable on the couch and waited for the girl to return. The translucent door to the bathroom was closed, and only the silhouette of the girl was visible to the young man. This was enough for another bleeding, and Ye apologized to the original Wutian, for he really likes the former body owner's fiancée. Uchan said that they were no longer engaged anyway, so who cares? Especially better him than another man. It was already 11 o'clock on the clock. Uchan estimated that he'd gotten here about an hour ago. He asked himself what Kexin could be doing there for so long. A wild cry from the apartment was heard by many on the street, and they were surprised. Yutian immediately ran into the bathroom and asked what was wrong. Kexin blinked and wrapped herself in a towel and turned her back to him. The young man lost control of himself, and the absorbent cotton plug in his nostril flew out under the pressure of the new hemorrhage. Chen rejoiced like a child. She said it was incredible. Her skin was as soft as a baby's now. Yuchin took it as personal praise and said that the girl was shining like a fairy. He thought that he had never seriously done this before, but he was very happy with the result, because Chen had been beautiful before, and now she was a beauty. But now she couldn't take her eyes off. Kexin cheerfully asked Ye if he really thought so. Yuchin nodded his head happily. The girl was embarrassed and hesitated. Then she leaned over and kissed Yi on the cheek. Kexin thanked the young man sincerely. Yuchin was amazed, and he wanted a repeat. He told Chen that it wouldn't work that way. He just wasn't ready and needed to do it again. Yuchin reached for the girl, demanding a reward. She jokingly displayed her fingernails and told him not to even dream of it. Kexin suggested going to town. She'd rather treat him to something tasty. It really wasn't bad weather outside. Soon, Chen and Wutian took the elevator down and were crossing the hotel lobby. Standing in the doorway was Ouyang Hao. It was as if he was waiting for Kaishin to leave the room. Kexin looked at him thoughtfully with a slight tinge of sadness. Hao told her that she looked stunning. He noticed Chen's transformation. Chen coldly asked what Brother Hao needed. Hao replied that tomorrow was his grandfather's birthday and asked if she could come. The next day, The space outside the Ouyang family's villa was jammed with cars. Keishin asked Ye if he wanted to go with her, since she could invite him as a friend. Wutian refused and said that Hao would definitely go crazy if he did. He added that she doesn't have to worry about the gift. It will definitely be among the best. Chen became agitated and tried to object. Uchen said it was all right. She should go, and the young man would just wait for her outside. Buffet tables with food and drinks were set up in the room, and there were plenty of guests. Hao smiled and asked the girl if she was worried. He admitted that he was worried too. Today is a very important day for him. Yi's family members were also invited to Ouyang's birthday party. Hendong's brother and his son were watching Chen Kaixin. She was more beautiful than ever, wearing a gorgeous purple dress, and talking cheerfully with Hao about something. The young man looked at Kexin incredulously. He didn't recall Chen always being this good. Henkai told the young man that he should be nicer to her in the future. He was referring to Chen Kaixin. Guan Yanli said that she was honored to attend Mr. Ouyang's birthday party. Heng Tsai asked his son how things were going with Shin Yue and if there was any progress. The one didn't have any shifts, and he replied that he didn't even know. Heng Kai sighed tiredly. It had been a long time since his son had been unable to win a girl's heart. An entertainer appeared on stage and caught everyone's attention. He solemnly announced that from this point on, the gala was officially declared open. Hao walked over to the villa owner Ouyang Anan, folded his hands in deference and bowed. Kneeling before his grandfather, the young man wished him long life. He added that he wished him health as strong as a rock and a gaze as clear as a water surface. Anan told him to get up and asked him where the girl he had brought with him was. Hao introduced Chen Kaixin to him. He said that they had studied in the same group in the United States. Many guests were mesmerized by Chen's beauty. Some of them thought they had seen her before. Ouyang Xianyu glanced at Kexin, realized it was the same one, and thought that Big Brother had succeeded in seducing her after all. Chen said she was very happy to have the opportunity to meet Anan. Kexin would like to wish him health and great success. She bowed. Anan asked where the girl was from and who her parents were. Kexin replied that her father Chung Pejong and mother Kikyun are ordinary businessmen. Anan thanked the girl for coming to his birthday party. Naturally, he immediately thought that a girl from a mediocre family did not belong near his grandson. Hao got a little flustered and said that Kexin hadn't given him her gift yet. Opening her purse, Chen pulled out a small wooden box, asked to accept the gift, and said that Anan might need it in the future. Xiang Yu whispered in his grandfather's ear that he should open the gift right now. He added that the woman had already been engaged before. Anan asked Miss Chen if she'd been engaged before. Hao shouted that Grandpa had gotten it all wrong. Anan frowned and replied that he wasn't addressing him. Kexin blushed and said it was true, but they had nothing to worry about since she was just a guest and had come to wish her good health. Xian Yu asked the girl to show everyone present her gift. Kexin began to lift the lid of the box, carefully holding it from the bottom. On a soft pad in the center of the box was a small balloon. Anan was surprised that a girl was giving him medicine for his birthday. The guest didn't know whether to take it as a hint, or she just wanted to jinx him either. Anan looked carefully at the girl and at the open gift. Kexin said it was a special drug and he might need it someday. Chen thought with chagrin that Wuqian had spent a great deal of effort to prepare this pill. Anan thanked her for her concern and said he did not need medication for now. Ouyang Anan publicly refused Chung Kexin's gift, which can be considered an unconcealed insult to her. Ouyang Zhenren, Hao's father, ordered to take Madam somewhere to rest. Kexin apologized for taking up the birthday boy's time and said she had to go. Hao accompanied the girl with his arm around her shoulder. When Hao returned, Zhenren jumped on him and shouted at him about what had gotten into him. His father had always had the best opinion of him, and now Hao had disappointed him. Hao tried to prove he was serious, and said he was going to marry Chen Kaixin. His father advised him to get that stuff out of his head, and the sooner the better. He recalled Chen's origins and the high position of the Ouyang family. Zhenren said that this was even without taking into account that Kexin was already engaged. Chung Kexin couldn't find herself in any corner of the hall. The gazes of the people around her literally drove her crazy. No matter what she did, she was still only Cinderella to those present. Cinderella, who'd already been rejected by her fiancé once before. Suddenly some toothless old man approached Chen. He had his hat pulled down over his eyes. The old man asked permission to look at the box in her hands. She laughed and said the old man could keep her. The man could not believe his happiness and questioned the girl. She replied that she was not joking. The old man thanked the girl fervently. He was very happy. The man said he owed him a favor in that case and handed Chen a business card. He said if Keishin needed anything in the future, she could just call him. While Chen looked at him in surprise, the old man apologized and said he had to go. Kexin followed the old man's gaze as he walked away. He was supported by a young man. Suddenly, the old man seemed to remember something and turned back to the girl. He said he wanted to talk to the girl about something and asked him to wait. Kexin leisurely walked down the deserted corridor. There was some other woman in comfortable fancy shoes walking behind. The girl with purple hair caught up with Chen and called out to her. She said she apologized. The girl added that she would like to apologize to Kexin on behalf of her grandfather. She casually gave Keishin a hand to introduce herself. Chen was pleased by this. The girl said her name was Ouyang Xinwei, and she was really sorry for what happened. Kexin shook the outstretched hand and said she was glad to meet you. Xinwei inquired about the effect of that medicine. Chen replied that this pill is a treasure that no money can buy. She doesn't know all the details, but the properties of the medicine are truly miraculous. Xinwei asked if she could raise the dead. Chen said that at least the medicine gives 1 year of life to a hopelessly sick person. Xinwei found it too unbelievable. But if the girl is telling the truth, this unsightly pill really can do a lot of things. Noticing her confusion, Chen said that it's okay if Miss Ouyang doesn't believe her. She might think it was just a joke. Someone approached them from the side and called out to Xinwei. It was Hengtse Ouyang's son. He smiled and started a conversation about the good weather. The girl was clearly not inclined to him and only mumbled in response. Kexin stepped aside and told Miss Ouyang that she wouldn't bother them. The young man, meanwhile, suggested that Xinwei introduce her to his parents. She waved him off and left. The girl said that she was very busy now and he should do something for himself. The young man first smirked at Xinwei in return. Gradually, his expression changed to a more angry one. He felt resentful of the world. The earth is full of rumors. Soon Chen was nowhere to be found. Everyone was pointing their fingers at her and whispering about how Chung Kexin disrespected the Ouyang family, and her gift was returned back. In their eyes, Chung Kexin appeared as a woman who simply hoped to increase her own social status through a favorable marriage. The girl pulled out her phone, flipped through the address book and found Yuqian's number. With tears in her eyes, she pressed the call button for her loved one. Yuqian immediately answered the call. Kexin asked in a sad voice if he could pick her up and said she wanted to go home. Yuqian asked what was wrong. He heard the girl sobbing. Chung replied that everything was fine. She just felt out of place here, so she called him. Yuqian assured that he would come for her right away. Meanwhile, a conversation was going on in the room. Birthday boy Anan thanked the old man of the Ning family for being able to come to his party. The man replied that he was the one who should thank Anan, as he had learned a lot today. Anan was very surprised and asked what exactly Nin meant. Anan was very surprised and frowned, for in the hands of his old friend was a suspiciously familiar box. Smiling, Ning showed him Chen's gift. Anan grudgingly asked him if he was referring to Chen Kaixin. Reverently holding the box in his hands, Ning said he had to go. There was still so much to do. Anan was surprised that Ning was already leaving. The old man replied that he was no longer young, and it was difficult for him to stay on his feet for long periods of time. Besides, he was already expected. Anan, along with Xinwei, saw the old man off, and Anan assured him that he would definitely find time to visit him sometime. Ning thanked him and said he was very lucky to have a granddaughter. She was so beautiful and clever. His own only knows how to swing her fists. Xinwei was embarrassed. In fact, Anan couldn't be happy with his granddaughter either. Graceful and decent, intelligent and courteous, she was his greatest treasure. Despite her young age, she has already proven herself to be a financial genius and has managed to add significant value to the family business. Old man Ning sighed heavily. He stood near the door of the villa and whirled his head in different ones trying to find the girl. Anan and his granddaughter looked at him in surprise. Kexin was standing and talking to Hao outside his car. The young man sincerely apologized for what had happened. He didn't think it would happen like this. Chen said she understands perfectly well and it's not his fault. Hao offered to take her for a walk, but Kexin said she shouldn't and she was on her way out. The young man was surprised that she wanted to leave right now. Chen replied that she was tired and needed to rest. Hao said he would give her a ride home. Kexin thanked him and told him she would be picked up. Hao frowned and disdainfully asked if Wutian was about to arrive. Their conversation was cut short by old man Ning coming up. He was glad he had found the girl. Nin said he looked everywhere for her and barely found her. Anan wondered how Chung Kexin could possibly know Ning Peng. Xinwei knew Peng as a very powerful person, and if he knew Chung Kexin, there must be a reason for that. The dear guests were thinking about the same thing. They all agreed that Chung and Peng had known each other for a long time. Peng approached the girl and offered to walk a bit and talk at the same time. Anan asked his old buddy who the girl was. Ning smirked and said that the woman was with him. Xinwei and Anan were simply dumbfounded with surprise. Kexin asked him since when she had been with him. Ning clarified that some time ago, this girl's friend had helped him a lot. Anan didn't believe his words. He didn't know what the girl's mysterious friend could do to help, but he was well aware that Ning Peng was not the type to throw words to the wind. Anan suddenly realized that the pill he had refused and made the girl look like a fool was real. Anan prepared to bite his elbows, but it was too late. He remembered the unassuming box, but he couldn't turn back the clock. Anan asked for the name of that friend, and Ning said he was from Ye's family. Kexin guessed that the old man knew Ye Wutian. Anan reflected. Chung Kexin and the Yi family. Heng Tsai and his wife and son were standing nearby. They could hear everything. Heng Chai and Guan realized that old man Ning was referring to Ye Wutian. Anan asked the old man where his friend was now and asked if he could introduce them. Ning replied that he would like to meet him himself. Ning offered to give Chen a ride. She thanked him and said she was waiting for someone. Anan looked sadly at Kexin and at his missed chance. Xinyue suggested that the girl not crowd outside and wait for all of her friend inside. Kexin proudly refused and said they shouldn't bother. She could wait for him on her own. The attendant whispered something in old man Ning's ear. He seemed worried. He apologized to Chen and said he had some urgent business to attend to. Kexin said goodbye to him cheerfully and wished him well. For a while, Chang stood in the parking lot waiting for Wutian, finally looked at her watch and told Hao that she had to go too. She took off her gemstone pendant and said she was returning it to him. Hao confusedly replied to Kaixin that it was a gift. Chen stated that she could not accept such a valuable gift. She turned her back to him, and Hao clutched the pendant in her fist, looking at the stone. He looked sadly at Kexin and thought that it didn't end the way he wanted it to. Suddenly, from around the corner came the squeak of pedals, and everyone instinctively turned their heads there. Kexin looked at the approaching bicycle. She looked rather sad. Yuchen was approaching on his bicycle and was about to pull up. Kexin couldn't hold back her tears and burst into tears. It had been too hard a day. Security blocked the path of the uninvited cyclist. The guests were just shocked to see a guest on a bicycle. The guard wouldn't let Yutina in and said he could have looked for a newer bike. Yi's relatives were also happy to see Wutian and asked each other what burrow he had crawled out of. Chen Kaixin walked over to Wuchen. She seemed very excited. Ye asked Chen why she was crying. The girl replied that something had gotten into her eye. Wutian immediately swooped down on Hao and shouted what he had done to the girl. Ouyang Hao himself looked at Kexin with very sad eyes. He realized that this was the end. Ushan didn't like the bodyguard's attitude towards him and asked him to disappear. Kexin took the young man under her arm and asked him to just get out of there. Yuchen looked at the girl with warmth in his eyes. Kexin looked so pleadingly into his eyes that he had to back away. He reluctantly agreed and told the bodyguard that they still had the last word. He reminded the guards to get out of his way. They stared at the guy dumbfounded. They had no idea who this intruder had decided to chase away. Yuchen pulled out a powder and scattered it directly into the bodyguards' faces. The potion began to take effect instantly, and one of them all started to get triple vision. Another one of the bodyguards slumped on his heel. The bald guard knelt down exhaustedly. He felt suddenly weak. The guests were discouraged by the fact that the security were of absolutely no use at all, even though they were all rumored to be recruited from former special forces. Xinyue and her brother were also surprised that the bodyguards were falling flat on their feet. Anan tensed a little, looking at all this. Yuchen said that he doesn't know what happened, but he knows that she was crying because of them, and he doesn't like that very much. He doesn't like the Ouyang family either. Kexin turned the young man around to leave, and he said goodbye that he had something to say. In the whole world, he is the only one who can afford to offend Chung Kexin, and no one else. The guests were just shocked. No one here thought to offend the girl. Kaixin also pondered his words. Shanyu shrieked that he himself did not realize whose house he was in, and thought he was unknown. Yuchen said he doesn't care at all. He just wants something returned to him. The gift the girl was supposed to give him. Ye asked for the gift back and said they would leave right away. Shanyu was surprised that everything had come down to that box again. He dismissively replied that they didn't have the box. His grandfather doesn't need that garbage. Yuchen was surprised and asked why they didn't even deign to accept the gift. Xianyu said they don't need any junk. Anan thought that the young man was now ruining his reputation, and people might think that the Ouyang family didn't give a damn about their guests. Yuchen laughed and said that everything was clear to him now. He smirked and said that if they didn't want to, that was their business, and it was worse for them. Xinyue walked over to the arguing men and clarified to the young man that he must be young Master Ye. Anan's pretty granddaughter introduced herself and offered her hand for introductions. Utian paid attention to her and thought that she was a pretty girl who could be on the catwalk. The young man said he just wanted his property back. Xinyue smirked. She could see that Ye was being very impudent, but she couldn't afford to bicker with him in front of the guests. The girl replied that the Ouyang family didn't have his belongings, and that Mr. Ning had taken them with him. Wutian asked if he was talking about Peng and asked where he was now. By this point, Ouyang Anan thought it best to withdraw. He had no desire to humiliate himself by taking part in the disputes of the younger generation. Besides, he was confident in his granddaughter's ability to work things out. Xinyue recalled Grandpa Ning's words and realized that he was talking about this particular young man. The girl guessed that the old man's lip wasn't stupid, and he wouldn't admire for nothing. Xinyue asked Ye what his pill was for. He turned his head to her and said it was no big deal, just useless garbage. The young man told Kexin that it was time for them to hit the road. Xinyue turned black with anger. Xiang Yu shouted to his back that Wutian couldn't just turn around and leave after all this. He smirked and asked what other suggestions he had. Xiang Yu was angry. His fingers clenched into fists by themselves, and the young man moved towards Ye. Wutian waited calmly for him. He stood straight and didn't move from his seat. Ye said that Xiang Yu was ignorant. The bodyguards of the distinguished guests indignantly asked him to repeat his words. Wu Tian turned his back to his opponent, about to leave, and Jian Yu shouted to the guards to hold the young man back. Ouyang Hao raised his voice and told him not to touch Wu Tian. Let him go wherever he wanted to go. Xian Yu looked at his older brother in surprise. Hao had a stony expression on his face, and Xian Yu realized that it was best not to argue with him right now. Xiang Yu relented and said he would see how Grandpa would look at it. Jin Yue tried to hand Wu Tian her business card and assured him that she would apologize to him personally. Ye turned his back to her and said he didn't want to contact them anymore. By this he really offended the girl, and she thought Yi was a very haughty type. There was a scream in the mansion, something irreparable had happened and Anan had been shot. The distinguished guests froze. They didn't know how this could have happened. Yuchen said that fate has played a trick on him again. So what should he do this time? Bodyguards rushed in different directions to look for the shooter. Wu Tian was leading a bicycle along the road. Chen Kai-shin was walking beside him. They saw that everyone around them stirred and paused. Soon several police crews pulled up. They were followed by an intensive care vehicle. It turned out that Ouyang Anan was seriously wounded as a result of the shooting in his own mansion. This event not only deprived the chief of the police department of peace, but also caused widespread public outcry. Yutian sat by the small fountain outside the mansion and smirked at how ironic everything was. Xiaomei angrily asked the young man what exactly he found amusing here. She said that once something happens in the city, Yuchen is sure to be at the center of events. The young man noticed that he didn't look for trouble himself. They found him on their own. Mei yelled that she didn't believe him, and she needed to take Yi's statement. Ouyang asked if she would let him go afterward. Xiaomei assumed that Ye was the one who shot Ouyang Anan. The young man was offended and asked to be careful with accusations, because the word is not a sparrow, fly out. Cannot catch. Xiaomei smiled and asked why he was nervous and what he was doing at the scene in the first place. The young man pointed at Chung and said that he was accompanying his queen. She blushed with embarrassment and said, rascal. The Ouyang family's villa grounds were quite lively. Xian Yu also gave a statement to the police officers. They carefully recorded his words. Zhang Xiaomei had already filled out her interrogation form, putting a stop to it. He said sadly that Yushin hadn't visited her mom in a long time. Young said he is confident in his work and her mom will be fine. Xiaomei countered that she wasn't sure herself and asked to check when she had time. Wu Tian promised to stop by the other day. He asked if he and Chung could go. Xiaomei said not yet. While Xiaomei was taking statements from the other witnesses, Wu Tian turned in the other direction. He walked down the alley at a brisk pace, knowing exactly what he needed. Soon the young man discovered Xinyue. She was saddened. Yuchen asked the girl how long they were going to keep him here. Xinyue exclaimed insultedly that no one was keeping him and he could fuck off if he wanted. That was all Duckling needed, and the satisfied young man ran back to the fountain. Xinyue belatedly extended her hand as if trying to stop him. The girl looked sadly at Ducking after her. Heng Tsai and his wife and son saw all of this and looked at the girl in silence. None of the trio knew how to react to the changes that had happened to their troublemaking relative. What was clear was that they could not allow him to return to the Yi family. The young man asked Heng Tsai what he thought about who might have sent the assassin. The man told him to shut up and said that such things were not to be talked about in the street. Guan speculated that it could have been someone from the other three great families. Heng Tsai asked if she had any idea what could be done to her for talking like that. The young man could not calm down and asked his father if the half-wit of their family had really changed. Ye Wutian has always been a carefree moth and a party animal. Such a drastic change is definitely not good. Ye Guang was used to looking down on his cousin, but he couldn't afford more, apparently. Ye Hengkai was also puzzled. Mr. Ning wouldn't lie, so Ye Wutian's medical ability must have been real. He remembered that he had recently heard about the famous Dr. Wu's meeting with Wutian. Heng Tai suggested that it might be related to Mr. Ning. Wutian leisurely wheeled his bicycle along with Chung. They had just passed the business center of the city and entered the Tianxin district. Kexen was silent the whole way. She was very sad about the whole thing. Yuchen turned to her and asked if her bad mood had changed. The girl thanked him for today. Yes smirked and said that he was catching Chang's eye and let her not complain when he reminded her of it. Keishin said she wouldn't allow it. He had made fun of her enough already, and now it was her turn to make fun of the boy. Yuchen noticed that a purple sports car was speeding after them. As the car picked up speed, it quickly overtook the travelers. Suddenly, the brakes squealed, and the car made a semicircle and blocked Utian's path. Xinyue opened the door and apologized for stopping so abruptly. She admits that their family made a big mistake and undeservedly hurt the young man. Xinyue asks her not to hold a grudge and begs for her grandfather's help. Yutian smirked and said that with their options they could afford any doctor. Why would they need one? The girl assured that in the event that Wutian helped them, the Ouyang family would not be indebted to him. Wutian exhaled and said that he actually had nothing against the Ouyang family. But they blew their own chance, so he had nothing to do with it. Xinyue finally realized that that pill could have saved Grandpa and asked if she could buy another pill. Utian explained that it was not about money. He simply does not want to help someone who refused his services on principle. The young man said goodbye to the girl and took Chang further. Xinyue sadly watched the departing couple. She thought that Yuqian really did hate their family very much. The phone rang in the car. It was Genrin calling her. From her father's words, the girl realized that her grandfather had undergone surgery and assured him that he would be in the hospital soon. Anin was in the city's central hospital. It was a large 6-story building. An assistant surgeon came out of the operating room. The old man's relatives were standing under the door. The surgeon reported that they were able to remove the bullet, but Anin's artery was nicked, causing a lot of blood loss. They should prepare for the worst. Genrin shrieked that he would pay any money, but the surgeon was obligated to get his father out. The doctor explained that he understood his feelings, but they had already done all they could. Genrin took out his cell phone and started flipping through it looking for the contacts he wanted. He said they would find the best doctors and assemble a team of specialists as soon as possible, and the sooner the better. Xinyue suggested looking for Ning's grandfather and asking him for a pill. Genrin mockingly asked if she believed in magic pills. The girl said it obviously wouldn't make things worse. Ouyang Gongan agreed with the girl, and added that Mr. Ning had spoken kindly of that medicine. Genrin thought it was still better than nothing. He said that he didn't have Mr. Ning's number, and he didn't know how to find the old man. Gongan said that their salvation is in Yutian, and they can turn to him. Xinyue assured him that she had already asked him, and Wutian replied with an emphatic refusal. Gongan was surprised that the young man refused, and said they could pay him well. The girl replied that the reason was because of his hatred for the Ouyang family. Genrin and Gongan fell silent. They had to think about the information they had received. Genrin sadly said that doctors really shouldn't be angry, fraught with consequences. How Ouyang stood under the wall the entire time and only listened to his little sister. He thought that the rogue Yushin was just padding his own price. Breaking away from the hustle and bustle of the city, Wutian and Chung arrived at the fishing village. The girl admired the beautiful view. She remembered that Yi had said something about the village earlier. Wutian told Chung that locals found and rescued him. The young man thought about the fact that if Liu Fu hadn't killed the real Ye Wutian, he wouldn't have been able to be reborn in this body, so in a way, he was even grateful to him. Kexen smiled and asked Ye to tell what exactly happened to him. Yuchen blanched and said it was like he was flirting with a beautiful middle-aged lady. Chung laughed at his juxtaposition and assumed he liked older women. A thunderous cry echoed behind their backs. The young man ran towards them and called Wuqian as his mentor. It was the same guy who had offered big money to the miracle doctor for his tuition. He threw himself into Yi's arms and cried out that he had missed him very much. Yutian rushed in front of the guy and kicked him in the face with his foot, yelling at him to get off. Chung was very surprised that Ye was called a mentor. Old man Li walked by and said hello to Wutian. The young man responded to his greeting. He still had his foot on the back of the guy's head, keeping him on the ground. Wuqian smiled and introduced Chung Kexen to the old man. The young man said he had it as a kind of ration card. The angry Chung immediately slapped him on the cheeks. She shrieked that she had gone from queen to ration card for him too quickly. Wuqian rubbed his cheeks in pain. Old man Li smirked and decided that the two were close enough. Li asked Wutian if he had brought Waner with him. Ye replied that the girl was very busy with her studies and couldn't get out. Yuchen added that he himself had come to deal with their problem at the girl's request. Li smirked and said the girl was always giving everyone around her a hard time. The old man thought that Wan was still dear to the young man's heart. Wuxian said that at Li's age there is no need to overwork himself and he can handle everything on his own. The old man asked if he had a plan. Wuqian raised his index finger and solemnly called him Old Man Li. He promised that he would definitely make him the first grandfather in the village. The next day the weather was beautiful and the birds were basking in the sunshine. The sudden noise scared them away, and they flew away, losing their prey. A construction crew arrived and they started digging an excavation. Wutian was here, wearing a construction helmet. He was supervising the work and asked to fill the excavation with water. A powerful pump with a compressor was immediately delivered, and work began. Soon the excavation was filled to the brim, forming an artificial lake. The builders reviewed the work plan and discussed it. Li calculated that he had paid 40,000 yuan for one day's work, and figured that he needed to catch a lot of fish to pay it all off. A guy who was applying to be an apprentice came to Utena and asked if he was satisfied with the workers. Ye assured him that there was no need to worry. If the young man recognizes him as his mentor, he won't be left out of pocket. At this rate, they would become millionaires by the end of the year. The boy laughed out loud. He liked the prospect. He laughed so infectiously that Yushin followed suit. Kexen took a picture of him and thought the young man was very cute when he was busy working. She decided to take a couple more photos and immediately started clicking her camera. One evening in a fishing village, Yuchen grinned happily and said that they had completed the job. The artificial reservoir was divided into several parts by concrete bulkheads. The young man asked his mentor why he wanted to do all this. Yuchen smiled and said he needed the pool for lobster farming. The guy objected that they were very difficult to keep. The village had tried to breed them before. He recalled the villagers who had failed. All the lobsters had died off. Yuchen got a little angry and told the young man that he didn't care about those losers. The young man inquired if Wutian knew some secret method. Old Man Lee wasn't sure if this was a good idea, because now he didn't have to worry about Wanner's debts and education. Yuchen smirked and assured that if he promised to lead the old man to success, he would. Lee just needed to rely on him. Yuchen started talking about his secret method and stuck his hand in his pocket. He retrieved one of his marvelous sachets. He printed out an envelope, sprayed the contents, and asked those present to look at the result. The water in the reservoir instantly took on a pinkish hue. Chen Kaixin said it was like dry ice. Taking a closer look, she said, "Dry ice doesn't come in red." Kexin noticed another change and asked why the water had become crystal clear. The young man began to idolize Wutian and exclaimed that the mentor had once again performed a miracle. Yi objected that it's actually called science, not a miracle. He asked me to buy some lobster larvae tomorrow and release them into the pond. Ukan asked me to remember his words and not to throw anything unnecessary into the pond. Only his powder should be added every 3 days for 2 weeks. The young man asked if there would be any side effects. He wanted the lobsters to grow normally. Uchan was indignant and said that he never had any side effects. He assured that the lobsters fed on his powder would be perfectly healthy. In addition, they will grow larger and more presentable than usual. Duck told the guy he just needed to buy some grubs. For the next 2 weeks, the pond and lobsters are on him. E added that this is his contribution to future millions. The young man swore to his mentor that for his sake, he was willing to forget even food and sleep. Yudian said the dietary regimen should not be broken and asked to do his business away from the lobster pond. He handed Old Man Lee a recipe for a medicinal powder. He warned that many people would want to get their hands on this formula when they heard about the lobsters. Lee assured the young man that he would memorize it by heart and commit it to the fire that very night. Chung Kexin watched the men's conversation and listened attentively. She was surprised that Wushin knew so much. There didn't seem to be anything in the whole world that he couldn't handle. Kexin happily caught herself thinking that Ye was very cute, and she couldn't resist taking another picture of him. A notification flashed in the corner of her phone that Chung had 23 unread messages. The girl thought that it had only been 2 days, and she had already received over 24 messages. One of the messages was from an unknown number. Xinyue wondered if Wutian was with her since they couldn't find him. She asked to be informed. Wutian looked at his phone and was surprised that Ouyang Xinyue had Kexin's number. Chung replied that not only Xinyue is looking for him, but also Ouyang Hao and the entire Ouyang family in general. She added that the Ye family is also looking for him. According to Xiaoman, Ye's relatives almost kicked in all the doors in the company while they were looking for him. Wutian said they were only trying to talk him into saving old man Ouyang and should be ignored. That same evening, Ye Wutian set up security cameras around the pond to ensure that the lobsters were safe for sure. This was not enough for the young man, and he additionally installed an alarm system. In total, more than 100,000 yuan was spent in 2 days. Most of this money came from Chung Kexin's pockets. Uthian would come to his queen with a petition and report that the state treasury was empty and needed replenishing. Adopting a majestic pose, Chen condescendingly held out a gold card. While Ye Wutian was busy with his countryside project, the Ouyang family was falling deeper and deeper into chaos. The Ouyang family managed to track down Patriarch Ning, but they were unable to obtain the miracle pill. Ning said that if they needed that medicine, he had already given it to his old friend. On the other hand, the Ye family simply couldn't miss such an opportunity to suck up to the Ouyang family. The patriarch of the Yi family sparked an idea to deliver the cure to the Ouyans and save Annan's life. In that case, the Ouyang family would be greatly indebted to him, and the Ye family would have a bright future ahead of them. Heng Chai said that Heng Dong could just ask Ye Wutian for this medicine. After all, he is his father. Heng Dong was indignant and reminded that everyone was against his interaction with his son before, and now he has to go to him and beg for a pill. He said he wouldn't do it and suggested the others try it. The patriarch stated that in the event that Yi gave them the cure, he would consider returning him to his family. The patriarch and his sons bickered for quite some time. Evening came. The sky was quickly covered with clouds. Yuchen looked out the window and said it would rain most likely. He turned around and asked Chung Kexin if it was time for her to go to her room. The girl hesitated and asked what was the big deal. She didn't want to leave. Chang reminded Ye that it had been quite some time. He might as well turn on his phone too. Yuchen replied that he wanted a couple more days of peace and quiet. The young man sat on the bed next to Chang and asked if she was going to her room or not, as he was tired and wanted to go to bed early tonight. Keishin blushed and was about to say something to him. Suddenly there was a rumble of thunder. It seemed to be very near. The windows of the house immediately lit up with lightning discharges, and Kexin screamed in fear. Yuchen looked at her in surprise. Chung Kexin sat on the bed and wrapped her arms around her head in fear. Yuchen asked her what that was now. Chung was still wiping the tears in her eyes. She said it was all the thunder's fault. Wuqian couldn't believe that a girl like Chung was afraid of thunder. It was somehow not serious. Keishin asked permission to spend the night with him. Wutian replied that it was one thing to spend time together, but it might not be safe to sleep in the same bed. Once again, there was a mighty roll of thunder. Cheng jumped toward Wutian with fear. The girl snuggled her face into his chest and hid from the thunder. Wutian looked at the girl confused, not knowing what to do with her. He noticed her well-built figure. His body betrayed Wutian again, and he began to bleed. Wutian said that it looked like the thunderstorm wouldn't stop soon. Keishin asked to stay with her. The young man smiled and said he had an idea. Kessen asked what that idea was. Wutian winked at her and asked her to sleep with him. Immediately, a black eye appeared under his eye, shining brighter than the sun. Wutian tried to justify that he meant literally. Just sleep and nothing more. If she didn't trust it, let her come up with something on her own. The young man turned away and said he would lie down first and Chang could wait until he fell asleep. The girl didn't particularly like that prospect, and she eyed the guy suspiciously. Unfortunately, there was nothing to do, and she skirted under the blanket, turning to face the young man. Duckling was awake, peeking covertly at the girl. Chang was awake too. She smiled and looked at the guy. Yuchen couldn't stand it any longer and turned to the girl. She smiled and Yuchen hugged her gently. He was faced with the eternal question of whether to give vent to his inner beast or to remain human. The choice was not an easy one. Kaysen wailed resentfully that he wouldn't make a gentleman out of him. Wuqian asked if she wanted an ordinary guy like him to pretend to be a gentleman. He said it's very simple. Wuqian explained that he didn't really intend to break his word. It was just that some things were beyond him. He smiled and offered to let Chang herself finish for him. Just then he was brought down by another hard fist punch. The next day, early morning. Old man Li saw Wuqian and Kexin leave the room. He asked Yushin what was wrong with his eyes. Wuqian joked back and said he was walking and fell and woke up with a black eye. Li wondered how the guy had managed to fall over both eyes at once. Kexin looked away so as not to give herself away. Uchan said he and Li had better go and check out the pond. Li said he fell, which is not what comes to mind. Kexin apologized to E. He thought that the old man didn't have to voice it out loud. Yuchin said she didn't have to apologize. Just have her warn him next time. At least he'd stock up on painkillers. Chang smiled and hesitated for a while. He thought he actually meant what he said about the painkillers. A red car began to pull into the yard. Yutian kept a close eye on the approaching car. The car stopped, and Wang Fangxi jumped out. She asked him how he was doing and noticed the bruises under his eyes. Ye Wuqian, pretending to correct his glasses pathetically, told reporter Wang that he had a better opinion of her. Wuqian looked at the girl and sarcastically remarked how she might not know the latest fashion trends. Not confused, reporter Wang Fangxi, pointing his thumb down, also sarcastically responds to Wutian's outburst. Quickly changing her mood and placing her hand at her side, Fangxi resented how long she had been looking for a guy. Smearing ointment on his bruises, Wutian wonders if reporter Wang told the Ouyang and Ye families about his whereabouts. Fangxi spread her hands to the side and sighed heavily. She assured that she had not told anyone, but also reminded her of the capabilities of the Ouyang family and Ye Wutian's relatives. Wutian couldn't understand what the Ye family wanted from him. Fangxi replied that the Ye family wanted to please the Ouyang family. Reporter Wang explains that the Yi family's power is limited to Dongcheng. The map shows a designated area of Huaxia country run by the Ouyang family. The Ye family wants their support to reach the national level. Ye Wutian ironically pointed out that with the Ye family's calculating nature, they wouldn't have any problems. A car drives up to the house. The men of the Yi family get out. Kessen stands saddened by the end of their quiet days. The men look around, studying the area and surveying the surroundings. Kessen calls out to Wuqian's father with a shy smile. Mr. Ye confusedly scratches his cheek, not expecting to see Quesine. His gaze catches Ye Wutian's eye. Uchin looks at his father haughtily with a dose of annoyance, crossing his arms. Mr. Ye turns serious in an instant, turning to Wutian. Duck, standing surrounded by reporter Wang and Quesine, asks to repeat what Mr. Ye said, as he doesn't think the latter has the right to call him by name. Mr. Ye's older brother raised his voice at Wutian out of disrespect for his own father, reminding him that it was Mr. Ye who gave him that name. Wutian, still standing with his arms folded, points out that he doesn't know him, and he has no right to interfere in another's conversation. The eldest brother of the Yi family can't find the words to express his indignation. Pointing a finger of rebuke, the elder continues to shout that Wuqian has done nothing for the family. Wuqian calmly, but with obvious irritation, reminds Elder Master Yi that he is nothing to him at the moment. Senior Master Yi's son gets involved in the dispute, demanding respect from Wuqian for the elder. Wuqian threatens Senior Master Ye's son to shut up, swinging at him. Mr. Ye's son is frightened into silence. Wutian recalls that it was Ye's family who wanted him to renounce the inheritance. The men look at him. The son and father avoidantly avert their eyes as Wutian rebukes them for their fickleness. Wuqian's father asks the man to listen to him, but Wutian rudely interrupts him. Turning around and getting ready to leave, Wutian drops the phrase that he doesn't want anything from them and asks them to get out. Rapport Wang and Quesin were shocked by Wutian's actions. The older brother of the Ye family does not sincerely ask for Wutian's forgiveness, saying that they did not come here empty-handed. The Yi family's older brother puts his hand on Wutian's shoulder and tries to explain that some circumstances might justify their behavior. With a strained smile, he clarifies that this is Wutian's chance to return to his family. Hearing this, Wutian smiles and looks over his shoulder at the uninvited guests and offers his terms. Standing proudly in front of Ye's family members, Wutian demands half of the entire property. Wutian asked the relatives why they were suddenly silent. If there was nothing to say, they could roll on all four sides. Hengqian stared at him, various thoughts troubling him. Kexin walked over to Hengdong and said that it would be best for them not to bother Wutian anymore. Hengdong asked the girl what he had done wrong. Chung said that she didn't think she had the right to discuss such things. She assured that she would try to talk to Wutian herself later. Handong sighed and said that it was time to go back. Hengqian cried out that his own son had completely lost his way and was not listening to his own father. Guan also tried to convince him and said that this might be their last chance. Hengdong admitted that he was a bad father and asked if it was his fault. The man recalled that they themselves had done everything they could to separate Hengdong from their son. Handong said as he walked away. The brother and nephew stood and watched in silence. Ye Guan asked what they should do now, since uncle was leaving. Hengqian said that since Wutian didn't even listen to his father, he wouldn't listen to them all the more. The white car sped away and Wutian's relatives drove away. Hengqian drove the car and asked Guan how things were with Xinyue. Guan smirked and said that Xinyue was a strong woman and would not be approached so easily. The young man added that Xinyue is very careful about his behavior and does not make close acquaintances. Hengqian said that it didn't work out amicably, and all he has to do is give away Wutian's location to the girl and let her solve the problem herself. Looking at his son, he added that it would be a chance for him to get closer to Xinyue. Ouyang Family Villa, day. Xinyue sat on the couch and asked Xiao Ai how the negotiations with Jihao were going. The girl replied that progress was slower than planned, but it should be resolved in a few days. Xinyue said she was worried that everyone concerned already knew about the misfortune that had befallen their family. The girl's phone rang. It was Ye Guang. Xinyue thought about how many people would benefit from her grandfather's death. Xiao waited the whole time for Madame to talk on the phone. The girl ended the conversation and said that they had managed to find Ye Wutian. Ye Guang stood outside the white car and waited for Xinyue. Soon the girl pulled up beside him and Guan stared at her. Xinyue apologized for keeping Mr. Guan waiting. Guan said it was no big deal and volunteered to show the way, reaching for the doorknob. Xinyue quickly slammed her hand on the handle and motioned for Ye to drive forward. If one were to believe what was said, no man had ever traveled with Ouyang Xinyue in the same car, including her father. Guan thought that this seemed to be true. The white car roared to life, and soon they were moving out of town. Xiao asked how much Xinyue believed in Ye Wutian's abilities. All she herself had heard was that Wutian was just a hustler with a bad temper who no one took seriously. Xinyue replied that she knew everything, since they had met in person, but it gives at least some chance. Xiao said that there was no way she could understand how Ye Wutian could have changed so suddenly. It's like he became a completely different person overnight. They stopped at a stoplight, and Xinyue asked Ai if she was hinting at his switch. She admitted that she had similar suspicions too, but all indications are that the guy is the real Ye Wuchen. Besides, all that matters to her is that he can help her grandfather. Xinyue added that according to the information she had received, Ye Wutian not only had a trashy temper, but also had marvelous medicinal techniques. Ye Guang stopped and got out of the car. Xinyue followed suit. Guang courteously said that they had arrived at the place and he would escort the girl out. Xinyue proudly walked past, thanked Ye, and said she didn't wish to annoy him anymore. Guan was furious. The girl just decided to get rid of him like that. He smiled his best and said he didn't mind at all. Guang assured him that it was easy to get lost here and asked where he should wait for the girl. Xinyue dropped his hand from her shoulder and said that she shouldn't be kept waiting. If she needed help, she would contact Guan. Seeing her proud gait, the young man grew angrier and angrier. He screwed himself up enough to hit the glass of his car with all his might. Guan was angry that this woman was simply unapproachable to him. Chung sat with Fancy and Wuqian and discussed the future of the case. Kexin said that the first batch of lobsters would soon be ready for sale. She checked with Wuqian to see if he had found a buyer. Ye said that they have a famous reporter with them, so the customers are not to worry about. He asked Wang Fangxi to do a little promotion. The girl resented that he was always disappearing, and when he needed help, he went straight to Wang Fangxi. She asked why she had to help him. At this moment, Ouyang Xinyue walked into the patio. Wuqian and Kexin looked at her warily. The young man smirked that this girl would be their customer. Wang Fangxi recognized Xinyue and was surprised. He didn't think the girl would come in person. Xinyue bowed and greeted Mr. Ye. He smiled and said that her appearance here was very unexpected. Xinyue stated that she wanted to apologize again for the misunderstanding with Mrs. Chung. Wu Tian objected that he didn't know of any misunderstanding. Xinyue bowed her head in deference and thanked Wu Tian for his generosity. Ye smirked and admired Xinyue. She now reminded him of a girl from a good family, all polite and cultured and successful. She doesn't even hold her nose. Too bad the same can't be said for her family. And a rich one at that. Wu Tian knew very well that she and Xinyue were like heaven and earth. The young man said that Miss Ouyang had hardly come a long way for no reason. He asked Kexin to tell Huji to bring him some lobsters. He put on a chef's hat and said that he was in charge of lunch today. Xinyue couldn't understand what kind of lobsters and lunch this guy was talking about. Some time passed. The girls found something to talk about. At last, Yuchen solemnly brought in a large lobster occupying the whole dish. Assistant Yi asked the young man if he used any special ingredients, because it smells very appetizing. Wang Fangxi hesitantly took a bite of the dish and sent it into her mouth. To her surprise, it turned out to be very tasty. At that moment, Wu Qian seemed like the greatest culinary expert of all time to her. But she still roughly said that of course Wu Tian had used something special. After all, otherwise this geezer wouldn't have been able to cook something so delicious. Wu Qian promised to take Fancy's portion along with her chopsticks if she didn't shut up, so the journalist decided to keep quiet for a while. Chung confessed that Ye is actually a very good cook, and he has his own spices. Kexin said that she can't imagine life without his dishes anymore. Wu Qian offered Miss Ouyang a taste of lobster. He assured her that he hadn't seasoned it with anything special. Xinyue didn't refuse and elegantly grabbed the lobster with her chopsticks. The girl tasted it carefully, savoring the flavor. Suddenly, she realized that these lobsters were the best thing she had tasted in a while. Xinyue recognized that the lobster was tender and tasted good. Yuchen smiled and said, by the way, lobsters are good for women's beauty. Xinyue lit up and asked if the master had any more of these lobsters for sale. Yuchen hesitated and said he didn't know. He'd have to think about it. Wu Tian said that the cultivation technology of his lobsters is unique and the price is quite high. Therefore, he cannot immediately agree to Xinyue's proposal. The girl said they would easily come to an agreement if it was only a matter of price. Yudian squinted his eyes and was glad that his guest had been caught in the act. Xinyue wasn't surprised that Ye didn't name a price right away. She noticed that these lobsters were good enough to haggle over. Wu Tian said that since Mrs. Ouyang asked him, he wouldn't bend the price too much. The young man said he would sell her the lobsters for only twice the market price. Xinyue said she was fine with the proposal. In fact, the girl was willing to buy them even at triple the price. All the more so because a couple of lobsters wouldn't ruin her. Wu Qian smiled and said that Mrs. Ouyang could pick up the lobsters anytime she wanted. He added that there are not that many of them, only 300 pieces. Xinyue was dumbfounded that she herself had jumped into the trap and would have to buy 300 lobsters. Chang was also surprised that Wu Tian just took 300 lobsters and sold them so easily. Wang Fangxi was again jealous that Ye was able to make money so easily. The partner was excited about the success and said they could grow 300 lobsters at a time. If they dug another pond, that would yield 600 lobsters next month. He shouted that at this rate Mr. Li would become the richest man in the village, and he himself would earn more than his annual salary. Xinyue offered to sign a formal contract. She said that the Ouyang family was willing to buy up all their lobsters in the future. At this moment, Old Man Li burst into the house shouting. Yu-in said he was supposed to keep an eye on the pond and asked what happened. The old man squealed that all their lobsters were being bought. Uchan asked who the buyer was. He knew that rumors of their lobster hadn't had to spread so quickly yet. A pretty girl with pink hair walked in and said she was the one buying the lobsters. Xinyue stared at the newly arrived guest for a while. Uchan couldn't resist the temptation and stared at her charms, clamping his nostrils shut in advance. He knew his body couldn't take it, and the bleeding would resume. Fancy and Chang could see perfectly well where Wu Tian was staring at and looked at him with resentment. The female customers walked out to each other and faced each other chest to chest. Xinyue recognized Sister Wei, and she said that she didn't expect to see Xinyue here. Yuchen was surprised that the girls knew each other and flashed a picture of them. Xinyue introduced Situ Wei. This girl is the richest member of Situ's family. Kexin understood in a flash. She remembered that Situ was one of the 4 great families. But Cheng didn't know what Situ was doing here or how she knew about the lobsters. Wei laughed and said that she was being too stiff. Situ inquired about Mr. Ouyang's health. Xinyue said he was much better, and she thanked Wei for her concern. Situ said Enan's recovery is good news. She told Wu Qian that she wanted to buy all his lobsters and pulled out a check for 10 million yuan as collateral for their long-term partnership. Wu Tian was simply stunned by this amount. As much as 10 million fell into his hands just out of thin air. Xinyue watched this scene with sadness. It looked like she wouldn't get the lobsters. However, Uchan was in no hurry to accept the check. Crossing his arms over his chest, he asked the girl how she knew about the lobsters. Wei first hesitated, then smiled a dazzling smile. The girl immediately laughed out loud. Her blouse began to crack suspiciously right in front of Yi's eyes. He frowned at the girl's charms. Duck felt like her breasts were about to pop out of her blouse. When his fantasy reached its peak, the young man had to turn away and cover his nose with the palm of his hand. Wei laughed and said that Wutian might not have heard of her, but she had heard a lot about him. The young man asked if the girl had been following him. Wei replied that he had nothing to worry about and that no one was following him, just that his name had been on everyone's lips lately. Wutian was surprised to think that he was already famous. The girl added that his acquaintance Zhang Xiaomei was her cousin. Only now did Ye notice a slight resemblance between them. Wutian looked at her intently, trying to figure out if she was lying or not. He said that Zhang's mother was seriously ill, and he had never seen Wei visit her. If she was telling the truth, she's not a very good cousin. The girl was embarrassed and explained that they used to be much closer to each other. She asked to get back to the lobster issue. Meanwhile, Li and Yuchin's partner were already celebrating the favorable deal and shaking hands. The young man mentally prodded Yushin and asked him to hurry up and accept the ill-fated check. Wutian stated that Wei was a little late, as he had already promised to sell the lobsters to Xinyue. As tempting as the offer sounded, a deal is a deal. Xinyue reported that she and Ye were just discussing the details of their partnership, and this time Wei would have to leave empty-handed. Wei was not embarrassed in the slightest and took Wutian gently by the chin. She said that there were many more opportunities for them to work closely together in the future. She dropped the check down by the scruff of his shirt and asked him to keep the $10 million as collateral from a future relationship. At the same time, Wei whispered in his ear in a languorous voice that she would be looking forward to their next meeting with great anticipation. Yuchin rubbed his ear and asked if the girl was afraid he'd just run off with the money. She looked at him carefully and said he didn't look like that kind of person. Wutian realized that she had figured out a lot about him and was surprised at the scope of her activities. The young man took out a check, and Wei said she would leave the two of them with Xinyue. Wutian asked the girl to wait and demanded to pick up the check. She smiled. It was obvious that she'd considered that option too. Wei said that Ye is not as simple as he seems and asked to accept at least her business card. She passed her business card into his hands and smiled slyly. She said that since Wuchen knew her number, he could return the favor. Wutian understood the girl's train of thought without much difficulty. She tried to make him her debtor first, then partner with him. And when that didn't work, she decided to just get Yutena's number. That's how Situe got Ye Wutian's phone number. She waved goodbye and promised they would call again. Seeing that Wuchen was uncomfortable and trembling, Chang angrily called him a pervert. Meanwhile, Xinyue took Yi aside and asked him to talk privately. Wutian and Xinyue strolled along the shore, and Ye clarified if she was here because of her grandfather. Xinyue said that she hoped very much for his help. Wutian said her grandfather looks at everyone with prejudice despite his venerable age. More importantly, he humiliated Chung in public. Ye can't turn a blind eye. Xinyue bowed her head and apologized for Anan. Wushin simply waved it away. He said he did not answer the phone because he has no desire to cross the path of someone who had the audacity to organize an assassination attempt on her grandfather. Xinyue assured him that if he agreed, she would guarantee his safety. Wutian smirked. How could she guarantee his safety? He clarified that they are not even able to provide security to their own family. How can we talk about anyone else? He added that the medicine is not that miraculous. It is meant to keep the patient from dying. Anan is already in a coma and the pill will not help him. Xinyue was surprised that Wutian wouldn't be able to wake up her grandfather. He looked at her carefully and asked if she was disappointed in his abilities. Xinyue clarified whether Wutianu liked Miss Chung. The young man blushed, and the expression in his eyes was very eloquent. He said that Xinyue himself has a clue what happened between them. Chen Kaixin had done a lot for him in the past. Now the young man just wants the girl to be happy, Xinyue interjected, asking if he would agree to help his grandfather if she guaranteed their safety. Ye caught himself thinking that he hadn't said such a thing at all, and Xinyue was no better than Situe. The next day, Wutian, Chung, and Fancy prepared to leave and bid farewell to the village. Old Man Li asked if Wutian wanted to stay a little longer. Yuchin's partner remembered that Yi never stopped by to visit him. Wutian explained that he had just promised Wan Er to make it so that Li wouldn't need to go to sea. Now they have a lobster pond, and Ye's promise has been fulfilled. The old man cried out that he just couldn't sit still and do nothing. Wuchen told the young man that he had asked Li to pay him 100,000 monthly from the sale of lobsters. He exclaimed joyfully that he would soon be a millionaire. The guy immediately began to make endless bows and thank yous. Wuchen told him that it was his share of the proceeds, and asked him not to let Old Man Li go to sea, or even to take care of him. The young man reported without a backward glance that he had already broken his grandfather's boat, just as Wuchen had asked him to do. Li heard that it was him, and chased after him with a stick. Wuchen actually hoped Li would never find out about it. But what happened was what happened. Fancy started sucking up to Wuchen, and said that she had heard that he was going to start his own business. She asked him if he needed an investment. She smiled and said that money was sticking to him, and any investment was just doomed to success. Fancy suggested that make money together. This angered the young man, and he said that he would pay her rent, but that she should not try to take credit for his success. The girl shrieked resentfully that she would pay, of course. The next day they arrived in the Tianshan area. Cheng blinked as she made herself comfortable on the couch and said that it was good to be home. Yutian reminded her that he'd offered to stay home, but she hadn't wanted to. The young man asked Kexen if she had thought of anything for company. Chang smiled and said that he would need employees to start, and she suggested starting with her own candidacy. Wushin hung the shirt on the rack and turned around surprised. He asked Cheng why start with her. Kexen shrieked indignantly. What was the problem? Cheng reminded Uchian that she had already raised the firm alone once before, and asked why it didn't meet the young man's requirements. Wushin said it's fine, but he's curious as to why Kexen wants to work with him. Cheng asked what she was dissatisfied with him, and added that she didn't want to be hired just because of pity. Wuchen said that with her experience and ability, Cheng would be hired by any company. Ye asked why Kaixin wanted to work with him. Kaixin hesitated, not knowing what to say. She tilted her head and pondered the answer for a while. Chang straightened up and firmly told Wutian that she just wanted to be with him. Ye's heart began to beat harder and harder. He was glad to hear the words more and more. Without waiting for an answer, Kexen turned around and left, saying that they had an agreement. Yuchen was embarrassed and blushed. He had a lot to think about. Ye threw his hands behind his head and dreamily thought that Chang had really fallen in love with him. Suddenly the phone rang in my pocket. Yuchen took the call asking who he had the honor of speaking to. It was his acquaintance Dr. Wu Quansheng. Yuchen was angry that everyone was getting his number from somewhere despite the confidentiality. He asked what the doctor needed. The doctor said he had very important news and asked me to come to him. Soon, the young man arrived at Professor Quansheng's house. They sat at the coffee table and chatted. Wushin asked Dr. Wu how much of his information could be trusted. Wu replied that this is a very important event for the whole of Chinese medicine, and their professional prestige is at stake. Yuyan asked what this had to do with him, since he didn't even have a diploma. The doctor replied that none really, but that they needed the young man himself very much. Yutian asked why he should help them in that case. Let them manage on their own as best they could. Dr. Wu asked him not to get heated and said that he may not have explained things correctly. Quan Sheng suggested having a little snack and thoroughly discussing everything again. He said that Wutian could pass the time in his office if he wished, while he tooled around in the kitchen. He strode to the office and muttered that the doctor was tempting him. After a quick look through the bookcase, Uchan concluded that the doctor had a lot of all sorts of books, but most of them were lowbrow medical nonsense. He told himself that it was not easy to become a real expert. He wasn't sure if there would be any worthwhile books in this mass of books. Suddenly his attention was drawn to a book that stood unremarkable and seemed to be lost in the background. The young man said it could be a needle in a haystack, and immediately reached for it. The cover of the book indicated that it was dedicated to the collection of Peach Blossom. The title of the book puzzled Yushin, and he began flipping through it with interest. He concluded that the contents of the book were not obvious, and the old man might not have realized its true value. Dr. Wu came into the library, announced that the food was ready, and invited Wutian to the table. He showed him a book he had recently found and asked what it was about. Quan Sheng brushed off that it was a fake martial arts book bought at a flea market for $5. Wutian interrogated the doctor as to why he thought it was fake. He said that for his years, the doctor is in pretty good health as it is, and for his own good, he will confiscate the book. Quan Sheng smiled and repeated that it was just a fake. If Ye needs this book, he can take it away. Suddenly, the doctor's phone rang. The voice became very anxious, and Wu assured his interlocutor that he would get there as fast as he could. The doctor said he had to go back to the hospital right away, and so did Yutenya. It was about their mutual acquaintance. The young man asked again who this common acquaintance was. Quan Sheng replied that it was about Zhang Xiaomei. Wutian cried out and asked what happened to her. The doctor said that Zhang had a gunshot wound to the head and was in critical condition. The young man grunted. He never would have thought this could happen. He rushed to the door and shouted to the doctor that they were on their way now. They rushed to the city's central hospital as fast as they could. The entrance to the operating room was securely guarded by 2 police officers. Just then, Wuqian spotted Chief Zhang. He recognized him too. Wuqian ran up to Principal Shu. With a shriek, he asked for an account of what had happened. The chief narrated that Zhang was investigating the attempted assassination of Ouyang Anan and received information that the suspect was hiding in a commercial district. Shu added that Zhang Xiaomei was seriously injured and doctors are currently fighting for her life. Wutian bowed his head and asked why Zhang had acted so recklessly. She knew the criminal was armed after all. Shu grabs Ye by the shoulders and yells that he just has to save her. He recognizes that the girl has a bad temper, but she is selfless in her duties. Soon the door of the operating room opened. A surgeon emerged from the room, removing his mask as he went. He said he was sorry, and they did everything they could. Shu and Wutian looked at him. They were both overwhelmed with emotion. Shu shouted that the doctor just had to save her and grabbed him by the shoulders. The surgeon replied that he understood his feelings, but the girl's wound was too serious. The bullet had entered from the right side of her chest. Principal Shu slammed his fist into the wall with all his might and said that there was no such thing. While the police officers comforted the officer, Yi asked Dr. Wu what he intended to do. Quan Sheng said that this man is the best surgeon in the hospital, and if he says something, it's true. Wu Tian shouted indignantly, "What other top surgeon and what other specialist?" He exclaimed that a real specialist would not have given up. Pushing the doctor away, Yi headed toward the operating room. Yuchen promised that he would now show them all a real expert. Before entering the room, he stopped and turned around. Yi asked Quan Sheng not to let anyone in and to find 2 nurses. He also demanded 2 boxes of silver needles and some large container. Everyone watched the young man walk confidently into the operating room. Quan Sheng told the surgeon that the patient could still be saved if Wu Tian took over, so we should hurry up and carry out all his instructions. The first thing Uchan did was to prepare a large vat of clean water. The young man quickly changed into the proper clothes and pulled open the sheet that covered Zhang. He realized that in addition to the gunshot wound to the chest, Xiaomei's face was damaged. Even if she survived, the wounds would surely leave a mark. He pulled out one of his powders and thought he could heal the wound with his powder, but it would clearly not be enough. He stared at the naked Zhang like a conspiratorial man. Yuchen thought she looked very seductive. The young man decided that with such a woman one must behave with great restraint, otherwise there would be trouble. Yudian finally caught himself thinking completely out of the box and began to fiercely whip his cheeks, trying to focus. He commanded the nurses to lower Zhang into a prepared vat of water. One of them objected that in that case water would get into her chest. Uchan explained that nothing would happen. The water had dissolved medicine in it. They just needed to follow his orders. The nurses hurriedly carried Xiaomei into the water tank. Wu Tian anxiously thought that he had little knowledge of surgery, and after all, such wounds were dangerous even in his time. He concluded that there was only hope for the previously studied method of acupuncture. The door to the operating room was heavily guarded. Director Shu asked Wu why there was no news of the patient. After all, it had been almost 4 hours. Quan Sheng replied that he himself did not know what Wu Chen was doing. They could only wait. Meanwhile, members of the Ouyang family approached them. Xian Yu told the officer that Shu had indeed been in the hospital all this time, and asked him what the status of catching the culprit was. Principal Shu shouted out what Ouyang Xian Yu wanted from him. The young man smirked and said he wanted the killer's whereabouts. He asked what good the law enforcement officers were to him, noting that they were just sitting around doing nothing. One of the police officers couldn't take it anymore and yelled that they were investigating days and nights on end, and the captain was between life and death because of it. This surprised the young man, and he asked if they thought the captain's life was more important than his father's. The second officer said he was talking nonsense. How could he think their captain's life was worthless? Xian Yu asked the man how he got so smart and boasted that all it took was one word and the officer would immediately fly off the force. Director Shu shouted that he shouldn't burrow in, and it wasn't for Xian Yu to decide which of his men to fire. Xian Yu asked Director Yuanhua if the police chief's epaulets were too tight for him. He promised that he would be thrown out on the street within 3 days too. Shu said that might be a possibility, but he should hold his tongue until then. Dr. Wu watched the altercation and thought that this young man was a total disappointment to the family. Shu asked Dr. Wu to check on things in the operating room. Quan Sheng recalled that Ye Wutian had repeatedly said that he should not be distracted. They had better be patient. Xian Yu smirked and asked if he was referring to the same Ye Wutian. It turns out that the very same doctor from the Yi family that's been wanted all over town is just here in the operating room right now. Principal Shu asked Xian Yu what he cared about. Xiang Yu sicked his bodyguards and demanded that the young man be brought to him immediately. He shouted that a patient was waiting for him. Dr. Wu blocked their way and said there was an operation going on. He asked if they wanted to kill the injured girl. He shouted that no one should disturb Ye Wutian while the operation was going on. No one at all. Xian Yu contemptuously asked whose life could be more important than his grandfather's, and what interest they had in it. One of the bodyguards hit Dr. Wu. He fell down. Squatting beside the door, Quan Sheng demanded the principal to stop them. Shu was getting angrier and angrier by the second. He decided that he would rather tear off his epaulets himself than let a subordinate die. Shu quickly pulled out his gun, aimed at the nearest bodyguard, and ordered everyone away from the operating room door. All the guards turned pale with fear and froze. Xiang Yu also clearly did not expect this turn of events and recoiled to the side. He asked how dare they point guns at him and said they could shoot if they had the guts. Shu reiterated that no one would enter the operating room without his authorization and demanded to stay put. Xian Yu turned pale. He didn't expect such a backlash from the police chief. Xin Yui appeared in the corridor. The girl walked at a brisk pace. She squealed at what was going on here and what Xiang Yu was allowing herself to do. The young man replied that he only wanted to ask Ye Wutian to cure his grandfather. He added that she herself should watch her tone when he addressed her brother. Shin-yue remarked in surprise that the request seemed very strange, and assured the young man that his uncle would find out what had happened. Xianyu asked if she was threatening him. Shin-yue replied that she can't threaten her own brother. She just puts it in front of the fact. She told Dr. Wu that he didn't have to worry. No one would dare to pressure him in her presence. Police Chief Shu ordered everyone to put their weapons away. Xiangyu said he was doing it for their grandfather and she'd better not interfere. Shin-yu rebuked the young man for thinking he was smarter than the rest. He greatly overestimates his ingenuity. Dr. Wu watched the family squabble in amazement. He thought that the Ouyang family members were not afraid of making a mess. Shin-yue looked hopefully at the doors of the operating room. She wondered if Wu-qian could perform another miracle. Suddenly the doors swung open. 2 nurses led the exhausted Dr. Yi out under his arms. They held him gently with both hands and watched his every move. Quan Sheng asked Wu-tian how the operation went. The nurse cheerfully exclaimed that the patient's condition had stabilized. The second nurse said that the doctor had performed a miracle. A real miracle. Wu-tian modestly said that he has to live up to expectations after all. The police were very surprised. He managed to save a patient who even a famous surgeon considered hopeless. They started shouting that the young man was a miracle worker, and he was actually a miracle doctor. The agitated Principal Shu put his hand on the guy's shoulder and thanked him fervently. Dr. Wu ran off somewhere and promised to bring a doctor who could further take care of Zhang Xiaomei's health. Xianyu frowned and thought that what happened here would definitely attract the attention of the world. He pushed the bodyguards aside and told Wu-tian that he was asking to cure his grandfather. Xianyu asked how much the miracle doctor's services cost. Yuten sat on the floor in the hallway and drank water greedily. He said caustically that the Ouyang family had such a loyal grandson. Ye asked if he really cared so much about his grandfather. Xianyu frowned and asked Wu-tian what he was implying. Wu-tian explained that judging from his actions, Xiangyu had come to anger him, not to ask for help. Xianyu asked for the show to stop and demanded to be told the cost of his grandfather's treatment. Wu-tian stood up and said that he certainly didn't like Ouyang Hao, but in hypocrisy, he was far from his brother standing here. Xiangyu became furious and shouted that Wu-tian knew of his capabilities and still dared to talk to him like that. Wu-tian told the principal that Zhang's life was out of danger, but that they needed to keep a better eye on her from now on. Principal Shu put his fist to his chest and assured the young man that he would take care of everything. After finishing all the important matters, Wu-tian left the hospital. Shin-yue ran behind and asked him to wait for a while. She showered him with compliments and said his medical skills were truly amazing. Wu-tian smiled and wondered if she was only running to flatter him. Shin-yue looked sadly at the doctor and said that she was really counting on his help. The young man said that she saw everything herself. If he agrees, he will make enemies who don't want the old man to get well, including Ouyang's family members. Yu-chin said he just can't afford to take that kind of risk. He added that if you get involved with a big family like theirs, and then there will be a lot of problems. Xiang Yu watched his sister and Wu-tian's conversation from the window and realized that the negotiations had failed. He pulled out his phone, found the right contact, and dialed Elon's number. From that day forward, Ye Wu-tian's peaceful life was finally shattered in a most unforeseen way. He became very famous in no time, and all the paparazzi in the country started hunting him. On the city news, the newscaster was talking about saving the life of a patient whom doctors recognized as hopelessly ill. On another TV channel, an anchor asked viewers what mystery lies behind the medical talents of a young boy from the Yi family. Plasma panels on major buildings in Dongcheng showed round-the-clock reports about the miracle-working doctor expelled from the Yi family. After hearing the news, many rich people and tycoons began to seek a meeting with Ye Wu-tian. One of them said on live TV that he would pay 10 million to the person who would find Ye Wu-tian for him. Soon a whole crowd of journalists and correspondents formed outside his house. They noisily asked the doctor to come out and promised they would only ask a few questions. Journalists knocked on his door and begged for interviews. One of them shouted out that if the young man needed a spouse, their Lover P channel was ready to provide their services. Wu-tian sneaked past them at that time. He wore a dust mask, goggles, and a hood for concealment. Yi thought uneasily that in a few days they had managed to find out all his details. Yu-chin concluded that at this rate, he would soon have to hide his underwear. The phone vibrated. A new message came through. Chung Kexin was worried that everyone would soon find out about their life together. Yu-chin wrote her back and offered to use this for a PR campaign. He notified her of his visit to the hospital and asked her to keep reporters out. Ouyang family villa. Patriarch Anan lay in a coma under IV fluids. On the bed beside him sat Ye Gongren. Shin-yue stood beside him. Gongan shouted that day after day, quack doctors do nothing but confer. Shin-yue was careful to say that not everyone in their family wanted Grandpa's recovery. Gongan said sadly that there are 3 other families besides this one. The father added that Nangong's family is entirely focused on show business, but he is not sure about the other 2 at all, especially Situ's family. Shin-yue said that she had seen Sita Wei not long ago, and they were clearly up to something. The girl added that Ye Wutian doesn't want to help them because she is worried about her life. Gongan said the most important thing is the doctor's approval, and then he'll figure something out. The country house of the Yi family. Fei Chao sat on the sofa, hugging her knees, watching TV. The news announcer was broadcasting about a miracle doctor who had appeared in Dongcheng. The girl sobbed and asked Yi where he was now, as if he could hear her. Fei couldn't stand it and cried after all. All she wanted was for Wutian to come home. Wutian arrived at the hospital to check on Zhang Xiaomei. Dr. Wu and Police Chief Shu were already in the room. Ye looked at Xiaomei. Shu couldn't stand the oppressive silence and asked what he could say. Wutian assured that the girl was on the mend and should wake up as early as tomorrow. The young man asked if anything could be done to Zhang Xiaomei's face and complained that he was fed up with the reporters. He just doesn't know how to get rid of them. Quan Sheng said that this was his chance to become famous, because with his medical skills, Wutian wouldn't be able to stay in the shadows for long anyway. The young man said he just wanted to get away from those journos. Shu suggested two options. Wutian had to either continue hiding or wait for the public to lose interest in him. He said that makes sense, but he might be old by then. Suddenly, the door opened and Sitsi appeared on the doorstep. She announced that she had a proposal. Wushin said that here comes Ning's family and asked what she was offering. Sitsi replied that she would help Yi if he went with her. Soon the dark car pulled away from the hospital. They drove in complete silence. Wutian first looked at the road and considered everything around him. Soon the young man got bored and turned to the window, but nothing interesting was happening there either. Then Yi began to scrutinize his driver. Sitsi didn't like that and asked her not to look at her like that. The young man reminded her that she had promised to tell him something, so he was waiting. Uchan said that she probably meant her old man Nina, because she didn't have enough brains for anything. Sitsi asked him to shut up and promised to repay him for everything sooner or later. He asked where she would shoot now, in the chest, or straight to the head to be sure. Sitsi resented that she had already apologized. It was time to let it go. Yuten asked how she herself would have acted if he had raped her, then apologized. The girl couldn't stand it, squealed that he was a pervert and added speed. Yuchen continued to piss her off and said he would teach her another lesson since her fiancé didn't have time. He asked her to keep her pocket wide open. Sitsi did her best not to immediately lose her temper. The girl pressed the gas pedal to the floor. She was starting to get annoyed. The engine roared at maximum RPM. Sitsi squeezed out maximum speed. Yutian was scared and shouted that there was no need to put so much pressure on the gas. He only had one life. Ning family home. Armed bodyguards in army uniforms guard the perimeter. Patriarch Ning happily told Wuqian that they had met again. He replied that he was glad to see the old man in good health. He laughed and said he was glad to hear that. It had been a long time since anyone had said that about him. Shiki got angry and asked Yi to be a little more respectful. Uchin asked how the future son-in-law was doing and when he would find a solution for the bride. Nin asked what he meant. Yi replied that we just need to see how Sitsi behaves. That said it all. Shiki shouted and asked her grandfather not to listen to Wutian. Ning smiled and said that in that case, let her tell first. Siki felt wronged and fell silent, looking away. Then she ran out and slammed the door. Nin and Wutian looked after her. There was a pause. Grandpa Ning asked if Wutian was seeking his granddaughter's hand in marriage. Yi got scared and shouted that he shouldn't joke like that. He wouldn't marry Siki for any money. Nin chuckled and suggested getting to the point of how to keep him safe from reporters. Wutian asked what Ning wanted for his help. The old man said he was interested in the powder the young man used to heal the gunshot wound. He said that the importance of the powder to military medicine cannot be overemphasized. Of course, Wutian will not be spared. Ning added that Wutian himself should understand everything. Many soldiers die on the battlefield just because they were not given first aid in time. Yi admitted that the old man was right, but reminded him that he himself was first and foremost a businessman. Wutian said that his medicines are available to anyone who can pay for them. Ning said he understood him perfectly and offered 2 ways to cooperate. Wutian can choose to make either a one-time sale of the manufacturing patent or a percentage of the profits. The young man said he chooses the third option. He takes over both production and delivery. He can offer Nina a discount in honor of his friendship. The old man squinted his eyes and appreciated Wutian's commercial acumen. He asked to test the effectiveness of the remedy, and the young man readily agreed to provide samples. The old man added that he couldn't make the decision by himself. There were high-ranking people above him. Ning said he would not make concessions until the last. Wutian said that since they had a deal, something should be done about the journos. Old man Nin agreed now to talk about the press problem. He asked if Wutian was going to help Ouyang Anon. He replied that this was not his intention. Ning asked if the young man was sure of that. In his opinion, Ouyang had already paid enough for his behavior. Wutian said it wasn't his problem. He didn't personally shoot him, and he doesn't have a doctor's license, so he doesn't have to help him. Siki quietly entered the study and told the old man that the guests had already arrived. Ning stood up from the table and motioned for Uchan to follow him. They were already waiting for them. It was a sunny day. There was an important conversation to be had at the Ning family's villa. Gongan and Xinyue turned out to be important guests. Old Man Ning smiled slightly at the guests while Wutian squinted at them glumly. Gongan introduced himself and said that he was Xinyue's father. He added that he came to ask him as a famous doctor that help his father. Ning said that Gongan and his daughter are having a hard time right now. He asked to at least listen to them. Wutian frowned. He didn't think the old man would be helpful in mediating. He told Gongan that there was nothing he could do to help him. Gongan told the young man that he was familiar with his terms from Xinyue's words and personally guaranteed his safety. He bowed his head and said that he apologized for his father's behavior. He was also willing to apologize to Madame Chung and prepare proper compensation. Wutian replied that he believed in Gongan's sincerity, but there was nothing he could do. Ye thought that Gongan was making him feel awkward now. Wutian asked to bring him CT scans and all the patient's health information down to the last detail. Xinyue immediately took out a bag of documents and pictures. She smiled and handed the package to the doctor. The girl said it had everything in it. Unwrapping the package, Wutian realized that Xinyue had prepared everything in advance, and he himself had jumped into the trap set up. 10 minutes passed. Everyone waited patiently. Wutian took his time to review all the documents in the patient's medical records. He clarified whether old Ouyang had suffered a severe injury before. Gongan confirmed that he hit his head at age 40, and then spent a year recovering. He thought the doctor was justified in spotting the old injury at a glance. Wutian told him that Anan had recovered, but the blood clot that formed in his head never dissolved. He assumed that the injured Ouyang had fallen headfirst to the ground and disturbed an old injury. Gongan countered that no doctor had been able to find the clot and asked the reason for their oversight. Wutian replied that the clot was hidden just behind the frontal bone and was not visible on the scans. He added that he personally had his own secrets. He thought about the fact that he had learned it thanks to a technique that would be invented much later. And they wouldn't understand anything anyway. Gongan asked Wutian what their chances were of saving the patient. Wutian hesitated, calculating the odds. Xinyue and Gongan were very weighed down by this pause. They wanted to cure Anan as soon as possible. He finally said he was giving 10%. No one expected such a response, neither Gongan nor Xinyue. Even Old Man Ning, who had seen a lot of things in life, was surprised. Xinyue exclaimed why the doctor only gives 10%. She realized that if Ye Wuqian only gave 10 chances out of 100, then the rest of them were not even worth counting on. Wutian admitted that even that 10% is a very optimistic projection. He said Anan was just unlucky, and the old injury caused a complication of the new one. Ning asked the young man if it was really that bad and there was nothing he could do. Wutian replied that he was only a doctor, not the Lord God, so he was not omnipotent. He thought about the fact that even in the future, not all diseases have been defeated. Suddenly, Ye Wutian's cell phone rang. He got a call from Chang Kexin. She asked him to come home as soon as possible. They had an emergency. Wutian plugged one ear with a finger for better hearing and asked what was wrong. Chang had already hung up, and Wutian never found out what happened. Sitsi had just entered the room, and Uchan asked if she would give him a ride home. Sitsi replied glumly that she wasn't in the mood today and advised her to find someone else. Wutian was pissed. He would have torn her right there. Suddenly, Xinyue stood up and said she could drop him off. She wasn't busy anyway. Gongan asked Xinyue if she was sure, and the girl answered in the affirmative. Wutian said that a ride in a car is not that difficult. There is no need to go around. He grabbed Xinyue's hand and dragged her with a confident stride towards the exit. The door swung open, letting Ye and Xinyue out, and slammed loudly. Gongan remained silent. He had his own thoughts on the matter. Old Man Ning thought hard. He was well aware of Xinyue's habits. Ning interrogated Gongan to see if he had misheard and Xinyue had decided to give him a ride in her car. Gongan said he was shocked himself. After all, Xinyue never lets men into his car, including even him and Anan, and this is well known to everyone. He added that if anyone found out about it, the sensation would be explosive. The pink car pulled out of the garage. Xinyue tensely looked at the road and drove the car. Wutian asked if everything was okay. He added that the girl was acting strangely and asked if he was interrupting. Gritting her teeth, Xinyue replied that she was fine, no need to worry. They pulled off the busy road onto the highway. There was more space here. Xinyue pressed the pedal to the floor and squeezed out the top speed. They were entering the business center of the city. Soon Xinyue reached the Tianshan neighborhood. Smoke was billowing in one of the apartments. Yushin said this fire truck reminds him of something. He looked out of the car and said the building also evokes memories. He looked at the puffs of smoke and the association came of itself. He squealed that this just couldn't be happening and jumped out of the car without even thanking the girl. He raced toward the house, yelling on the way that it couldn't happen again. When Yutian ran to his floor, firefighters were flooding the apartment with water. Chang Kexin stood there. She threw herself into Yi's arms and cried that their apartment was on fire. Ushan reassured her that everything would be fine, since he was already here. He said he was not used to it and offered to wait while the fire was put out. Wuqian thought angrily to the arsonists that once wasn't enough for them, and they decided to do it again. Wuqian thought that this was Ouyang Hao's job and that their family was in trouble. He caught himself thinking that he didn't care about the apartment, but he didn't want Kaixin to suffer. Wutian and Kexin stood and watched the fire being put out. After 2 hours, the smoke began to fade away little by little. It seemed like just a little while longer, and it would be safe to go into the apartment. Wuqian asked Xinyue not to wait for her, and said that he didn't care about her grandfather right now. He assured that he would think of ways to help their family. Xinyue looked at him warmly and asked him to take care of himself. Immediately, the landlady showed up and screamed that she had agreed to rent the apartment to the tenants for nothing. They had started a fire. She screamed that they had no right to do whatever they wanted with that apartment. Yuchen shouted back that it wasn't their fault, and the apartment burned down, and so did their belongings. He added that this is an entrepreneurial risk and the landlady cannot pass the buck to them. The woman gasped that she didn't know what to do now, as the repair cost her nearly 4 million yen. Yuchen assured that he would bring the money tomorrow and buy the apartment. The woman cheered up and said that was different, as long as he had enough money. Wuchen frowned, thinking that the landlady was right. He really didn't have any money right now, and Keishin had invested everything in the lobster pond. A helping hand with a life-saving check appeared from behind his back. Xinyue handed the woman a check for 4 million and asked her not to bother her tenants again. The satisfied woman said she could do whatever she wanted with the apartment now, even burn it or drown it. She ran off, jumping for joy as she went, and contemplated a check for a large sum of money. Yuchen said he was accepting the money with the intention of paying off the debt at the earliest opportunity. Xinyue smiled and said that there was no need to worry about little things. The door to the apartment was barely holding, it was only hanging on the top hinge. Yuchen entered the apartment with the girls and assessed the signs of mayhem. All the furniture had been turned over, the closets empty. The upholstered sofa in the center of the room was a pitiful sight. Kexin sobbed that there was nothing left, no clothes or jewelry. Yuchen looked at the charred ceiling and walls and grew angrier and angrier. He thought angrily that the arsonist had mistaken him for the wrong man and would show him where the crawfish were. Xinyue offered to help with the cleaning, but the young man politely declined and said there was nothing left to clean. Suddenly, the young man's keen eye noticed something foreign. There was some kind of piece of paper on the table, and it was still intact. Yutian wondered how that piece of paper didn't burn in the flames. He couldn't remember leaving a piece of paper in that spot. Now the young man understood. Here was a fake martial arts book. It turns out that the whole book was burned, but the piece of paper that was in the book was still intact. Xinyue noticed the paper and asked what it was, but Wutian had already put it in his pocket and turned his back to the girl. Standing with his back to Xinyue, Wutian turned around and smiled slyly. Xinyue looked at him and couldn't help but smile back. Soon the three of them descended into the courtyard of Tianxin District. Xinyue's pink car was parked right under the driveway. Yuchen suggested that the girl go about her business and said that he and Chung would look for a hotel to check into in the meantime. Xinyue apologized for the untimely request and reminded him that she was really counting on his help. Wutian said that right now he couldn't tell her how to save her grandfather. He will definitely let you know when he thinks of something. Xinyue bowed and indicated that she would look forward to hearing from him. The girl opened the door of her car and began to sit down. Uchan waved her goodbye happily. He appreciated the girl and realized what the cream of the high society was. She seemed to be in the same circle, but Ning Shiki wasn't even close to her. Chung turned away from Ye and muttered that Xinyue was being too nice to him. She was like a lady of the upper class, and she was just wagging her tail in front of the young man. Wuchen wondered why Kaishin was so excited. She stubbornly didn't look in his direction. Turning her head, Chang angrily said that Xinyue never let men into her car, not even her own father, unless Wuchen knew about it. The young man smirked and said he was honored if so. Kexin stated that he must have made a certain impression on her. Wutian laughed and said that he was like that. After getting into character, the young man said through laughter that he would have to ask Xinyue if she liked him. He added that it would be a good idea to join such a rich family. Chang got even more angry and opened her car door. Getting behind the wheel, she slammed the door shut noisily. The white car tore off, and the young man only shouted back that he hadn't gotten into the car yet. Wutian ran after the car and squealed that Chung had forgotten him, and now he had to walk to the hotel. By the time the young man reached the inn, it was late evening. He strode down the hallway and stopped at the door. Yutian lay on the bed and scrutinized the piece of paper that had survived the fire. The young man wondered what kind of page it was. After all, he had carefully studied the whole book, but he did not remember such a page. Yuchen concluded that the paper was hiding a secret and decided to check for light. He thought that the temperature of the open flame was not enough to damage the material, so he decided to heat the sheet. Half an hour passed, but nothing happened. Yuchen was surprised that his experiment was unsuccessful. Now he decided to sprinkle the page with blood, see if that would do anything. He pricked the thumb of his left hand with a needle and put the bloody imprint on the sheet. A bloody mark was left on the sheet, but nothing drastically changed. Uchan reproached himself for engaging in such nonsense with scientific knowledge. The young man did not give up and decided to try the water test this time. He did not believe that it was an ordinary blank sheet of paper. Corking the basin, Yushin put a sheet in it and began to fill it with water. The sheet of paper began to change as soon as the first drops of water hit it. The next moment, the text was clearly visible on the sheet. Uchihan recognized in these lines the famous healing technique and realized that he had a real treasure in his hands. He suddenly laughed and said he couldn't believe his eyes. Chung went into the room and asked if Ye was hungry, if she could bring him some dinner. Uchihan was like a man possessed. He was laughing like a madman and saying something about the treasure. Kaishin pounced on him, and the young man was slightly confused. Chang snuggled up to him happily, and Ye closed his eyes. The girl started to kiss him passionately, but Uchihan gently removed her hand from his shoulder. Chang realized that something was wrong here, and tears appeared in her eyes. Uchihan pulled back a little from the girl and looked at her. He scratched his chin thoughtfully, realizing it was better to tell the truth. Chung froze as well. She watched and tried to understand what Uchihan was feeling right now. The young man exclaimed and asked Chung not to get angry. After all, he didn't do it on purpose. Kexin's face instantly became serious, and she asked what his words meant. Uchihan mewed and mumbled that he didn't mean anything of the sort. Chung got angry and squealed that Wutian was a complete idiot. However, Kaishin quickly cooled down and asked to be told what had gotten him so excited. Wutian showed a piece of paper and solemnly said that this was the technique he had always wanted to get his hands on. He smiled and said that he was angry at the arsonist, but a burned-down house doesn't compare in value to that knowledge. Chung looked at Wutian suspiciously and at first thought he had swallowed some smoke. The young man admiringly offered to test the miraculous technique together. Kexin left and said it was already without her. She would only be in the way. Chang said one last time that it was enough for her to just be near him. The young man didn't react properly, and she slammed the door in her heart. Wutian didn't care about Chang right now. He was scrutinizing the ancient technique. From it, Ye realized that Xuanyan Qi had 5 stages: strengthening the body, rebuilding bones, expelling gases, removing diseases, and prolonging life. Significant changes will be noticeable at every stage, but the method is not suitable for everyone. It requires knowledge of the acupuncture points of the human body. To begin with, it was necessary to visualize the energy running within the body, and Wutian sat down in the lotus posture, trying to concentrate as much as possible. The qi energy was to circle around the acupuncture points that needed to be pressed at the right moment. The young man imagined the organism as a tangle of nodes from which branches spread out in different directions. With 2 fingers folded, he repeated all the movements clearly according to the technique and repeated everything described, memorizing it to the point of automaticity. The first movements were Qihai, Shenchuhe, and Xiaowang. They were followed by Zhongwang, Tianqi, and Tianquan. The complex ended with the movements of Kutse, Xiameng, and Neiguan. After completing the ancient technique exercises, Wutian realized that his whole body was aching. A new day came. Wutian woke up with difficulty, so he sat frowning and angry at breakfast. Kexin ate with gusto and looked satisfied. She asked Yi what happened to him and if it was because of a piece of paper that he stayed up all night. Wutian admitted that he was very surprised. He's been testing the technique all night, but feels no change except for pain all over his body. He couldn't stand it and yelled that he couldn't believe it, but he had spent a lot of time on it. After eating, Wutian returned to the bedroom. He exercised to the point of exhaustion and expired in sweat. He imagined the organism over and over again as a single network of nodes and branches. Not feeling any change, the young man thought that he had been trying the legendary method of pressing these points for a long time. Wutian concluded that at this rate, he would rather mutilate his acupuncture points than learn the technique. The points he was fishing for hurt more and more each time. It was hard for the young man to bear the pain of the exercise, but he didn't give up and kept going. Wutian angrily pressed his fingers against the piece of paper in front of him. Suddenly, Yi felt a change. The pain disappeared and he could clearly see what he needed to see. His heart began to pound harder and everything in his eyes began to double. His screams were heard by all the occupants of the inn. Chang came running in and asked what happened to him. Wutian was lying on the floor and holding onto his ribs. He gave Kaishin a big scare. She wailed that he should stop torturing himself, because he was strong without this technique. Uken caught himself thinking that he could no longer hear anything because of the intense pain. Chang's image was becoming more cloudy. He got the idea that he was hurting himself by being a specialist. Chang laid him on the bed, and Wutian thought he had hurt his acupuncture points. As he fell asleep, he reproached himself that he would never have gone for it if he had known the result beforehand. The light went out for Wutian, and the whole world turned into darkness. Chung stood over him and begged him to wake up. Wutian could barely see, he could only distinguish a small streak of light. Kexin asked Ye what was wrong and asked him to stop scaring him. Chung started crying and begged Wutian to wake up. The girl promised not to be angry at his antics anymore, and assured him that she would cook dinner every day at the young man's first call. Chang asked him to open his eyes, and Wutian slowly complied with her request. He said that Kexin doesn't need to cry. Tears don't suit her at all. Chang couldn't stand it, roared and hugged his neck. Wutian was glad that there were people in the world who were worried about him. He told Chung that he was fine, and there was no need to cry. Wutian smiled and added that he was as healthy as an ox. Kexin looked at Ye with disbelief and asked if he was telling the truth. Yuchen replied that he wasn't lying and said he had heard something interesting. He said cheerfully that someone had promised to turn a blind eye to his antics from now on. Chang blushed. She didn't think the young man had heard all that. Kexin jumped off the bed and shouted that it was right. He had heard exactly what he had heard. She said that the young man was dreaming too much. Chang spoke so seriously that Wutian hesitated. Maybe he was imagining things. Be that as it may, he felt no pain now. In addition, the technique had finally borne fruit, and Wuqian had reached the first stage of Xuanyunqi. The phone vibrated, notifying me of a new message received. Wuqian sat down on the bed more comfortably and opened the letter. Wu Quansheng informed him that Zhang Xiaomei had regained consciousness 2 days ago, but was still not feeling well, and asked him to come to the hospital. At the same time, there was a conversation going on in the Ouyang family's estate. Xinyue chatted with Xiao Ai over a cup of tea. Xinyue's face was very sad. She was constantly thinking about her grandfather's health. Xiao reported to her that according to the information she received, Wutian's previous apartment was also burned down. Ouyang Hao was most likely behind the arson. The aide assumed that Hao had a hand in it this time too. Xinyue exhaled loudly. Everything was coming together. She said that Ouyang Hao is in love with Cheng Kexin, who lives with Wutian. In addition, Hao has already set fire to the young man's first apartment. Xiao assumed that now Wuqian would surely hold a grudge against the entire Ouyang family, and after all, they needed his favor right now. Xinyue said that it was too early to draw conclusions. The girl asked to check again. She really wanted to believe that Ouyang Hao had nothing to do with it. Xinyue turned to the window and saw a satisfied Situue. She cheerfully asked Xinyue the reason for her sadness, and said that it wouldn't take long to get wrinkles like that. Xinyue leaned out the window and asked what had honored her with the attention of such a guest. Wei said she hadn't visited Grandpa Ouyang in a while, so she thought she'd drop by. She asked to be let in and said she was just going to check on him. Xinyue replied that Grandpa had stayed up late last night playing chess and was still asleep. She asked Wei not to disturb him. The girl added that she was always willing to keep her company if Wei felt lonely. Situ smiled and waved goodbye. She said she wasn't particularly enamored of the other woman's company. Xinyue and Xiao watched the departing Wei. Xiao Ai said that the Situ family was preparing to make their move. Xinyue concluded that the Nangong and Situ families had joined forces against them, and the situation was unfavorable. Late evening, Central Hospital of the city. Yutian walked confidently down the hospital corridor. He reproached himself that Zhang Xiaomei had completely slipped his mind. Yutian thought that one could not think of anything worse than a beauty who suddenly appears disfigured. Near one of the chambers, he heard a shout that praised the Lord. The same voice was praising Satan. Duckling was very surprised by this, and he carefully looked inside. Liu Fu was lying on the floor of the ward, and an orderly was clasping his hands behind his back. The nurse begged Liu not to rage and to go back to her bed. Liu laughed and squealed that he wasn't going back anywhere. He was fine on the floor. A syringe needle glinted in the orderly's hand. He thrust it with all his might into the buttock of the troublemaker. Liu yelped in surprise. In a second, the young man was already snoring serenely. Wutian watched as an orderly and a nurse pulled Liu's legs to the bunk. He came in and asked what was wrong with that guy. It was scary to even look at. The orderly admitted that they don't know themselves. The patient does not sleep well at night and may jump out into the corridor and scare away other patients. Wutian asked about Liu's family and why they don't do anything. The nurse said that he was already in the hospital and there was nothing more the parents could do. The nurse added that the mother was making arrangements for treatment abroad. Wutian thought for a while, then turned around and wished them good luck in parting. Yuqian continued on his way through the hospital corridors and looked for the right room number. Soon he stopped in front of room number. Wutian cautiously started to open the door of the ward where Zhang Xiaomei was lying. He carefully peered inside. The bright moon illuminated the ward. Zhang sat on the bed and touched her face. Yudian stood in the doorway and watched the girl. Xiaomei's eyes and forehead were bandaged, tears pouring out in rivers from under the bandage. He walked resolutely into the room and turned on the lights. Zhang immediately turned around and shrieked fearfully at who was here. Uthian replied that her Prince Charming had arrived and asked if she was ready to run away with him. Zhang Xiaomei shouted for him to get lost. Uchan said pitifully that they hadn't seen each other for a very long time, and he had grown exhausted to the point of tears. He added that it felt like an eternity had passed. Wuqian walked over to Zhang, stopped in front of her, and mimicked a heart with his fingers. The young man asked her to at least smile. Otherwise, it was getting kind of awkward. Zhang Xiaomei kept silent and waited for Wuqian to stop talking. The girl finally asked why he had saved her and what he wanted to accomplish by doing so, whether it was his revenge for Zhang's constant clinging to him. She roared and screamed that she would rather die than be left to live like this. Yuqian looked at the girl with pity. He couldn't help her. The young man said it was very easy to die if she really wanted to. He said since he can save lives, he knows the other side. Wutian said he could help if she was tired of living. Xiaomei shouted that he was an insensitive bastard. The young man put one foot on the windowsill and said that they were on the 6th floor. if Mei jumped out the window, he wouldn't pick up any bones. The girl squealed that she would do it, and Yuchin could rest assured. Uchin assured the girl that it was really not difficult to end her life. He offered to help her out of bed. The young man added that only her mother felt sorry for her, for she would not last long after learning of her daughter's death. Xiaomei sobbed and cried again. She said that she herself knew that she had to live. The girl, through her crying, asked Wutian if the young man could imagine how she felt when she realized what she had under her blindfold. Yuchin assumed that she was afraid of remaining unmarried. He said that Zhang Xiaomei was very lucky and he was not picky. The girl went a little quiet and asked me to repeat it again. Wutian shrieked that he had already said his intention to marry her if she didn't find a mate. Zhang shouted that he hadn't even seen what was wrong with her face and might be scared. Yuchin recalled that he had personally operated on her and asked what he didn't see there. The young man stated that he was not recanting his words. Xiaomei incredulously asked Ye if he was sure, since she was really scary now. Wuqin said that his wife should be a beauty, and this is an indisputable fact. The young man exclaimed that Xiaomei had forgotten what he did for a living. Xiaomei only began to understand now, smiled finally, and clarified if there was hope. Yuchin said their chances are 50% out of 100. He asked Xiaomei if Xiaomei would marry him at this rate. The girl said she needed at least 80% and then she would think about it. Utian replied that this was not a bazaar auction and offered to raise it by 10%. Xiaomei hummed and turned away from him to the side. Wuxin said he knew from Dr. Wu about her bad mood and insomnia. He agreed to stay with her that night to help her get used to her new surroundings. Zhang Xiaomei squealed that he wouldn't dare molest her. Yuchin asked if the girl would threaten him with a gun again. He sat down next to her on the bunk and said she was unlikely to have a gun with her in the hospital. Xiaomei snorted disdainfully again and dragged the blanket over herself. She climbed under the blanket and defiantly turned away from the young man. Wuqin said he had more good news. He had figured out how to beat her mother's illness. Young added that he could have her on her feet by the end of the year. The girl peeked out from under the edge of the blanket with interest. Uchan said that it was true, so she herself needed a good rest. He asked her not to aggravate her serious condition and said goodnight. Jiang thanked him. She looked at him with gratitude. Xiaomei fell asleep almost immediately. Half an hour passed. Uchan decided that the girl would sleep well. He stood up and looked at Zhang Xiaomei's serene slumber. Yutian told himself that he could leave since the girl had already fallen asleep. Suddenly Xiaomei's fingers grabbed his hand. Yutian turned around. The girl seemed to be asleep. He said he wasn't going anywhere, I guess. The next day at the hospital, Director Shu was walking down the hall with Dr. Wu and asked how Zhang was feeling. Quan Sheng replied that Ye had promised to stop by to see her, so everything should be fine. He offered to come by and check. Soon they approached room. Shu opened the door and asked Xiaomei how she had rested. Dr. Wu said that Brother Yi was supposed to take care of everything. Upon entering the ward, both visitors were very surprised. Zhang Xiaomei and Wu Qian were lying in an embrace. Duckling mumbled that he wanted to try the puffy buns. Xiaomei mentioned through her sleep that Mao Mao had become very fat. Shu and Wu couldn't believe their eyes and stared at Zhang Xiaomei's bunk. Uchin wished himself a pleasant appetite and aimed at the girl's breast through his sleep. She woke up from the bite and reacted immediately. A powerful slap finally woke Duckling up. He didn't quite realize what had happened, but the red imprint of the heel on his cheek reminded him of what had happened. Zhang Xiaomei blushed and covered her chest with her hands. She didn't know what to call Wutian anymore. The young man clutched his cheek and asked what she had hit him for. She kicked him with her foot so that he flew off the bunk and screamed who let him on the bed in the first place. Wutian asked resentfully where the justice was, because the girl had dragged him in and wouldn't let him go. He added that it was uncomfortable to sleep on the floor, if anything. Wu asked to know what it was they were doing all night long, because he had no idea they had such a close relationship. Jiang and Wutian looked at him silently. Shu laughed and said that it was pretty good to hit on the bestie holding the entire police department in terror. Yuchin suggested they laugh further, and explained that they were just sleeping, and that was all. He yelled at Xiaomei as well. Where did she get so much anger in her? It wasn't like there was anything. She angrily asked to explain the bite mark on her chest. Yuchin looked at the mark of his teeth and wondered what he had been doing during the night. He thought about the fact that he had been dreaming about some pretty good buns, and now there was only one thing left for him to do. He ran out of the room and shouted that he had forgotten to turn off the iron at home, saying goodbye as he went. The door slammed shut behind Utian. Xiaomei's screams could be heard from the ward. She was yelling that she didn't want to see that jerk anymore. The young man looked into the room again and asked if she had changed her mind about treating her face. Xiaomei grabbed the pillow and clutched it in her hand more comfortably. She threw it right at Wuqin and said only exceptionally. The young man caught her deftly at the very door. He threw it back at Xiaomei and shouted that they had a deal. The pillow hit the girl exactly in the face. She blushed and hugged the pillow with both arms, then told Yuchin that he was a very brash type. Another day has passed. Wutian stood at the entrance of the inn and thought that the first stage of Xuanyanqi was complete. He could now, in theory, use the Qixing needle. In truth, the young man himself didn't know how effective it would be. Yuchen descended the steps leading to the entrance of the inn. Standing in the parking lot was Ouyang Hao. He leaned on the door of his car. Hao told Wutian that he had a conversation to have with the young man. Ye asked Hao what else the conversation was about and clarified if the conversation was about Chung Kexin. Wutian asked Hao to remember once and for all one simple thing. He put a hand on Ouyang's shoulder and told him that he was getting himself into trouble. Ouyang Hao said that if he didn't leave her, he would be in trouble. He warned that it wouldn't be difficult for the Hao family to deal with a young man with a temper. Wutian only hummed contemptuously. He was no longer afraid of anyone from the Ouyang family. He smiled sympathetically and said that he was clear with the Hao family. Hao got angry and asked what he had said that was funny. Wutian said that while old man Anan lies dying, one of his grandsons can't wait for him to pass away. The other one's going crazy over a woman. Wutian recognized that only Shinjue was trying to make things right, and that the Ouyang family was all on her own, and the others were not worth mentioning. The young man added as for Hao personally, he was willing to deal with him even now. Wutian said that if he were Hao, he would prepare for the fact that it wouldn't take long for them to be called a great family. Ouyang Hao turned pale. He was very angry, but he couldn't help but admit that Wutian was right. The next day, the main character was walking around the city. After the incident at the hospital, he decided to go to a hotel. Wutian wanted to check in at the inn and help his familiar girl. When he came into her room, she asked him where he was and why his phone was off. The guy cheerfully replied that he had something to do. He added that his phone battery was dead. He asked his girlfriend why her eyes were red. Had she been waiting for him all night? The girl turned her back on him and said she wouldn't stay up all night because of him. The boy sat on the bed and said that he was much more comfortable here than in the hospital. The girl smiled at him and offered to bring him some delicious fruit. The guy told her that he had just been met by an old acquaintance of the girl named Ouyang. He told the protagonist to stay away from the girl. Here the girl with the big dismissal asked what Ye Wuqian answered to this threat to Ouyang. The guy looked at the girl carefully, and he realized that his current answer would be very important to her. Ye Wuqian hesitated before answering. He had to say it in such a way that she wouldn't be offended. The main character said that he agreed to Ouyang's terms. He wouldn't dare to cross him since his family is rich and powerful. Apparently this answer upset the girl very much. She was silent and thoughtful. The girl stood up and said confidently that she would be checking out of the hotel today. Ye Wuqian grabbed her confidently by the arm. He didn't want her to leave. The guy said he actually told Owen to go to hell. The main character likes it here with this girl. The girl had grown soft. She kindly and very affectionately called her interlocutor a joker. She told the guy excitedly and apprehensively that he had disappeared from the news channels. The guy took a smartphone and started watching video news on different channels with video broadcasts. The first news story he came across was a video of a guy cooking some food. The following news video showed a guy telling the news about soccer. The guy thought to himself that he'd really disappeared from the headlines. The protagonist thought to himself that old man Ning had done a quick job. The girl was looking at her phone and showed the guy some interesting and funny article. Ye Wuqian was sitting and thinking about his relationship with this girl named Chung Kexin. He couldn't understand who they were to each other. Listening to his girlfriend, he kept thinking that they didn't seem to be a couple, but they were acting like lovers. The next day, there was a serious incident with a patient in the hospital. In one of the wards, a patient became very agitated. He ran out and started running. The patient screamed at the doctors that he didn't want to sleep and couldn't sleep. He was afraid he would turn into a monster. His mother came over and told him excitedly that he needed to sleep. The patient even more aggressively started yelling that he wouldn't sleep because he didn't want to become a monster. The woman once again told him to obey her and go to bed. The guy yelled to her with fear that he didn't want to sleep and wouldn't sleep. The woman told the nurse that she was leaving this patient in their care. The nurse prepared a special injection. It was supposed to calm the patient down. He forcefully caught the patient and injected him with a special syringe of sedative. At the same moment, the effect of the drug paralyzed the patient, and he collapsed to the floor. The nurse began to pull the unconscious patient aside. Ye Wuqian entered the room. The woman was happy to see him. She called him a wonderful doctor. She was glad he would help them. The guy called the woman Mrs. Liu and told her she overestimated him. The woman called him the best doctor she had ever seen. She asked him not to leave her in trouble. She pressed herself closely to the protagonist and added that she would do anything for him. Ye Wuqian thought she wanted to seduce. It was hard for him to hold back his emotions. The protagonist realized that he was suffering from his body, which could not resist female charms. A guy asked a woman to describe the symptoms of her son's illness. He asked if he had a sleep disorder. He decided for himself that this would be a good opportunity for him to practice medicine. Mrs. Liu said that as soon as my son falls asleep, he dreams about beating people up. A woman said that at first her son had nightmares only at night, but now he can't sleep during the day. The guy thought to himself that he could heal this patient with Xuanyan Qi, but this patient named Li Fu doesn't deserve to be healed. Ke Yudian gave the prescription to the woman and told her to follow it strictly. He hoped that the patient would get better. The woman was very happy to have such help from the guy, and she thanked the protagonist. Mrs. Liu gave the guy her card. She promised that if his medicine helped, she would thank him well. Ye Wutian smiled happily. He thought that he would not refuse a different kind of payment. The boy was heading towards room at the same time. He wondered how old Mrs. Liu was. He approached the right room. Immediately he wondered if he was attracted to older women. He knocked on the girl's room and told her that the best doctor in the world had arrived. He asked her if she was ready for treatment. The guy opened the door to the room. The girl didn't expect him to come in. She was getting changed. Ye Wutian was surprised he didn't expect to catch the girl like that. He realized his timing was off. The patient angrily shouted back at him that hadn't he been taught to knock. The guy came into her room and said it was no big deal. He added that she would have had to take it all off anyway. She was pissed off by that excuse. Immediately he placed a box on her bed. There was supposed to be medicine for her. The girl asked what was inside the box. There was a special potion to remove it. The guy told her that he brought a cure to help her get her beauty back. It might hurt at first, but she'll have to be patient. The protagonist unwrapped the bandages from her face. He was preparing to put medicine on her face. The boy carefully applied the potion to her face. The girl was nervous but patient. She felt incredible and good. She felt so much better. The patient told him that she was not in any pain at all, and only felt a slight numbness. After the procedure, the girl asked excitedly to the guy if it would help the cure. The protagonist assured her that everything would be fine or he wouldn't be called the miracle doctor. The guy went to the door and locked it. He didn't want anything to disturb them. Then he commanded directly to the girl to undress completely now. The girl was surprised and shy. She didn't understand what he wanted from her now. Ye Wutian added seriously that she has a serious scar on her chest that needs to be treated too. The guy said she'd be breastfeeding a baby someday, and he'd be sick of the sight of her. The girl said she needs a little more time to get her act together. She's not mentally ready. The main character went up to her and said it was his duty to help the sick. He said he had to do everything now. The girl yelled at him not to come any closer. She was very scared. The girl shouted loudly and desperately to the guy to stay away from her. The protagonist took out a magic potion and its scent spread through the room. The girl didn't understand what happened. She said that she felt that she could not move. The guy yelled that he had to do his medical duty. She reminded him that he didn't even have a doctor's license. Ye Wutian said that there is no difference between a man and a woman for a doctor. The girl shouted at him to stop immediately. The main character told her not to complain since he was trying for her. The patient realized that it was useless to resist and decided to be patient. The guy smeared the potion on her breasts. She clarified how long to wait and endure. The protagonist said with pleasure that he was just enjoying a rare moment. Ye Wutian continued to dab his magic and healing potion. The girl was very ashamed, but she realized that she had to endure for healing. The main character says she has absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, and everything is fine. The patient angrily yelled that if he was a doctor, he couldn't afford it. Wutian added and said that besides being a doctor, he is also a man. The guy said that he doesn't get any gratitude from the girl. He added that if she didn't want to get treatment, then let her get dressed. The main character says it's okay since she is his girlfriend. The patient asked him since when she became his girlfriend. Ye Wutian explained that no one else would love her but him. The guy told her to forget about other guys from now on. She should only think about him from now on. The girl said she was fed up and why the guy wouldn't give up. The guy said he saved the girl's mom first. Now it's her, and how she wants to pay him back. The patient asked that if she agreed to be his girlfriend, what he would say to his other girlfriend. Ye Wutian said it was not a simple question. He told her his dream that he would buy a big house where they would all live happily ever after together. The girl asked her angrily if he had decided to get a harem. The guy said with confidence and joy in his voice that they were going to make it. The girl was not satisfied with this answer, but she decided to keep silent. The guy reminded her to keep the bandage on and not to wet the wound for healing. Eventually the guy specified that she keep the blindfold on, even in front of male doctors. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. The protagonist hesitated in surprise. The patient tapped his foot and told him to get off of her because she needed to get dressed. The main character opened the door and saw a guy standing there with a bouquet of flowers. The guy who came in approached the girl named Xiao Mei and said that he had come to visit her. The patient addressed him by the name Bai Fu and asked why he was here. Bai Fu walked into the ward and looked around. He asked Xiao Mei why her door was closed. The protagonist explained to the guy who came in that the door was closed. Ye Wutian asked him why he didn't recognize him as a doctor. Bai Fu told him that he wasn't wearing a gown. Bai Fu asked Xiao Mei why she didn't tell him she was in the hospital. The girl told him that she didn't want to make a fuss over nothing. Bai Fu asked her with great excitement how serious her wound was. The girl replied fearfully that she didn't know exactly. She didn't expect the boy to come. Ye Wutian told Bai Fu that he was on time. He added that the girl was worried about a minor scratch, but Bai Fu would still love her. The protagonist looked at Yao Mei silently. He showed her with his gaze to keep her silent. The girl understood. She thought the guy wanted to test Bai Fu's feelings for her. The main character went to Bai Fu and told him to talk to the girl, or she almost jumped out of the window. Bai Fu asked the girl if it was true. Tam didn't speak and sat silently. Xiao Mei continued to sit silently. Bai Fu kept looking at her and getting more and more worried. Here Bai Fu got very excited because the girl didn't deny anything Ye Wuqian said. Bai Fu looked at the girl and wondered if the scar behind the bandage was so terrible. The protagonist told Bai Fu to hurry up and comfort the unfortunate girl. Ye Wuqian said to the guy that it's not the outside that counts, but what's inside. Bai Fu decided not to deny it and added that he agreed that what's inside is important. After a bit of thought, he then said that plastic surgery is very advanced these days and it might help. The main character replied to the guy that even the best plastic surgeon would be powerless. The girl would have to live with it for the rest of her life. Ye Wuqian told Bai Fu that he himself should figure out how to calm the girl down. He also added that Xiao Mei had scars on her chest and stomach. Bai Fu was horrified, for he had heard about the scars on the girl's body. Ye Wuqian continued to tell in a confident voice that the scars are the smallest, only the size of a plate. He ended up yelling to Bai Fu that someone should explain to Xiao Mei that it was no big deal. Bai Fu replied that he would talk to her. The protagonist was delighted with this answer. The main character suggested that the guy should propose to Xiao Mei right now. She needs his support right now. Bai Fu was very worried when he heard such words. He didn't want to marry an ugly woman. Ye Wuqian told the boy that it was time for him to swear his eternal love for Xiao Mei. The protagonist added that the girl no longer has absolutely nothing to live for. Xiao Mei was silent and didn't speak. She waited for Bai Fu's boyfriend to answer her. At this time, Bai Fu was very confused. He didn't know what to say. After some thought, he realized that with his money he could get any pretty girl he wanted. Why would he tie his life to this disfigured girl? Bai Fu turned around and started to leave. He told his girlfriend that he had to leave because he had an important matter to take care of. Xiao Mei realized that this guy had no real love for her. After thinking for a while, the girl said that she had no feelings for Bai Fu. He was just another boyfriend to her. Xiao Mei asked the protagonist if he was satisfied. Ye Wuqian was silent in response. After a little thought, the guy said he wanted to show the girl that he was the best in the whole world for her. Xiao Mei answered him capriciously that Bai Fu swore love to her almost daily. The girl replied that all men are the same. He told her that he didn't think he was a good guy. The main character said confidently that if he loves a woman, he loves her always no matter what. He will never give up his feelings. Xiao Mei asked dreamily what she should do if she liked several men at once. She asked with interest to the protagonist how he would feel about such a thing. The main character said that he takes care of her. Xiao Mei will always have friends to play mahjong with. The girl shouted angrily to the guy that such a shameless man like him would still have to be found. After a moment's thought, Ye Wuqian asked the girl if she knew Situ Wei. She claimed to be Xiao Mei's cousin. The girl fell silent. She looked piercingly and angrily at the protagonist. After waiting a little, she asked rudely and demandingly what Sita Mei had said to him. Ye Wuqian answered her reassuringly that it was nothing. He asked her why she was so nervous at the mention of Shita Mei. Xiao Mei said angrily that someone decided that she should at least have something to do with Shita Mei. The girl told the guy angrily not to mention Sita Mei's name again in her presence. Stay away from her. The boy hesitated. He was silent. He was struck by the girl's reaction to her cousin's name. Suddenly, the guy's phone rang shrilly in his pocket. He saw on the phone that an old man named Wu Quansheng was calling him now. The protagonist picked up the phone and asked why old man Wu was calling him. Wu Quansheng told the protagonist that they didn't talk so well last time. He invited him to come to Weiju this evening. Evening descended on the city and the protagonist arrived instead of the one my old man Wu was talking about. Weiju was one of the most luxurious clubs in the city. The guy went to the entrance and was met by a security guard. He said that only membership cards were allowed to enter the club. The protagonist wondered why the old man didn't warn him he needed a card. While the guy was standing there talking to the guard, an expensive gold-colored car pulled up. A beautiful girl was sitting in the car. She looked at the protagonist from the cabin. A security guard outside the club saw the girl and addressed her as Mrs. Sita. The girl called the guy Dr. E. Mrs. Situ told the boy confidently that she could help him get into the club. The guy was still standing with his bicycle. The girl told him that he could leave his bike on the street and no one would steal it. The guy walked up to the car and opened the door. He liked the car. He also looked at the girl and thought he liked her style of dress as well. Mrs. Situ told the boy not to be afraid and to get in boldly. The guy got into the car and he and the girl drove right up to the gate of the club. One of the guards said that Ye Wuqian knew Madame Situ. He had no idea who it could be. The other guard said that it was the first time he had seen Miss Situ give someone a ride. The car with the protagonist and the girl was still standing still near the entrance. Situ told the protagonist that they were already there. In response, the guy continued to remain silent. The main character was in a car with his girlfriend Situ. They were still standing outside the club. Situ turned around at the guy and asked why he was looking at her so intently. Does he want to know what's under her dress? The guy called her Mrs. Sita and told her to be careful with such suggestions or he might not be able to resist. The girl asked to be called her sister. Ye Wutian only looked and looked at the girl. He couldn't take his eyes off her breasts. A guy was sitting right next to a girl. He thought he was sitting very close to her. Suddenly, Situ pushed him away roughly. She never let the guy kiss her. Here she asked slyly at the guy, is he really that eager to get to know her better? Ye Wutian thought to himself why a guy like him should have to endure harassment from a girl. He told the girl that she looked like a fairy. The girl liked those words. She said she would love to be a personal fairy. Ye Wutian jumped out of the car and started to run away. He shouted to the girl to stop tempting him. Situ yelled at him to call her. She wanted to talk to him alone. The guy ran with all his might. He didn't think anyone could take it if it were him. Ye Wutian was able to get to the club where he had a meeting with Mr. Wu. There were already many people there. The boy saw Mr. Wu sitting on the sofa. He greeted the protagonist. Ye Wutian told him he didn't have a membership card, but Mr. Wu told him to pass anyway. Mr. Wu answered him cheerfully that he simply forgot to warn him. Mr. Wu introduced the protagonist to Zhou Huanzhang. He was the regional secretary in charge of healthcare in Dongcheng City. Zhou said that he would immediately meet the famous Dr. Ye Wutian in person. The boy asked him what he owed to such an acquaintance. Mr. Wu said that in 4 days there will be an exchange of medical knowledge between China and country H. He wants the protagonist and Zhou to participate in this event. Ye Wutian asked him what exactly he wanted him to do. The guy said unequivocally that he had nothing to do with it. Mr. Wu said they suffered a big loss last year and now they have to bounce back. Zhao told the protagonist that Dr. Wu thinks very highly of him. For this reason, he wants to see Ye Wutian together with his specialists. The guy replies that he is not even a licensed doctor. Zhao replied cheerfully and confidently that he could organize all the necessary papers. Dr. Wu said the events would last a couple of days and the protagonist wouldn't lose much time. Ye Wutian said it's just a medical exchange meeting. It's okay if Dr. Wu loses. The old man shouted at him that he wanted to douse the arrogant scoundrels from N country in mud. The doctor was told that one of the representatives of country H said that their medicine is orthodox and Chinese medicine is just an imitation. The doctor summarized only China's honor is at stake. It would be a battle they could not lose again. The protagonist realized it was all about pride. Ye Wutian thought that it was hard for him to refuse when he was asked so sincerely. He also remembered that he owed Old Man Wu for the Xuanyang Qi technique. The guy agreed and said he'd go, but he said not to expect too much from him. Dr. Wu said he'd increase their chances of winning many times over. The protagonist replied that he would definitely be all ready if he promised. Then the phone rang in his pocket. Situe called him. She told the guy she missed him. She said on the phone that she would come by in 5 minutes so he wouldn't run away. The main character told her on the phone not to talk to him like he was a virgin. He told her on the phone that he would find her and show her what a real man can do. After some time, the protagonist arrived at the house where Sita lived. Ye Wutian was pissed off. He decided to show his girlfriend how to mess with him. The guy knocked hard and confidently on the door, and the girl opened it for him immediately. She was happy to see him. Situ stood in the doorway and looked at the protagonist. Ye Huyan stared back at the girl with unwavering and bright attention. Situ told him romantically and seductively that she longed for him very much. Ye Wutian told his girlfriend strictly that she was playing with fire. She was surprised at such words. The guy hugged her and started whispering something to her. It had absolutely no effect on her. The protagonist decides to himself that he needs to get a grip and outplay this hottie. Otherwise, the initiative might stay on her side. The guy, full of determination, passed the door where the girl was standing and went into the room. The main character sat down on the couch and asked strictly for the girl to tell her what she needed. Situ took a club card out of her pocket and said she was giving it to the boy. Now he can enter the club whenever he wants. Ye Wuchen told her caustically and clearly that she is the owner of the club after all. The girl was glad he finally figured it out. The guy said he couldn't take the card because he didn't want to owe her anything. Situ swiped his card and told him how he was going to date her without the card. The girl called herself lovingly Sis and said she was free now. Ye Wutian said he was sure he could make a good couple with her. He asked the girl why she needed her. Situ told him meaningfully that it was not up to her but directly to him. The girl added that she wants to get to know him better and have the protagonist become her personal doctor. The guy told her that if she needed a doctor, he would help her. Situ said she just wanted to hire him as her personal doctor for 100 million a year. The guy was surprised, and he once again asked the girl about the amount. Situ answered him cheerfully that there was no need to look at her like that since she was embarrassed. After waiting a bit, the girl said it was important that she had a special condition. The guy didn't say a word. He was ready for the girl to tell him a very unacceptable condition. Situ told him strictly that he was not allowed to treat any other member of the 4 families except her. Ye Wuqian told the girl that she wanted to use him to break up the other 3 great families. The girl told him she wasn't asking him to poison them, just not to treat them. She said it's perfectly healthy competition. The protagonist said it's nice to get 100 million just for sitting on his hands, but he can't agree to such terms. Situ asked why. The guy replied that he had promised Ouyang Xinyue that he would definitely save her grandfather. Ye Wutian added that it didn't mean he was on their side. He just decided to help Ouyang Xinyue for personal reasons. He doesn't want to get involved in any kind of fight. Situ told the guy judiciously that staying on no one's side would not be easy. She pointed her finger at the main character and said she wanted to borrow him for the night. Later they arrived at the Wei-ju nightclub. It was full of people. Mistress Situ walked confidently and silently through the hall, accompanied by the protagonist. The guys around her were surprised that Sita Wei was on a date. They couldn't understand who the guy next to her was. The girl was walking along with the main character. Everyone else around them was looking back at them. The guy said that after she said she wanted to borrow it, he thought it would be another harassment. Situ got jokingly angry and cheerfully called the protagonist a rascal. The guests at the banquet where they were held were the richest and most important cream of society. The girl told the guy that such parties are good for making new connections. He replied that she and her family didn't need any extra connections. Situ told the guy that he was underestimated by many people, but not by her. Ye Wutian thought to himself that he was becoming more and more amazed at this girl. The girl asked him if he had already fallen in love with her, and she reminded him that she was completely single. The guy replied that she was very unpredictable, and he asked her how old she was. Situ jokingly patted his cheek and called him cheerfully varmint. The girl said she had to go to the restroom and asked the guy to wait for her. She asked him not to have contact with other girls. Ye Wutian thought pitifully and absent-mindedly to himself who else he had given up. Then the guy heard some girl suddenly call out to him from the side. It was Ouyang Xinyue. She asked the protagonist if he had come alone. The guests at the party were surprised that the main character knew this girl. Someone was surprised that Ye Wutian was in a relationship with all four families. At the same time, Ye Wutian replied that he did not come alone, but his girlfriend had gone away for a while. Ouyang Xinyue good. Naturedly suggested that the guy sit down and talk. The protagonist said he would have gladly accepted her invitation. That's when Situ came up. She grabbed the guy's hand. She also turned to Xinyue. Ouyang Xinyue was very surprised. She was silent and didn't even know what to say. All the people present at the party were surprised and overwhelmed. Situ held the protagonist's hand and said that this evening he belongs only to her. At the party, everyone stood and remained silent. Situ didn't let go of Ye Wutianya's embrace. Ouyang Xinyue silently and astonishedly looked at the protagonist along with the girl Situ. Xinyue didn't understand how it could happen that the main character came along with Situ Wei. She couldn't imagine when the two of them could get close. Situ asked Xinyue if she was at a loss for words after seeing how good she and Ye Wutian looked together. Situ added that she has a date with the main character tonight. Therefore, Xinyue can wait until the next time. The protagonist was silent. He didn't like being thought of as some exotic toy to brag about. Pulling herself together a bit, Xinyue said that she would borrow a boyfriend sometime next time from Situ. Such words pleased Sita. She said that she didn't mind at all. Ye Wutian was unpleasantly startled by the conversation. He didn't like the fact that no one asked him anything. Situ asked the guy if he had a crush on Xinyue. She added that Xinyue didn't have a boyfriend. The main character sharply replied that it's very funny to introduce him and Xinyue. Situ told the guy he was in Xinyue's car. She doesn't just let anyone into her car. Ye Wutian replied that the girl was just giving him a ride. Situ approached the protagonist and prepared to tell him something important. She told him she'd never given a guy a ride before. Situ pointed her finger at Ye Wutian and said confidently that he was her first. The protagonist hesitated. He didn't know what to say. Too much had happened this evening. Then suddenly a live orchestra in the hall played cheerful and dancing music. Situ grabbed the guy's hand and asked him to dance to the music. He told her that he was not dancing. All the guests around were having fun and dancing. Couples were circling the hall. The boy danced slowly and uncertainly along with Situ. They looked at each other. Xinyue was sitting at the table at this time. She was watching the protagonist the whole time. Xinyue thought to herself that the Situ family had decided to act openly. Then suddenly, during the dance, a guy stepped heavily on Sita's foot with his foot. The girl put up with it, and then angrily and squeezily shouted at him that she was in pain. Ye Wutian, as an excuse, said that's why he doesn't dance. He wanted to offer the girl something different. Situ hugged the protagonist and said that they still have a lot of dancing ahead of them. She took the guy's hand with her own and drew it up and put it on her back. They continued to dance silently for a long time in their arms to the surrounding music. They looked piercingly at each other, but they remained silent. The girl hugged the boy harder and harder. He felt her clinging to him. Ye Wutian thought to himself what kind of dance this was. He felt that he would die before it was over. The guys standing around were deeply jealous of the protagonist. Every one of them would like to be in Ye Wutian's shoes. The main character told Sita that they dance very closely together. He wanted to offer her something. Situ looked closely at the guy and asked if he didn't like their dance. He was starting to get bored with everything. He even closed his eyes and looked away. The girl looked at him fearfully. Situ slyly told him that he was a rascal. The protagonist remained silent the whole time. The guy thought to himself that if this hottie wanted to play with him, he had nothing to fear. They all danced and danced. Situ was hugging him and not giving him a chance to move away. Suddenly, during the dance, Situ smiled mysteriously at him, but the guy didn't understand why. Ye Wutian squeezed himself harder and harder against the girl. He became more and more careless. Suddenly, he felt the girl knock him hard in the groin. The guy was overcome with pain. The guy grabbed his groin and silently ran towards the direction of the exit. Immediately, he ran with all his might in the direction of the restroom. Ye Wutian was running, and at the same time felt great pain. Finally, he ran to the toilet. All the guests at the party didn't understand why he ran so fast to the restroom. Only Situ smiled enigmatically. She understood why the guy was feeling so bad right now. The protagonist had recovered a little from the pain. He washed himself in the wash basin with cold water. Ye Wutian thought about what had happened during the dance. He was very angry. The guy was annoyed, but he realized he couldn't leave the party now. Then he returned to the hall. At the same time, Situ was sitting at the table drinking wine as if nothing had happened. The guy walked over to the table where the girl was sitting. He suggested that she admit to a mutual defeat. The girl slyly offered him another dance. She wanted to see how long he would last. Ye Wutian humbled himself. He sat down at the table and said that he recognized that he had lost. The protagonist sat there thinking that Situ Wei was a really dangerous person. He realized why Chang Xiaomei had advised him to stay away from Situ. A guy was sitting silently alone at a table at a party, and then Xin Yue came up to him. She very respectfully and gently invited Ye Wutian to dance with her. The protagonist cheerfully and delicately replies to her that he doesn't dance. Xin Yue decided that the guy didn't want to dance with her, and after that she sadly turned away. Ye Wutian told the cheerful girl that he didn't know how to dance. He asked if she could teach him. The girl first timidly and then confidently put her hand in the guy's hand. Xin Yue took him to the dance with her and said he owed her a debt. From the side, Sita was watching everything going on with great attention. Situ didn't feel annoyed. She watched her dancing protagonist. Ye Wutian softly and leisurely danced in the very center of the hall, paired with Xin Yue. The surrounding guys were surprised because the main character was already dancing with Ouyang Xin Yue. Suddenly, the guy stepped his foot on the girl's leg and she cried out. Xin Yue said a little resentfully that the main character really can't dance. Wutian apologized to her and told them to stop now. Xin Yue sternly told him that if she promised to teach him how to dance, she meant she would. They kept dancing. Suddenly, the boy stepped on the girl's foot again. Xin Yue wanted to scream but restrained herself. The guy was looking at her cheerfully. The girl decided not to back down and she told the main character that they would continue. Ye Wutian and further stepped on his girlfriend's feet. She kept shrieking, which attracted the attention of other people. The next time he stepped on her foot, Xin Yue nearly fell off. 20 minutes of the party passed and gradually they danced better and better. The guy became more careful, precise, accurate, and attentive in dancing with the girl. Ye Wutian and Xin Yue were completely distracted from their surroundings. They danced without seeing anything around them. All the surrounding guests enjoyed their dance. They applauded wildly. The main character was very excited because he could dance like a normal person. Xin Yue asked him if she was a good dance teacher for him. The guy said she was a good dance teacher, but it was a big price to pay. The two of them looked at the girl's legs, which were bruised and scratched. The guy said he was a massage therapist. Xin Yue remembered that he was a doctor. They reached the back room. Xin Yue took off her shoes and the guy got ready to start massaging her feet. Only now did the protagonist notice how beautiful and well-groomed Xin Yue's legs are. Ye Wutian was still unable to start the massage. He was amazed by the girl's beautiful legs. Xin Yue angrily shouted at the guy to stop gawking already and help her stop the pain. The guy began to massage her feet gently and tenderly with his hand. He was giving a massage and asked the girl if she was in pain or in a certain place. He told her to be patient because it would stop soon. Xin Yue sat silent and patient. She realized that she would have to wait. The guy was totally into it. He kneaded her feet and toes gently and professionally. Ye Wutian was completely absorbed in the process. He was silent. Xin Yue was also silent and realized that she had to endure for the pain to disappear. Then suddenly, at the most inopportune moment, the main character's phone rang. It was Situ who called him. She told the guy it wasn't fair. He spent a lot of time with her, but he won't break up with Xin Yue. The girl asked him if she was ugly to him and he didn't like her. The guy replied into the phone that it was just a massage, and there was no need to create a misunderstanding. The protagonist turned off his phone, and he thought to himself what kind of nonsense Sita was talking about. Situ suggested that he come back so as not to keep Xin Yue waiting. The guy told her to ignore it. He thought to himself that Xin Yue was easier for him than Situ Wei. After thinking for a bit, Xin Yue asked the guy seriously if he liked Situ. The guy asked the girl if it looked like he liked Situ Wei. Xin Yue told him that she was worried about him, and it would be better for the guy if he didn't get close to Situ. Guy thought to himself in his relationship with Xiaomei and now Xin Yue. As the protagonist thought about it, he realized that Situ Wei had some kind of dark side. Then Ye Wutian happily shouted to the girl that he had already finished the massage. After that, Xinyue looked down at her feet. The guy said it was a good workout for his skills. The girl swiped his Moonstring Club membership card. The guy realized that the owner of the Moonland Club was Xinyue. He told the girl that he had a present for her too. He handed her a pill box, and the girl was glad. She asked if it was medicine for her grandfather. The guy told her it was medicine for her. She took it right away. The protagonist shouted loudly to her not to take it now. The boy frightenedly asked the girl where he could get water. Xinyue said the bathroom was next door. The girl was very surprised, and the guy immediately grabbed her in his arms and carried her. Ye Wutian ran with all his might, holding the girl in his arms. She didn't understand anything. Xinyue was in the bathtub, and she was screaming in fright and didn't know what was going on. She didn't know why there was so much dirt on her. Ye Wutian told her to just wash off the dirt. The girl looked in the mirror and didn't know if it was her. She looked at her face with interest. She noticed that her skin was soft and clean. She couldn't understand how she had been transformed. Xinyue had already calmed down and ran out of the bathroom. The guy was waiting for her near the entrance. She ran up to the main character and said she wanted more. The guy didn't say a word. After a little thought, he answered her sternly to quit this nonsense. Xinyue told the main character that she wanted a little more to look even prettier. Ye Wuqian told her that one pill would be enough. If she ate more than that, it would have no effect. The girl thought about it. She was a little disappointed and annoyed. At the same time, dancing continued at the party. The guests were enjoying themselves in every possible way. Those present noticed the protagonist and Xinyue walking alone down the hallway. As they walked past the other people, everyone was really eyeing the girl. No one could figure out exactly what happened to this girl, but she changed. The surrounding guys noticed that Xinyue was absent for half an hour at most, but managed to look very much better. One guy couldn't believe his eyes. He definitely noticed that Ouyang Xinyue had become even more beautiful. His friend said there was a similar case with Chung Kexin. She suddenly got prettier the day before the banquet. Situ immediately realized that the main character's girlfriend had become more beautiful thanks to the magic remedy. Situ realized that she was not imagining things. She noticed that Ouyang Xinyue was now a sight to behold. Situ approached Ye Wutian and asked how he could be so infatuated with Xinyue that he forgot about her. The boy and his girlfriend stopped silently. The two of them looked at Sita. Here she immediately grabbed the guy's arm and said she'd give him a ride. Situ was still very interested in the magic beauty remedy. She realized that such a remedy was invaluable. Situ led the protagonist away by the hand. Xinyue looked at them silently. Xinyue thought to herself that she had to get the protagonist to side with the Ouyang family at all costs. The secret of the rejuvenation pill was as important as the guy's medical skills. At the same time, the protagonist was already sitting in the car with Situ. Ye Wuqian looked at his girlfriend with interest. He noted that she was wearing a tight dress today. The guy noted to himself that he could see every curve on her beautiful body. Situ saw from the outside that the guy was looking at her, but she didn't say anything. She asked him with feigned surprise why he was looking at her as if he wanted to undress her with his gaze. Ye Wuqian told her they were almost there and prepared to get out of the car. Situ asked the guy if he wanted to tell her something last. She added that he had completely forgotten about her, and she was sad because of that. She added that Xinyue had become very nice thanks to the guy's efforts. The guy said he had nothing to do with Xinyue getting prettier. Situ told him she wanted to go back on her offer. She gave him a new sum of 200 million a year. Ye Wutian said surprised that Situ offered him 200 million just for not curing old man Ouyang. He promised to think about such an offer. The girl told the guy to keep Xinyue around him all the time. She noted that the protagonist was kind to her but indifferent to Situ. She asked him if he didn't like her. Ye Wutian answered her excitedly that he was very much afraid of burning himself against her. Sita asked excitedly, "Is she really that scary?" to the protagonist. She hugged him and told him that there was nothing scary going on. The guy replied that he might not be able to take it. Situ asked him in surprise what could be the matter that he was holding back. The protagonist and his girlfriend felt someone staring at them. A friend of the protagonist was standing on the sidewalk. She asked the guy to explain everything to her in detail. Ye Wutian was silent, and he could think of absolutely nothing to justify himself. Sita indicated to him firmly to get out of the car immediately. At the same moment, Sita drove off at a very high speed. She shouted to the guy to remember her. The protagonist's girlfriend, named Chung Kexin, shouted after him that Situ-Wei really pissed her off. The guy wanted to sneak out. The girl asked him sternly if he wanted to explain to her what it all meant. Ye Wutian said good, naturedly, that he had met Sita for the second time. She wants to give him money for nothing. The girl didn't really believe him. The guy started to tell her that Situ simply wanted to take advantage of him. Chung told him that he would tell her more at home. Ye Wutian spent the whole evening explaining. In the end, his words reassured Chung Kexin. For the next couple of days, the protagonist was practicing the Xuan Qi technique. He had almost reached the second stage in it. At the same time, Situ-Wei repeatedly called to him. She kept making attempts to tempt him. The protagonist did not give in. After that, Chung Kexin found a new rented apartment for them. After that, Ye Wuqian moved there together with her from the hotel. At the same time, Chang Xiaomei's girlfriend was preparing to be discharged from the hospital. The protagonist visited her. He watched her recover. The girl's acquaintance, who was the chief of police, told Yi-Duck to take off her blindfold. The protagonist said that the girl should be fine by now. The guy replied calmly to the supervisor that he needed to learn patience. The Xiaomei girl said fearfully that one should panic then. The guy had told her earlier that he was only half-confident. Ye Wutian told her cheerfully so that the girl would be completely sure that his love for her would remain the same. Xiaomei took his cheek affectionately and told him not to tease her and to take off the bandage. The guy very carefully and gently began to unwind the bandage from the girl's face. The girl was very worried. She was still afraid to open her eye. She didn't know the results of the treatment. In the end, Xiaomei gathered her courage and opened her eye with full confidence. The chief of police and the doctor nearby looked at her in surprise and interest. She asked them to tell her back why they had such a strange reaction. The doctor was very excited. He said he couldn't believe it. Xiaomei didn't understand what had happened to her. She wanted to see for herself and reached for the mirror. Ye Wutian himself grabbed the mirror and told the patient to promise to be his girlfriend. Xiaomei told the boy that when she was a child, her mother told her that her future husband would never get away from her. The boy replied that he had also been told a hard fate when he was a child. The guy added that he had seen her naked. Xiaomei asked the guy how he could ask her to be his girlfriend if he was already living with Chung Kexin. The guy replied that one girl is good, and two girls are better. The doctor and the chief of police were watching the whole conversation. They thought the protagonist was up to his old tricks. The girl Xiaomei shouted to the guy that she would not talk to him. She demanded that he give back the mirror. The guy wanted her consent first. Ye Yutian went to the police chief and told him to witness the girl's consent. She agreed and demanded that the guy give her a mirror. The policeman said that when he returned to the station, he would tell the guys to ignore Chang Xiaomei's weirdness. The guy told the girl that if it's settled, he's giving her the mirror. The girl picked up the mirror and looked at it eagerly. She saw that she was normal again. Xiaomei was very happy, and she was pleased that her face had recovered. Ye Yutian suggested that she immediately check how her breasts were after yesterday. In response, the girl tapped him in the face with her foot and told him he couldn't wait to undress her after all. The girl kicked everyone out of the office and said she would remove the bandage herself. The guy said, reasoning to himself, that he didn't see anything special in the girl. The doctor told the guy that if the girl recovered, they could finally go. Then the guy agreed with him. The policeman asked them, wondering where they were going to go now. Ye Yutian replied that they were going to the country of N. There they would teach the local population wisdom. The doctor and the protagonist got on a plane to the right country and flew. Immediately after landing, they packed their bags and went out to the airport. Then the guy and the doctor left the airport building to meet their delegation. The main character wasn't feeling well, and the doctor asked him why he hadn't said he was afraid of flying before. Ye Wuqian replied that he didn't know that this winged old thing still existed. The doctor was surprised that the guy couldn't be pleased. The doctor added that a car was supposed to come for them. They did. After the airport, they went to the hotel, and there the delegation representatives were waiting for them near the entrance. The boy and the doctor noticed the members of their delegation meeting them. The head of the delegation greeted Dr. Wu. He called him Mr. Quanshin. The head of the delegation was called Mr. Hanja. He was surprised to see the protagonist. The guy greeted Mr. Hanja and said he was glad to meet him here. A doctor with glasses came over. He was from country N. He was surprised that Mr. Wei had been sent from China. He skeptically and derisively called Wei of China a beat general. Mr. Hanja called this doctor by the name of Kim Jae-jen. He added that in any competition there is a winner or a loser. He added that Kim should not be proud of one single victory. Kim Jae-jae reminded Mr. Hanja that he lost last year and promised to smash him to smithereens this year. Dr. Wu and Mr. Hanja were embittered, and they looked at Dr. Kim in silence. Guy remarked to himself that just like old man Wu had said, Dr. Kim was completely unbearable. Kim approached Mr. Wei and offered him a small wager this year. The protagonist thought to himself that he represents the whole of China today, and if he concludes the couples loses, it will affect the whole country. Dr. Kim said there's no need to be frightened about him putting his career on the line. He added that China is full of cowards. Mr. Hanja was very agitated. He said he agreed to the money. Dr. Kim said that if the prude loses, he will kneel before him. Also, the prude would have to admit that Chinese medicine is not comparable to that of the N. Dr. Kim asked his opponent for consent. Hanja was silent for the time being. The doctor asked if he had lost confidence in his abilities or had gotten cold feet. Suddenly, the main character intervened in the conversation. He asked Dr. Kim what he would do if he lost. The doctor's quiet. The guy asked him again what would happen if he lost. The representatives of Country H began to scold Ye Tian. They called him an amateur. Dr. Kim said that if they lose, they will apologize to the Chinese representatives. The protagonist said that an apology would not be enough. He immediately added that Country H is known for its porn and silicone hotties. The doctor was surprised to hear such words. Ye Wutian told his opponent that if Dr. Kim loses, he will have to make it with his colleagues on video and show it to him. Also, Dr. Kim would have to crawl on his hands and knees between the guy's legs. Dr. Wu and his colleagues liked what the main character said. They thought he was peerless. Dr. Kim was angry. Ye Wutian told him that he didn't care who he was. He asked the doctor if he agreed. The doctor said he had a condition. He made another request. The protagonist, if he loses, will have to break both of his arms and never practice medicine again. The boy thought for a moment. He realized to himself that Dr. Kim would not intimidate him. The protagonist agreed. He gave the doctor his name and told him he could get the hell out of here. Mr. Hanja happily thanked the protagonist for everything. Ye Wutian told Hanza not to forget that he represents not only himself, but also the whole of China. He added that they should believe in themselves. A representative of the Chinese delegation told the guy that they had no choice but to believe in his abilities. The main character told him not to worry. He promised to show all the competitors at tomorrow's competition what it's all about. The competition began the next day. Everyone gathered in the hospital payroom where a patient was lying on a bed. The doctor judge said you have to win 2 out of 3 rounds to win the contest. There will be 1 round each day, and contestants are unlimited in methods. All competitions are fair. None of the contestants know anything about the patients. The doctor judge voiced that the first task is to diagnose the patient next to them. The participants can all act together, and then the judges will determine who was most effective. Ye Wutian and Dr. Wu started the competition. They scrutinized the patient on the couch. The patient was lying silent and his eyes were closed. Judging by his facial expressions, he was in severe pain. Country H representatives also looked very closely at the patient. There was silence everywhere. Time flowed inexorably. Soon it was over. The doctor judge says time is up. The participants should go with him to the conference room. They will have an hour to present their findings and offer treatment. The participants sat down at the table and began to think. They had sheets of paper in front of them. Time passed inexorably. The protagonist asked his opponents what their thoughts were. The representatives of Country H said that they did not understand much without dialogue with the patient and examination. They could not make a diagnosis in this way. All these words were listened to by Dr. Wu. He was silent and very happy. Mr. Hanja went to Dr. Wu and said that the patient he saw had migraine symptoms. He suggested reducing the influence of fire and air elements on the body and supporting the vital energy of the liver and kidney. The doctor agreed that the patient had migraine. Dr. Wu asked the protagonist if he had any objections. The guy agreed and offered to write a prescription. One of the prescriptions was taken to the doctor judge. He examined it carefully and studied it. The doctor judge looked at it and said that the first prescription was written in Western style and it was good. Dr. Kim said to the protagonist that his self-confidence from yesterday won't last long. The guy told him to think better of his own ego. At this time, the doctor judge was examining another prescription. He asked the participants who the author was. One of the physician participants said that the author of the prescription is Ye Wutian. Dr. Kim suggested that the protagonist had written nonsense in the prescription, which even made the doctor judge angry. The main character wondered who couldn't figure out what he had misspelled in the recipe. The doctor judge was indignant, and he said strictly that even a chicken with its paw would write clearer. Dr. Wu thought it would be difficult for mere mortals to read the main character's handwriting. Ye Wutian relaxed. He said that if the doctor's Chinese was bad, he could read aloud. One participant took umbrage at such a suggestion from the protagonist. Dr. Kim shouted to the protagonist that no cheap tricks would help him win. The boy took his prescription from the judge's doctor at that time. He immediately asked Dr. Kim if he had forgotten his promise. The main character started to tell that the patient is in severe pain and has a red face. The tip of his tongue and his skin is dry and yellowish, and he has problems with his pulse. This proves that the patient has kidney problems. Then he started to read the prescription for cure. The doctor judge was very surprised. He realized that the protagonist had found out everything correctly. The fellow indicated that his potion should be prepared in a vat of water and taken by the glass 3 times a day. The doctor judge hesitated. He read the prescription once more and delved into it. The judge thought to himself that although he represents Country H, he must remain impartial and evaluate both sides objectively. After a little thought, Dr. Judge said that in this contest, China would win. Mr. Hanja was surprised. He couldn't believe that the main character had won. The other contestants were talking amongst themselves. They discussed that the organizers of the competition would not test the proposed treatment on the patient. Dr. Kim went to the judge and asked how they could lose. He resented the fact that the method could not be evaluated without seeing the result. Late at night, the protagonist and members of his country's delegation were celebrating their victory. They went to a nice and expensive restaurant and ordered a fancy dinner with lots of wine. Overjoyed by the current victories, they continued to consume food and socialize among themselves. Mr. Hanja told the main character that he helped them a lot today. After a little thought, the protagonist told everyone present that this was their common victory. The guy thought to himself that there was no room for medical talk at this banquet, so he could drink all night with the others. Dr. Wu laughed and said that no one could compete with Ye Wutian's medical knowledge. He turned to Joe and asked if he knew any local beauties for the protagonist. Joe laughed and said that the ladies he knew would be too old for Ye Wutian. After saying these words, Joe turned to the main character and asked for him to confirm them. The main character was already quite drunk. He said that the best women are married. A little tired, Ye Wutian decided that he should go for a walk and got up from the table and went to the door. It was already night outside. It was very quiet around. The boy was walking by himself down the street. The excessive consumption of wine made it difficult for him to walk. He swayed from side to side. Eventually, he hit a wall and realized he couldn't walk straight. He decided to take some medication to keep him from getting even sicker. Then suddenly, the protagonist was very attracted to something up ahead. Looking ahead, he saw a very recognizable silhouette of a girl dear to him. Ye Wutian couldn't believe his eyes. He saw Xin Yue in front of him. He didn't understand where she could have come from. The main character decided to say hello to her, and he called her by name and said she was beautiful. Suddenly, someone hit him very hard on the head with a truncheon. The guy fell silently to the ground. An unknown man with a baton stood next to him. The night flew by, and the next morning the guy woke up in a hotel somewhere. Sea was high, and it was shining through his window, and he was lying on his bed. When the protagonist came to his senses, he felt that his head was splitting. He kept wondering who had hit him like that yesterday. He decided it wasn't who hit him that mattered, it was why. He didn't realize where his clothes were. Then he remembered that he'd had a badass romantic dream last night. At night, he dreamed that he spent time with a beautiful and familiar girl. The guy remembered perfectly well during the lovemaking. Then suddenly a very strange and shocking realization struck him. He froze. Only now the guy noticed that he wasn't alone on the bed. There was a girl lying silently next to him. He looked to the side and was finally convinced that a familiar Xin Yue was lying next to him. He couldn't understand how come he slept with her, what she was doing in N country. Ye Wutian thought deeply about what had happened, and he didn't understand who could have set it all up. Then the phone rang shrilly and the guy even flinched in surprise. He picked up the phone and was answered on the other end by a voice unfamiliar to him. After a short pause, the interlocutor asked the protagonist caustically if he liked his gift. The guy shouted angrily into the receiver and asked the caller why he had arranged all this and how Xin Yue had ended up with him. The interlocutor immediately hung up and the protagonist found himself alone in complete silence. The guy was really pissed off. He threw the pipe on the floor with all his might. He turned to the girl and said with an excuse that it was some kind of setup. He asked her how she ended up in his room. Xin Yue sat and said softly to the guy to forget about today. The guy was taken aback by the request. He reminded the girl that she doesn't even let men into her car. He demanded that she tell him in detail what had happened. Suddenly the girl shouted to him nervously that she didn't know anything herself. The girl cried and confirmed that she knew nothing. She confirmed that someone had played a cruel trick on them. The guy asked her if she would like to find the culprit behind everything that had happened to them. The girl gritted her teeth in anger. She decided to herself that she would find the bastard. The silence lasted a very long time. The girl was preparing to get up and leave the room. She started to get dressed. The protagonist apologized to her in return. The girl stood up and said that the guy had absolutely no reason to apologize. He had nothing to do with it. Xin Yue told the guy to act like nothing happened from now on. She added that things would stay the same between them. After waiting a bit, the guy asked the girl seriously if she was okay with all this. The guy thought to himself that the girl was so cold-blooded that he felt uncomfortable. Xin Yue asked him if he would want her to resent and cry, and what would it change. She added that you can't go back to the past. The girl went to the door and grabbed the handle. She told the guy once again that nothing had happened between them today. Opening the door, she said goodbye. The door closed behind her. The boy thought hard. He didn't know what to do. He kept repeating the girl's words to himself. He realized it would be very hard to forget. Then he noticed several bloodstains on the sheet beside him. The boy decided to himself that a number of things could not be forgotten even if he wanted to. He took a pair of scissors and with a confident motion cut a blood-dot-covered piece out of the sheet. Ye Wutian walked down the corridor of the hotel. He could not understand which slippery bastard had set things up so that even Ouyang Xin Yue did not know anything. The guy decided to himself that if the intruder had photos or videos of him having fun with the girl in bed at night, it could be a fatal blow to her. He met Dr. Wu in the hallway. He said that the competition was about to start and they should hurry up. Mr. Hanja ran into the hallway and greeted the protagonist. Hanja came closer and looked at Ye Duck and realized that something was wrong. The prude asked the guy suspiciously why he reeked of expensive perfume. Then Hanja said cheerfully that the protagonist had been out with the ladies. He asked how he spent the night. The protagonist answered him angrily to keep his mouth shut. Hanja asked Dr. Wu what happened to the main character. The doctor told him that something bad happened to Ye Chuan during the night, and that's why he was freaking out. A little later they arrived at the hospital to continue the competition. All the participants sat silently and concentrated on their couches and waited for the beginning. Ye Wutian sat silent and looked very sad. This was immediately noticed by the others. The other contestants couldn't figure out why the protagonist was so gloomy. They thought it was because he had too much to drink last night. There were footsteps. Dr. Kim and his assistant approached. Dr. Kim said the fool can't wait to be taught a lesson. This is when Dr. Kim turned to the main character and told him that there would be no mercy today. Dr. Wu heard that. He thought to himself that this would be the end for the boy. Ye Wuqian looked angrily at his interlocutor and said very rudely for him to disappear. Dr. Kim said that China should not get complacent because they won one round. He added that China has lost the competition a couple years in a row. The main character recovered and told Dr. Kim that he had something important to say. The guy asked the interlocutor that Country H is famous for its plastic surgery. Ye Wutian shouted loudly to Dr. Kim that he was challenging him in front of everyone. The guy threateningly said he'd prove that Country H plastic surgery is a total waste. After these words of the protagonist, there was complete silence in the room. The Country H representatives laughed. They were surprised that the guy decided as if he knew better than them about cosmetic surgery. Dr. Kim interrogated the protagonist. Does he really want to challenge them once again? Ye Wutian threatened his interlocutor that he would trample him on his own field. Dr. Kim was very angry at these words. He did not know what to say in response. Mr. Hanja yelled that there was no way they could beat plastic surgery. He demanded that the protagonist be stopped. Then Hanja felt a hand on his shoulder from behind. When he turned around, he saw Dr. Wu. He said that the protagonist didn't raise a fuss for no reason. The judge said that if both sides agree, the topic for round 2 will be cosmetic surgery. The referee added to the country representatives to begin preparations for the second round. The contest has begun. Another patient entered the room. He was very weak. The judge told all the participants that their assignment today was to help this patient. He added that the patient has severe scoliosis. He cannot straighten his back. The participating doctors are obliged to alleviate the patient's symptoms. Dr. Wu said that scoliosis itself is not dangerous if treated in time. He added that the patient had an advanced case. The judge added that scoliosis at this stage cannot be cured. Therefore, he specified that the participants should only alleviate the symptoms. Mr. Hanja looked closely at the X-ray of the patient's back. Hanja pointed out that the human spinal cord is important in the motor process. He indicated that if they made a mistake, the patient could become completely paralyzed. Dr. Kim gave his conclusion. He advised not to take risks and to use an orthopedic back brace. Yuchin was silent at this time. He opened a packet of some potion and consumed it. The boy thought to himself that the powder would make him stronger for a while. Immediately afterwards, he went to the patient. The boy went up to the sick man and tapped him on the back with his hand. He fell to the floor immediately. This method of treatment horrified all the participants. They did not know what to say. Everyone stood there and couldn't move. The patient with the bad back was still lying on the floor. Dr. Kim was stunned. He shouted angrily, not realizing what the protagonist had just done. Dr. Kim added that you can't hit the spine like that because it is attempted murder. Gradually, the patient came to his senses. He could not understand who had hit him so hard. Then the people around him noticed that the sick man was able to straighten up on his own. They couldn't believe their eyes. The patient himself was surprised that he was able to straighten his back and stand up on his own. He rejoiced and said with tears in his eyes that he could stand again. Ye Wutian won this competition. The participants were amazed that the protagonist was able to cure an incurable disease with a single blow. The main character pointed at his rival Dr. Kim and began to tell him. Ye Wutian told Dr. Kim that they would see each other during the next trial. The protagonist turned around and left. The representatives of Country H looked at him angrily. Ye Wuqian together with Dr. Wu were leaving as winners. But there were still challenges left. Dr. Kim looked at the protagonist and wished he would die soon. That's when the referee doctor came over. He told Dr. Kim that even though they lost now, the final test would be cosmetic surgery. They can't lose at home or they'll embarrass themselves in N country. The referee added angrily that an ordinary victory would not be enough. They must completely trample their opponents. Dr. Kim slyly and angrily said he had an idea. Afterwards, Dr. Kim told the press about his bet with Kutian. This was meant to undermine the Chinese team's confidence in winning. After such words, the N country was outraged. Dr. Kim, speaking on television, specifically pointed out that the Chinese have challenged their plastic surgery. The people were indignant. They didn't believe that Ye Wutian could defeat them on their own field.